Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the fourth part of What If Deku Was in Love with Ibara. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Breaking news straight out of Tokyo: the hero killer strikes again. Early this morning, the pro-hero Mr. Brave was found severely wounded in the eastern part of the city after a brief run-in with the known serial killer. As of right now, he is still in critical condition and there has been no word yet on any possible leads pertaining to the whereabouts of the man calling himself Stain. Citizens in the area are encouraged to stay vigilant and report any suspicious activity to the local authorities. The voice of the announcer could be heard on the television in the living room. Damn, another one, Takage thought as she walked through the hallway. Also, yet another mysterious bombing in Ishikawa Prefecture. This makes 3 in the last month and police have yet to identify those responsible for these atrocious acts of villainy. Holy hell, Nana, Takage said from her spot on the couch as she scarfed down a handful of pretzels. The woman had the next few days off from class and decided to spend her free time back home. Things sure are getting out of control, aren't they? I'll say, the younger Takage sibling agreed. So how'd you get all dolled up for? The woman asked in a slightly invasive tone. It was a rare sight to see the girl in anything other than a pair of gym shorts and a t-shirt when she didn't have school. And judging by the way she was dressed, she was definitely looking to impress somebody. Nowhere, just hanging out with some friends. The younger sibling kept her answer simple and attempted to rush out of the door. Knowing her sister, she was going to try and pry into her personal life. And the last thing she wanted was for her to find out that she was going on a date of all things. Sure you are. Anyways, I'll see you later. Have fun freeloading, and make sure that you restock Dad's pretzels before he gets home. See you later, runt was all she managed to say before Takage closed the door behind her. Without missing a beat, the elder Takage sibling pulled out her phone and scrolled over to her contacts list. She already knew that her sister was up to something based on how she was acting. And there was no way in hell she wasn't about to find out what it was. With a quick swipe of the finger, the green-haired college student pressed the call button on her phone and held the device up to her ear. Hello, the voice of Tetsu said on the other side of the line. Tetsu, how you been? Have you gotten those eyelashes trimmed yet? I'm doing well, Nano. What do you want? Why did you automatically assume that I wanted something? What? A girl can't just have a friendly chat with her favorite irony-eating little brother. We both know that's not how you operate. Yeah, you're right, the woman conceded. Anyways, you wouldn't happen to know what Setsuna is doing today, would you? No, the silver-haired boy slightly hesitated. To his credit, Tetsu was a very honest guy. But that also meant that he was a less than stellar liar. You're not lying to me, are you? Of course not. Look, metalhead, we both know that the runt tells you everything. And if she's not spending the day with you, that means she's going out with someone else. So, either you come clean and tell me where she's going, or I show your mom that picture I took when I caught. Okay, the silver-haired teen hastily sputtered out. I'll tell where she's going. Just for the love of God, don't do that to me. Excellent. Time seemed to drone on as Midoriya patiently waited for Takage to arrive. The two of them agreed to meet at the water fountain near the festival entrance, and it was getting closer and closer to their scheduled rendezvous. In hindsight, the boy probably should have arrived a full 30 minutes earlier than he was supposed to. But he didn't want to run the risk of being late. Overall, it seemed to be a perfect day. The sun was shining, the mid-afternoon air was smooth, and there was just the right amount of cloud cover. From what he could hear, there was a lot of excitement going on in the festival. The green-haired boy had never been to one before. But from everything he knew about them, there were supposed to be a ton of concession stands and games. So there was definitely a lot of excitement to be had. Maybe I should have worn something more appropriate, the boy thought to himself while looking down at his outfit and wondering if he should have tried putting on something more traditional. At the moment, the green-haired teen was wearing a short-sleeve, black button-up shirt, some khaki pants, and his signature red shoes. He would have preferred wearing one of his regular t-shirts, but according to his dad, he needed to look at least somewhat presentable. Luckily, he was somehow able to make it to the barber shop before it closed last night. Yo, Izuku, a familiar voice called his name. The telekinesis user turned around and was met with the sight of Takage rapidly approaching him with a smile on her face. As it turns out, the girl also decided to forego traditional clothing and opted for something more modern. Takage was wearing a sleeveless blue shirt and a white skirt along with a pair of black socks that came up to about the midpoint of her thigh. Hello, Setsuna. The boy nervously greeted with a wave. What's up? Wow, you got here pretty early. Were you looking forward to our date that much? The girl wasted no time in getting the fun started. Well, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't late is all. It's cool. I must admit that I was pretty excited about today. I even made sure to catch an early train all the way over here. That's good to know, he replied. Mizuku, she began with a devious smirk and striking a pose. This is the part where you're supposed to compliment my outfit. Go ahead. It's nice. You look really cute, he admitted with a wobbly smile. You think so? I had a hard time picking out what to wear last night. I'm not really into wearing kimonos, so this is what I went with. Tell me, does this skirt make my butt look flat? She innocently asked while posing with her hips out and a hand behind her head. This is one of those questions where no matter what my answer is, you're going to tease me about it, right? HMPH. Takage folded her arms indignantly while slightly smirking. You're finally learning, good. She continued before grabbing the boy by his hand, the small gesture being enough to cause his heart rate to jump. He already knew that Takage was pretty forward, but he wasn't expecting hand-holding right out the gate. As much as this surprised him, he didn't make any effort to let go. You look pretty nice too, and I see you even cut your hair again. It's nice to know that you got all dolled up for little Almi. Thanks, no problem, she replied. Now, there's a ton of stuff to do and we got all afternoon to enjoy this place. I remember you saying that you've never been to a festival before, so allow me to be your guide. So what are we going to do first, he inquired. We're gonna go play some games and win us some prizes, the girl announced with a slight gleam in her eyes. True to her word, the game section of the festival was the first spot where Takage took her date. As expected, the area was absolutely filled with people of all ages running around and having a good time. Midoriya quietly gulped as he looked around. Like he had said many times before, the boy wasn't exactly good with crowds. He was so used to being by himself for most of life that the idea of being in such a densely populated area was a bit nerve-wracking. Alright, now where should we go first, Takage asked, unaware of the boy's growing anxiety. No clue, I'm not really sure what goes on at these things. Good point. Most of the games here aren't too difficult, but we should start with something simple. She tapped her finger to her chin. A few seconds passed as the girl's eyes scanned across the area before spotting an empty stand a bit further down the path. How about ring toss? It's pretty easy and they have some good prizes. She pointed. Yeah, sounds like fun. He smiled. Well then what are we waiting for? Let's go win us some cool stuff, the girl announced before once again grabbing his hand and pulling him forward. This time, however, Takage took the liberty of interlocking their fingers together. You're cool with me holding your hand, right? She asked, genuinely curious if she was moving too fast. Yeah, of course, was his honest answer. Good. She gave him a toothy smirk. Once the young duo were at the ring toss stand, they took a moment to look things over. It wasn't uncommon for games like this to be rigged in some sort of way. In fact, Takage could remember this one time she went to a festival as a kid where all of the prizes for the shooting games were actually glued to the shelves. But everything seemed to be in order from what they could tell, and some of the prizes actually looked really cool. More specifically, there was dinosaur plushie that the girl had her eye on. It didn't take long for the two to pay for their rings and get started. The rules were pretty simple. You start with 10 rings per person, and that was how many attempts that you were given. The bottles themselves were stacked in a giant square on the table and were color coordinated between clear, green, and black. Clear bottles would get you a small prize, green would get you a medium, and naturally black would get you a large one. The catch though was that there were significantly less black and green bottles than clear ones. On top of that, all the bottles were made of glass, which meant that the rings would bounce of them pretty easily. Alright, here goes nothing, Takage announced with confidence as she made her first attempt, only for her ring to bounce in between a few clear bottles before flying off the table. Dang, it was a good throw. Midoriya attempted to reassure her. You almost had it. Thanks for the vote of confidence, she sarcastically replied. Now it's your turn. The green-haired boy took a deep breath before setting eyes on his target. He decided to aim high and make an attempt at one of the black bottles near the center of the table. He had no idea if there was a specific kind of technique that he should be using, but he figured that he might get lucky. With a rather smooth underhand toss, the boy made his attempt. For a brief moment it seemed as though he was going to score the black bottle, however the ring bounced off as soon as it made contact. Fortunately, Lady Luck was on his side today and the ring ended up landing on one of the green bottles. Winner, the woman behind the counter announced. Wow, and on your first toss too. Nice job, kid. You get to pick out any medium-sized prize that you want. Lucky. A slightly jealous Takage elbowed him on the arm. Midoriya looked behind her to where all the prizes were hanging up on the wall. To be honest, there was nothing available that caught his eye. But there was one item that he would be able to get his hands on. I'll take the dinosaur plushie on the left, he told the woman while pointing to the item in question, earning a rather surprised look from his date. Good choice. The lady clapped her hands together and walked over to the prize wall. The green-haired girl then took the moment and leaned up a bit closer on her date and whispered to him. Why that one, she asked. All Midoriya could do was blush and awkwardly rub the back of his head. I noticed you eyeing it a minute ago and it seemed like a nice pick. Oh, the girl gushed dramatically. Aren't you just the sweetest fluffball ever? Gee guess. So tell me, she pulled him in close and lowered her tone. Did you use your quirk to score that prize? What? No, he shouted so the woman couldn't hear him. I couldn't do something like that. That's cheating. Besides, Recovery Girl said I shouldn't use my powers until after tomorrow. Yeah, I thought so. The girl shrugged. You're way too much of straight shooter for that. Alright, here you go. The woman suddenly appeared in front of them and presented the young duo with their reward. It was a red and blue doll in the shape of Velociraptor. Coincidentally, this just so happens to be Takage's favorite type of dinosaur. Midoriya took the item from the woman and then proceeded to hand it to Takage, who graciously accepted it before hugging it close to her body and grinning like a madwoman. Hoping to capitalize on their success, the two greenettes used their remaining rings to try and win another prize. Unfortunately for them, the rest of their throws didn't yield the results that they wanted. With no more rings left, the two decided to cut their losses and take another look around the area to see what the festival had to offer. After 30 minutes of walking around and trying their hands at a couple of more games, the young duo came upon a mask stand that didn't currently have any other customers. "Hey, we should get some masks as souvenirs," Takage happily suggested while pointing to the vendor. "You think so?" The boy turned his gaze over to the stand in question. They were close enough to where he could see the wide array of cartoonish and traditional style masks hanging up on the rack behind the counter. And from what he could tell, most of them looked really cheap. "Heck yeah, come on," she wasted no time in pulling him along. Once they were right in front of the stand, the two took a moment to get a better look at what there was to offer. There was a wide selection of masks of all ranging from old-era cartoons to custom ones that looked to be hand-painted. Midoriya could recognize a lot of them from some of his old comic books and shows that he watched as a kid. But there were others that he had no clue about. "I think you should pick that one." Takage patted him on the shoulder and pointed to one on the center shelf. The item in question was a plastic, white rabbit mask with the image of a tree painted onto the right side of the face. The boy would be lying if he said that it didn't look nice, and it was well within his price range since it was only 500 yen. "Why that one?" he asked the girl. "Well, the kanji you use to spell your name means Green Valley, right? It seems like it would be a good fit," was her response. "That makes sense," the boy acquiesced. "Which one do you think I should get?" she followed up, causing the boy to look around the shelves. The green-haired teen took a moment to think about his selection before pointing to a blue and white devil mask with a white monobrow and large canine teeth at the top. "That one?" "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious about his decision. "It's got a lot of personality, kinda like you do." He smiled. "Geez, Izuku, when the hell did you become such a smooth talker? I'm starting to think the whole timid, shy guy routine was just an act." The girl began laughing, loud enough to draw the gazes of a few passerbys. Seeing as they were pretty happy with the selections, the two students quickly paid for their souvenirs. Well, actually, Takage was the one that paid for them. Midoriya tried to protest, but the girl insisted on covering the price since he already got her the dinosaur plushie back at the ring toss stand. "Hey, I gotta go to the little hero's room. Be right back," Takage told Midoriya as the two made their way past the event stage where some local high school band was performing. "Okay," he nodded. While the girl made her way to the bathroom, Midoriya moved a bit further down the path and planted himself under a large tree that provided him quite a bit of shade. The green-haired boy was having a really good time so far, and he was happy that Takage appeared to be as well. He was absolutely certain that he was going to mess things up at some point. But up to now, everything was going smoothly. "Oh shit dude, you were right," a male voice suddenly announced from nearby. "See, I told you that it was him," another said in response. Midoriya directed his attention to where the outburst came from and immediately jerked his head in the opposite direction. For a split second, the green-haired boy panicked and thought about walking away. But he knew damn well that he couldn't just abandon his date like that. Once he got himself recomposed, Midoriya simply pretended that he wasn't paying the individuals any attention. Unfortunately for him, the two of them had other plans. "Yo, Deku," one of the boys called out to him. The two young men in question looked to be about his age and were still wearing their school uniforms. One had short, brown hair with droopy eyes, while the other looked pretty normal with his black hair and black eyes. "Oh man, I haven't seen you in ages," the black-haired one waved at him, only to be met with silence. As luck would have it, the two boys didn't get the hint and walked right up to the green-haired teen. To his credit, Midoriya tried to act as cool as he could. But considering the fact that he was now within arm's reach of two of his former bullies, he could already feel his body begin to tense up. "Yo Deku, how have you been man? How long's it been? Like almost a year, right?" "What do you want?" Midoriya asked in a dry tone while not bothering to look their way. "We thought we saw you earlier and just wanted to see if it was really you. Not a lot of people are running around with green hair and freckles, so it was a pretty safe bet." The brown-haired one laughed. "Is that all?" "Yeah," the boy replied, slightly taken aback by how the greenette was speaking to them. "If that's all you wanted, then you can go on your way and leave me alone." That comment was more than enough for the two boys to give each other a set of curious glances. They were absolutely certain that the guy they were talking to was Midoriya. The green hair and freckles was more than enough proof of that. The last time they had seen him, the boy was still a nervous and stuttering mess. Now he was acting all cold and aloof. "What, now that you're some big shot student, you think you're too good to talk to us? You know, it was a surprise seeing you of all people in the big sports festival. Your match with Bakugo was pretty crazy. Seriously, none of our classmates believed us when we told them that we used to go to school with you guys. We all knew that Bakugo was amazing, but you pretty much stole the show." The other boy's tone then shifted slightly. "Sawyer Quirk, how long have you none of your business." Midoriya quickly cut him off, his voice now laced with a very noticeable amount of venom. "Geez, what the hell's your problem, dude?" The brunette teen scowled. "A couple of classmates dropped by to say hello and you can't even bother to look our way. You think that because you're a hero candidate now you can just look down on the rest of us. That's pretty funny coming from someone who used to torment me for being quirkless." A brief moment of painfully awkward silence passed between the trio as those words sunk in. Midoriya's comment was enough for the other two to pause and give each other a series of uncomfortable looks. "Look Midoriya," the black-haired teen started. "We're really sorry for how we used to treat you." "No you're not." "Huh, if you were really sorry then you wouldn't have done what you did in the first place," he told them. In truth, the fact that they even bothered to give him some half-assed apology irritated the green-haired boy quite a bit. Look man, we know what we did to you was wrong. The black-haired teen continued. Running around with Bakugo and letting him pick on you all the time was not cool. But come on dude, you know how scary that guy can be. If we said anything, then he would have tried to blow one of us up. Plus you kind of brought it on yourself for always talking about wanting to be a hero in front of him when you didn't even have a quirk yet. We all know the guy has a massive ego. But I guess that doesn't really matter now since it turns out that you're actually pretty powerful, huh? So, the fact that I do have a quirk now makes it all okay. The green-haired teen finally faced the brunette boy and looked him in the eye. He held his gaze for a solid 5 seconds before letting out an exasperated sigh. Look, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told Bakugo. I've done some growing up recently, and I'm not the same pushover that I used to be. There was no point coming over here and trying to apologize to me because I don't accept it. The only reason you even bothered to do this was because I now have a quirk. I doubt you'd feel the same way if you thought that I was still quirkless. Both boys were taken aback by how blunt Midoriya was being. They were so used to the boy being jumpy and feeble that the way he was speaking to them made him sound like an entirely new person. Neither of them expected him to be totally forgiving. But they certainly weren't expecting this. Hell, they would go so far as to say that his personality was totally different. Hey Deku, just because you... Oh, there you are babe, the voice of Takage suddenly interjected, much to Midoriya's relief. The green-haired girl wasted no time in putting herself right in the middle of the three boys and grabbing onto Midoriya's hand with her own. I was wondering where you ran off to, she continued with a smile. Babe, one of the boys said in a curious tone. Sorry for taking so long, hot stuff. The girl said. It's fine, the green-haired boy replied. So, who are these guys? Are they friends of yours? She asked while putting extra emphasis on that word in particular. Thankfully, Midoriya was able to catch on to what she was doing and was more than happy to play along. No, not at all, he calmly answered. Oh, too bad. Takage shrugged before turning towards the two teens. Sorry boys, but me and Izuku are in the middle of a date right now. Catch you later. Before either teen could say a word, the girl started walking down the path with her date in tow, leaving the two boys completely gobsmacked by what just happened. Not only was the once shy and meek Deku now super strong with a flashy quirk, apparently he had a hot girlfriend to boot. Whatever happened to the guy in the last year, he certainly did change a lot. Thanks for that, Midoriya said to the girl once they were a good bit of distance away from his former classmates. I saw how intense your face looked when I was walking up. Obviously you wanted to be as far away from those guys as possible. Takage replied. Yeah, you're right about that, he said with a weak chuckle. So what was up with that anyway? They were just some guys that used to go to school with. Oh, was all she said. Obviously there was a bit more to it than that, but she wasn't going to pry into it too much. Instead, the girl just wanted to get back to having a good time on their date. Thankfully, her and Midoriya were on the same page in that regard. So, what did you want to do next? Let's grab a bite to eat. All this walking around has worked up quite the appetite. Sounds good to me, he smiled. Eventually Midoriya and Takage found themselves walking through the concession stands. There were so many options to choose from that the young duo didn't even know where to start. For Midoriya, the boy wasn't craving anything in particular. However, he was hoping to avoid any junk food if he could help it. As for Takage, the girl wasn't really in the mood for something sweet, so she was determined to find something savory to satisfy her hunger. With some luck, they might even find a place that sells some yakitori. For the next few minutes, the two greenettes wandered between different concession stands in hopes of finding something good. Most of what everyone was serving was either some type of dessert or candy, which made sense considering that it was what most people prefer to eat during the summertime festivals, especially in the middle of the afternoon. Just when the two were about to give up, a familiar voice caught their attention. You two look like you're having trouble. Midoriya's head turned so fast that you could almost hear the vertebrae in his neck crack. Sure enough, the boy's suspicions were confirmed when he found himself staring into a set of pink eyes. Anohanessen, Brainboy Takage echoed, calling the quirkless teen by his new unofficial nickname. What's up? He smiled at the two while giving a polite wave. What are you doing here? Working. He quickly pointed upwards to the sign that read Yukihiro Udon in big bold letters above his head. I didn't know you worked at an udon shop, Takage said to the boy jokingly. I assumed you'd be working in some sort of lab with high-tech lasers and robots flying all over the place. The black-haired teen let out a quick laugh at the girl's words. Well, I'm only 16. They don't exactly let people our age around stuff like that. Good point. I didn't know that you were going to be here. Midoriya chimed in. Yeah, my boss got us this spot at the last minute and I'm working the afternoon shift. It's technically my day off, so he's paying me double for doing this. And I couldn't exactly refuse the extra cash, Anohana explained. Can't argue with that. So how have you been? Takage asked the boy. You getting a lot of customers? Business has been pretty steady. The only problem is that it's starting to get pretty hot out here, he replied while pretending to fan himself off with his hand. At the moment, Anohana was currently wearing a long-sleeve, black t-shirt underneath his apron. Takage was about to make a comment about how his choice of attire was only contributing to his current predicament. But the girl's mind flashed back to that time when she first met the boy during their internships and how she noticed the very deliberately placed scars on his wrists. So for the moment, she just held her tongue. So, what are you two up to? The black-haired teen then asked. We're on a date, Takagi answered without missing a beat. Wow, you actually convinced Midoriya-kun to go out with you on an actual date? Oh man, now I've seen it all. And what's that supposed to mean? Midoriya asked, only slightly offended. Only that you're the most socially awkward person that I've ever met in my life, Anohana retorted. He's got a point, Izuku, Takagi added on with a not-so-subtle smirk. After a few more laughs at the green-haired boy's expense, Anohana decided to switch topics. So, you two looking for something to eat? Yeah, they both said in unison. Well, you're in luck. I just so happen to know of a place that serves some pretty good udon noodles. From what I hear, the guy serving them is pretty cool too. That was a pretty nice sales pitch, Brain Boy. The girl laughed. So what have you got? Well, we have a few selections. But our special is the new chicken udon that we've been serving at the restaurant for the last couple of months. The stuff practically sells out every day during the lunch rush. What's so great about it? Aside from the noodles themselves being good, the chicken is marinated in a freshly made spicy peanut sauce and grilled the morning of. It's got a nice bit of kick to it, but not enough to overwhelm your senses. How long did it take you to rehearse that little spiel? I'm actually the one who wrote it. The boy shot back to the girl's joke. It does sound pretty good, Midoriya interjected. I remember you saying that it was one of your more popular dishes. And I actually wouldn't mind trying a bowl. What about you? He then turned towards Takagi. Count me in, the girl smiled. In practically no time, Anohana whipped up 2 fresh bowls of udon noodles and served the 2 greenettes their meals. To say that the dish was delicious would be a gross understatement. After one bite, it became very apparent as to why the stuff sold out as much as the boy claimed it did. So, how'd your presentation go? Midoriya asked in between bites. A total success, the quirkless boy beamed confidently. I've already got a few offers from some pretty big schools. And I'm actually heading to Island tomorrow to get an early peek at the big expo. It's the reason why I'm working today. Everything's going to be paid for, but a little extra spending money doesn't hurt. That's great, the green-haired teen almost shouted. He knew that the boy was pretty busy with this thing for the last couple of months. But he was happy that all of his hard work finally paid off. Well, I'm happy to hear that everything went smoothly, said Takagi after slurping down a few more noodles. So what was your big presentation about anyway? Nothing serious. I just created a new water purifying chemical that can be used on an industrial level. The boy answered nonchalantly. Yeah, that sounds way too complex for me to even want to understand. The girl deadpanned. She already knew the guy was a genius, but something like that sounded like it was a major scientific breakthrough. Oh my god, these noodles are amazing. I can see why they're so popular. Seriously, and the chicken, it cooked to perfection. Midoriya agreed with his date. I'm glad you like it. We make tons of this stuff every day. The only downside is that cleanup is a hassle. Why is that? The sauce itself is actually pretty flammable because of the peanut oil that we use to make it. We need to scrub down the stoves and grills extra hard to avoid any potential mishaps back at the restaurant. He explained. Sucks. It is what it is. After a few more minutes of talking and catching up, Midoriya and Takagi decided to continue on with their date. Business started picking up at the udon stand and they didn't want to bother the quirkless teen anymore while he was trying to work. With one final wave, they bid him farewell and promised to show up at the orphanage after their summer training camp was over with. Now that they had some food in their guts, the 2 teenagers found an empty bench in a less populated area of the nearby park to sit down and relax their feet. Both of them had been having a wonderful time so far and were really happy with how their first official date was turning out. Seeing as the 2 of them now had a bit of privacy, Takagi decided to take advantage of this moment. The green-haired girl scooted closer to Midoriya and leaned her head on his shoulder while interlocking their fingers together. I've had a really great time so far, Izuku. Me too, he answered honestly. Under normal circumstances, being this close to a girl would leave him a fumbling mess. But considering that they had spent about half of the outing holding hands of all things, Midoriya found himself actually being able to keep his cool for once. Thanks again for getting me this adorable raptor plushie. I can't wait to add to my collection. He tilted his head in confusion. I may or may not have a collection of dinner-themed dolls and figurines in my room. A barely noticeable tinge of pink appeared on the girl's cheeks at her admission. Oh, cool, the boy replied. A brief few seconds of silence lingered in the air between them before Midoriya finally worked up the nerve to broach a topic that had been on his mind all day. So I know this is probably not the best time to ask this. But so are we like dating? The girl finished his question for him. Well, this is our 3rd date, and it's pretty obvious that we're both into each other. So I don't think that saying we are is too off the mark. A confused Midoriya stated. Yeah, I'm counting those first 2 not dates as well. She shrugged. All the boy could do was give out a slight laugh at the girl's bluntness. I guess that makes sense. Takagi couldn't help the slight smile that formed on her face at the boy's words. In truth, she was glad that he was the one to bring up the topic because she herself planned on doing it later on in the day. But now that they were finally having the talk, there was no point in beating around the bush. But are you sure that you want to date me though? Midoriya continued on while twiddling his thumbs. Why wouldn't I be? Well, I'm not really experienced when it comes to this kind of stuff. I mean, I've never really had friends before, let alone tried my hand at dating. And honestly, I'm not really the best looking guy out there. While as long as we're being honest, I don't really have too much experience in dating either. I mean, the only real frame of reference I have is watching my aunt strike out with my dad every other week. And my sister has pretty terrible taste in guys, so she isn't exactly the best example to go by. There was a minor rumbling in the bushes a few meters away from them, but the two teens just chalked it up to some small animal or something. Still, Midoriya continued on, his face slowly getting redder by the second. I'm not exactly entirely opposed to the idea of us dating. Well, obviously not, the girl shot back. Otherwise you wouldn't have agreed to go out with me. Good point. Has anyone ever told you that you're absolutely adorable when you get all embarrassed like that? Yes, you have multiple times. Silence once again fell upon the two students, and the last few minutes finally caught up with Takage's mind. On the inside, the girl was doing her best to remain as calm as possible. She was telling the truth when she said that she had next to no experience when it comes to whole romance thing. But if all those old movies and American soap operas that her and her sister used to watch were anything to go on, she had a pretty good idea about what her next move should be. So the now blushing girl began twisting a strand of her hair with her index finger. I'm going to you now. 404 error. 404 error. Izuku Midoriya. AXE has stopped working. Please call systems analyst for support. What Midoriya sputtered out after rebooting his brain. Did she really just say that, like, with actual words? Did Takage really just say that she wanted to him? The girl repeated. I mean, we've already held hands. It's pretty much the next logical step if you ask me. I was going to go for it anyway, but I figured that I should at least give you a warning. Guess I can't really argue with that logic. He gave the girl a weak laugh while nervously scratching the side of his face. So, did you maybe want to give it a shot? The green-haired teen hesitated for a moment as he thought about his answer. Was he ready for this? In all honesty, probably not. But as much as he wanted to just fold under the pressure, part of him really wanted to give it a try. He may have briefly considered the possibility of this happening when he was getting ready for this date. But now that he was actually in the situation, there wasn't any going back. Yeah, sure, cool. Seeing as they were now on the same page, Takage decided to take the lead and face towards him. She knew that out of the two of them, Midoriya was the least likely to make the first move. Of course, she didn't mind considering he was just naturally a shy person. And even though she probably wouldn't admit it out loud, she kind of enjoyed the idea taking charge. Time seemed to slow down as the two's faces slowly came together. Midoriya's face was quickly turning more red by second, and Takage was pretty sure that hers wasn't much different. It was only now that she realized how crazy this entire situation was. Her brain had pretty much been on autopilot for the last few minutes, but now she was acutely aware of exactly what she was about to do. With no going back now, all Takage did was close her eyes and lean forward a bit more. This was it, she was totally about to do this. Just a few more centimeters and both of their lips would be making contact. Just him already, you damn spaz, the voice in the back of her head yelled out at her, giving the girl that last bit of motivation she needed to commit to the act. It was weird how that voice sounded exactly like her older sister. What the hell? Takage stopped and opened her eyes before looking to the bushes behind the bench, and an equally confused Midoriya quickly following suit. Damn it, Nano, you just had to open your mouth. Didn't you? A very familiar adult female voice groaned in a hushed but annoyed tone. Sorry, but the two of them were taking forever and I'm tired of holding up my phone like this. A sense of pure and utter dread suddenly washed over the lizard tail splitter user's body. No way, there was no way in hell that this could be happening. And right now of all times, electing to confirm whether or not her suspicions were true, Takage stood up from her seat and marched right over to the bushes. Once she was there, the girl poked her head over the vegetation, and sure enough, both Kayama and Nana were doing their best to look as unassuming as possible. What the hell are you two doing here? Oh, hey Setsuna, fancy meeting you here. How's your day going so far? The elder Takage sibling innocently asked while shoving her phone in her back pocket. What's going on? Midoriya questioned as he walked up to join the girl to see what all the commotion was about, only to pause at the sight of his hero art history teacher and a woman with short green hair crouching down on the ground. Midnight Sensei. Midoriya, please, call me Kayama when we're outside of class. Were you two spying on us? Takage grimaced. She had a pretty good idea about what was going on, but she needed the confirmation just to make sure. Spying is such an ugly word, Kayama stated while folding her arms and looking away from them. I was simply monitoring this little outing of yours to make sure that nothing too inappropriate happened. What? Midoriya blushed at the woman's implication. Oh, I wasn't talking about you, Midoriya. I know you're a very nice and respectable young man who would never try anything indecent. Unless you've simply been pretending this entire time. The woman wiggled her eyebrows in a very suggestive manner. Well, I was definitely spying on the two of you, Nano interjected without the slightest bit of shame in her voice. How? Takage almost hissed out. Tetsu told me about your little rendezvous today. Takage made a mental note to have a little talk with her silver-haired excuse of a best friend later. She knew that the guy was pretty good when it came to keeping secrets, and there was no doubt in her mind that her sister had done something to coerce him to spill the beans. But that certainly wasn't going to save him from her getting some type of revenge for blowing the whistle on her date. Now that the jig was up, Nano saw no point in holding back any longer. So you were the guy the runt's been crushing on. The woman hopped over the bush and walked right over to Midoriya. The boy recognized the girl's face from the pictures around Take's house. Although they look very similar, the elder Take sibling's hair wasn't as fluffy as her sister's and she was a good 5 centimeters taller. "Hey cello," he gave the woman a polite bow. Instead of answering, Nana closed the distance between the two of them in a single stride. The next thing Midoriya felt was a pair of hands place themselves on his cheeks and found himself staring into a set of dark green eyes. "You've got a plain face, but still pretty cute. And you have nice hair," said the woman while examining his features. She then grabbed his shoulders and ran her hands down his arms. Surprisingly good definition under that shirt. The greenette then felt around his chest and abdomen and nodded as if satisfied. Without any warning, the woman took a couple of steps back before detaching her head from her body and floating it to the other side. "And you have a pretty nice ass." "Okay, that's enough." And now annoyed Take grabbed her sister's floating head and held it between her hands. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't go around checking out my friends." "What the big deal? I was just inspecting the goods." The decapitated body shrugged. "Ah, so I guess their entire family is like this," Midoriya thought to himself. Considering the fact that Kayama was a part of this group, he really should have expected it to be this way. "Why are you here?" "My little sister goes on her first official date and tried to do it in secret." "Why wouldn't I be here? I'll have you know that it's my duty as an older sister to document this future reference." "What do you mean, document?" Take quirked an eyebrow at her sister's head. "We may or may not have taken about 100 photos of you two while you were on your date." Midoriya questioned while looking towards his teacher. "I have no idea what she's talking about." Kayama feigned innocence, even though she herself had already sent a pretty decent amount of photos to the girl's father. Hoping to get some semblance of control on this situation, Take took a deep breath to calm herself down. In all fairness, she expected something like this to happen. It's the exact reason why she didn't tell either of them that she was going out on a date to begin. And if the last few minutes were any indication, she needed to wrap this up as soon as possible. "I greatly appreciate you two coming all the way out here to ruin my life." She began with a heavy level of sarcasm. "But would you kindly leave us alone now? As much I would love to do the exact opposite of that, it's getting pretty late." Nana began explaining. "We were actually planning on taking you home after you wrapped up things up. That's unless you two planned on doing some extracurricular activities." Now it was the black-haired woman's turn to have a little bit of fun with this. Her words more than enough to cause Midoriya's cheeks to flush at the implication. Instead of responding, Take simply grabbed the boy by his hand and began walking down the path to get away from these two headaches. The longer they stayed there, the more likely it was that Midoriya would burst in flames from embarrassment. "We parked by the train station. Be there in 15 minutes, the elder Take sibling shouted out. "That should be more than enough time to get the job done," you two, the adult of this situation, followed up. How can she just say that out loud, Midoriya thought, legitimately wondering if either woman knew what the word shame meant. After ditching those other two, the young couple found a nice and secluded spot a bit further away from the festival. But just to be safe, Take made sure to keep an eye out for any floating body parts. "Sorry about that." The girl apologized with a weak laugh. "It's fine," the boy replied before attempting to play devil's advocate. "I think they were just worried about you is all." "No, they were just here to embarrass me. Believe me, my sister is way more off the handle than I am. Just be glad that I got you out of there before she started flirting with you. I'll take your word for it. Plus, they kind of ruined our moment back there, didn't they?" the girl said as she took a step forward and closed the distance between the two of them. "Yeah, I guess you're right." For the next few seconds, the two teenagers gazed into each other's eyes. Unfortunately, neither of them could really bring themselves to take the next step. They didn't know whether it was out of mutual embarrassment or the likely possibility that they were still being watched. But something about the moment just didn't feel right. Instead, Take opted to do the next best thing. The girl leaned up on her toes, wrapped her arms around the boy's neck and gently placed her lips on his left cheek. "We can pick up where we left off some other time. Hopefully we'll actually be able to have some privacy." The girl feigned confidence while twisting a strand of her between her fingertips. "All right." A now blushing Midoriya nodded his head, all while trying to keep his heart rate steady. "I had an awesome time today." "Me too. I'm really looking forward to the next one." "Oh wow, you're already planning out our second date, how presumptuous of you," the girl teased. After a brief moment of fumbling over his words and a few laughs from Take, the girl wrapped the green-haired boy in slighter tighter hug than usual. "You, like most times before," Midoriya actually reciprocated the act of affection by gently wrapping his arms around the girl. "I'm glad that you're finally starting to get with the program when it comes to these hugs," she said in a joking manner. "Well, I figured that I might as well get used to it since we're Good point." After another few seconds, the two broke their embrace and gave each other one last smile before parting ways. "I guess I'll see you on Monday." "Yeah," Take nodded. "Do you mind if I call you this weekend?" "Sure," he smiled. "Cool," she grinned back. "Well, I better get going before those other two starting looking for us. Sorry again about that. I'll be sure to give Metalhead a piece of my mind later for screwing us over." "It's fine, really," the boy waved off. "Whatever you say. Anyways, I'll catch you later." "Bye," the boy said with a wave as the green-haired girl made her way over to the train station. Now that he was finally alone, Midoriya was able to release all the tension in his shoulders. Aside from a few mishaps, everything went surprisingly well. And judging by the fact that his date didn't immediately shoot him down when he threw out the idea of going out again sometime, it was safe to assume that Takage was telling him the truth about enjoying herself as well and wasn't just being nice. He tried his best to take his dad's advice and be a bit more forward, and that was definitely going to be a work in progress, but at least he took a step in the right direction. For now, the boy was happy with where they left off. He wasn't really sure if he could call this a relationship just yet, though, and he hoped that they could clear that up before something crazy happened. But he had a feeling that things were about to get really interesting between the two of them. I should probably head back home. I didn't tell Mom where I was going today and she might start freaking out soon if I don't hurry back, was the last thing Midoriya said to himself before beginning the journey back home. Along the way though, the boy just couldn't get rid of the grin that plastered itself onto his freckled face. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next one. Thank you all for agreeing to meet up today, the ever-smiling Nezu said to the group of men sitting before him. At the moment, Naomosa Tsukachi, Toshinori Yagi, Gran Torino, Sir Nidai and Mairo Tagata were all gathered in the office of the white-furred mammal. It had been a couple of weeks since their last meeting, and no doubt there was much to discuss, especially since most of them received word of this rendezvous on such short notice. I suggest that we start off with any new information concerning the League of Villains. Nezu motioned to both the detective and the jet quirk user. There have been no major moves from them as of late. Tsukachi began. In fact, they've been very quiet since the USJ incident. The only leads that I've been able to track down is that they are allegedly in the market for some new members. A couple of low-level thugs that have been taken into custody recently can testify to that. Considering how much of their forces that they lost in their last attack, it doesn't really surprise me. Yagi added, I haven't been able to dig up any reliable leads either. Gran Torino said, the fact that there was practically nothing to go on concerning this group was less than ideal. With the capture and analysis of the creature called Namu, the police were able to at least confirm the identity of the man. But that was pretty much it. And with the fact that the thing had used multiple quirks during its battle with All Might at the USJ, it was obvious that it was a product related to some type of experiment connected to a certain individual. Well, it seems like there's nothing can be done about it now, said Nezu as he took a sip of his tea. We'll just have to keep our ears to the ground and stay vigilant. Agreed. Nidai nodded before deciding to change topics. Have we made any progress with that other issue? Everyone in the room was able to pick up on what the Foresight user was implying. And without missing a beat, Gran Torino was the first one to speak up. I've been tailing the boy almost every day since our last meeting. He began a bit reluctantly. The sheer thought of him having to follow around a 16-year-old didn't really sit right with the elderly hero. Aside from a few interesting details, nothing he has done could be considered particularly strange. What do you mean? Tagata inquired. Well, for starters, Kid apparently spends a lot of his free time cleaning up that old junkyard, Dagoba Beach. From what I've seen, he goes there to train his quirk. And he's actually doing a really good job at keeping the place clean if you ask me. Really, a couple of the others raised their eyebrows. Anything else, Nidai asked the man. Other than a flimsy case of public quirk use, there was nothing of value to that information. The next thing I learned was that he actually volunteers at an orphanage for quirkless kids over in Saitama Prefecture. Him and another student of yours have gone there a few times in the last couple of weeks. And from what I've been able to gather, he goes to that place frequently. The last time he was there, I saw him cleaning and taking out the trash. Who was the other student? A girl with green hair. I think I remember seeing her in the sports festival. You must mean Takage, Tagata interjected. Haru did say that the two of them are dating. And from what I've heard, they spend a lot of time together. In the back of his mind, the blonde-haired student had a weird feeling about all of this. Based on everything that he knew about the green-haired first year, Midoriya was nothing short of an upstanding student. He was a bit shy, generally well-liked, easy to get along with, and apparently spent most of his time doing community service. How someone like that could even be considered a possible villain was beyond him. But with everything that was going on, he understood that it could have been nothing more than an act. The permeation quirk user had been ordered to not get too close to the boy for safety reasons. But something in his gut was leaning more towards Midoriya not being a threat. In fact, he actually wanted to have a real conversation with him sometime soon. So the boy is good at covering up his tracks. That still doesn't take away from the very real possibility that he's connected with All for One. For all we know, he could be keeping communications to a minimum and is laying low for the moment. Nidai added on, we could be making great lengths in this investigation if you all would allow me to use my quirk on him. Although most of the people in the room agree with the Foresight quirk user, it was still too risky to approach the boy without any hard evidence against him. And like previously mentioned, coming into contact with a known associate of All might tip the boy off. I'm going to be honest here, I'm having a real hard time imagining that Midoriya is even working with the League. Tagata finally voiced his opinion. I mean, the guy doesn't exactly strike me as villainous in any sort of way. Although I'm inclined to agree, the possibility is still on the table. Tsukachi chimed in. I looked over the boy's files and he was indeed quirkless up until last year. It was even confirmed on his medical records. As it stands, there's no way that he could have developed such a powerful quirk without coming into contact with All for One at some point. And I'm assuming that it was during the time period when he was missing. But do you really think he would get involved with someone like that? Why wouldn't he? Gran Torino asked. I would imagine that a powerless teenager would jump at the chance to receive a quirk, especially one as strong as his. The elderly man then gave a quick glance over to Yagi. Yes, I can agree with that. The emaciated blonde nodded. In truth, he couldn't really fault the boy if that was his reasoning for getting involved with that man. He himself practically leapt at the opportunity to receive one for all from his master. In any case, we should continue to monitor the boy from a distance. Nezu finally spoke up. Nothing he has done warrants any type of drastic action on our part, so there's no need to rush into this. Ridiculous. Naide scoffed while folding his arms. The rest of this impromptu meeting went on as one would expect. Aside from a few updates on how Tagata was progressing with One for All and some news about the rise of new villain group in Tokyo, nothing of any real note was put out. Eventually, Gran Torino, Naidai and Tagata took their leave to go handle some other business, leaving the other three men to go over some last-minute details from Tsukachi's investigation. So, how is that file of yours coming along? Tsukachikan, the unidentified mammal, looked to the detective. I've pretty much completed it, the black-haired man responded as he packed up his suitcase. Like I mentioned earlier, things are pretty cut and dry. Although there was one detail that I did find interesting. And what is that? The day that Midoriya went missing. It was also the same day of that sludge villain incident last year. Really, Yagi said in a surprised tone. He remembered that particular incident quite well, even though most of the day was one giant blur. Katsuki Bakugo, the boy who would later on become one of his students, ended up getting captured by the villain and was moments away from death before he stepped in and saved him. The heroes that were on the scene had irresponsibly decided to wait until someone else showed up with a better quirk for the situation and were about to let the boy take his last breath. With the last bit of his energy, the blonde-haired man swooped in to save the boy. And aside from being rushed over the hospital to get his stomach pumped, Bakugo somehow made it out without any major injuries. The funny thing was that Yagi could recall capturing that same villain barely 30 minutes before that entire event took place. In fact, he was about to turn him over to the police before running into. So no, I honestly don't think that you can become a hero without a quirk. It's not bad to have a dream, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable and realistic, understand? A wave of foggy memories hit the blonde-haired man like a freight train as images flashed across his mind. He didn't know what suddenly brought those on. But Yagi definitely remembered running into a scrawny boy in a black uniform and a plain face before coming up on that incident. But for the life of him, he couldn't remember what the child actually looked like. Is something wrong? Toshinori the detective asked, cutting off the man's train of thought. No, I just remembered something about that incident. Nasty bit of business that was. The blonde-haired man waved off with a grin. Oh, I see. The man shrugged. Who was that boy? The symbol of peace thought to himself. In any case, you two should be on your way. Especially you, Toshinori-kun, you should really be enjoying your days off when you can. Since the students are going to their summer training camp this week, you'll have more than enough time to unwind and focus on training Tagata-kun. Nezu said with a smile on his face. Yes sir, you're right about that. Yagi laughed. A few minutes later, both Tsukachi and Yagi had left the office, leaving Nezu to go over this latest bit of information himself. When it came to the curious case of Izuku Midoriya, the white-furred mammal had a couple of details that piqued his interest. He didn't feel the need to bring these up to the group since any speculation would only bolster Night-Eye's behavior even further. But after watching the boys' match against Katsuragi, his intuition was leading his mind in a certain direction. Deciding to get the ball rolling on his own little side project, the unidentified mammal walked over to his phone and began typing into the keypad. Nezu, you do realize that it's my day off, right? Don't tell me that Tagata went and blew out his arm again. The voice of Recovery Girl said on the other side of the line. Why not at all, he answered happily. I simply have a question that someone with your expertise might be able to answer. What is it? The early morning drudge over to UA was not very enjoyable for Ryoko Yanagi. The extended weekend, along with a lot of late-night television, had completely thrown her off her sleeping schedule. The girl usually tried to be more responsible when it comes to stuff like that. But she had found an old-era American cartoon that she really enjoyed and ended up binging it for nearly the entire weekend. The girl had spent well over 23 hours these last few days in front of her computer screen. Although the closet otaku would never admit it out loud, something like this was the exact reason for her general appearance. Most people assumed that it was something related to her poltergeist quirk. But in reality, the dark bags under her eyes, her constant slouch and the way her hands hung over her body was the product of years of sitting in front of her computer screen and surfing the internet for hours on end. That coupled with her naturally pale complexion, and it was no wonder why people would constantly compare her to a ghost. After getting off the train, it didn't take long for the gray-haired girl to arrive at the school. By sheer coincidence, she ended up getting there at the exact same time as the other telekinetic students in her class. Hello, Yanagi-san. Midoriya greeted the girl. Hey, she groggily droned out. Are you okay? The boy immediately asked in a concerned tone. although it was difficult to really gauge the girl's emotions due to her stoic nature. Recently, Midoriya had been able to pick up on subtle cues that his classmate gave off that usually let him know how she was doing. "Yeah, just tired is all. I had a bit of a late night," she answered in her usually stoic manner. "What about you? Has your body recovered yet from the exam?" "Yeah," he nodded. "I was able to use my quirk yesterday without any issues. But I didn't try anything too crazy." "That's good." She gave a quick nod before the two made their way through the gate and over to the parking lot where they were all told to meet up. Yanagi herself didn't know what to expect for this training camp. The only thing that Ken had told them was that they were going to be focusing on training their quirks. "So what do you think we'll be doing for this camp?" the green-haired boy asked. "Knowing Ken-sensei, we're probably just going to be practicing with our quirks for most of the time. I imagine that we're going to be doing a lot of tasks related to our individual powers." "Yeah, I can see that." The boy gave out a slight laugh. "We'll probably be partnered up together again if that happens." It would be hard for Yanagi to disagree with that. Ever since coming to UA, the two of them had pretty much been considered a package deal when it came to training. Even Honuki made a few jokes about how they're 1B's dynamic duo. It did make sense though, they had the same quirk and they complement each other's weaknesses pretty well. It wouldn't surprise her if the two spent most of the time training together as opposed to everyone else. Logically, it would make the most sense. "I wonder if he'll show me how to do that Hellstorm move that Blizzard taught him." The gray-haired teen wondered as they continued on their journey to the other side of campus. "Alright, now that everyone's here, we need to start loading our bags onto the bus. The quicker that we get this done, the sooner we can leave. So let's make it snappy," Kendo announced to her classmates. Surprisingly, all of the 1B students complied with the order and began loading their luggage onto the shelves. Even Midoriya and Yanagi had volunteered to use their quirks to make the process go by a lot faster. "I must say, Kendo-san, I'm actually surprised at how well you and your classmates work together." Yaoyorozu told the girl as Class 1A also began loading their bags onto the bus, albeit in a slightly less organized fashion than the other class. "Well, everyone in our class is pretty easy to work with, so it makes things way less difficult. Even Kamakura-kun knows when to tone it down." The orange-haired teen joked. "Hey, I heard that the razor-sharp user shouted from the other end of the pile." "Well, ours is the superior class. Of course you'd be astonished by our stellar teamwork," Monoma interjected in slightly smug tone as he casually avoided doing any of the actual work. "Less talk, more moving." Monomas and Kendo scowled at the copy quirk user. Another 10 minutes or so passed by before the two hero course classes were done loading up the buses. Everyone simply stood around and chatted amongst themselves for a bit before Kan and Aizawa finally made their appearance. However, the two teachers were not alone. With them was a familiar-looking student with wild purple hair who looked as though he desperately needed a nap. "Good, you all managed to get ready before we showed up," Aizawa lazily groaned out before pointing to the student. "As many of you probably remember, this is Hitoshi Shinsu. He'll be joining us for the week. For him, this training camp will be used to determine whether or not he'll be able to join the hero course." "Oh, so he's Iida's replacement?" Tetsu asked out loud. "Dude, shut the hell up." Takage was quick to elbow the silver-haired teen in arm for his outburst. Even though it was plainly obvious that it was true, there was no point in saying it out loud. The green-haired girl then looked over to a few of the 1A students who had some strange looks on their faces. More specifically, Uraraka, who seemed to tense up at the mention of Iida's name. "Go ahead and introduce yourself," the nocturnal hero continued. "Let me be clear," the purple-haired student started. "I'm not here to make friends with you people. My only goal is to prove my worth and make it into the hero course. Since there's an open spot for the taking, this is my chance to get in. If any of you have a problem with that, then get over it. I see he hasn't lost that smug attitude of his." Takage whispered to everyone around her. "It's a good thing that we all finally know what his quirk is." "Indeed," Tsunotori nodded. "For now he'll be working with 1A, but expect him to bounce around between classes while the camp is going on. You can all talk about it later. Hurry up and start getting onto the buses so that we can leave." "Yes sir," the students said in unison. Takage shared a quick look with Midoriya before grabbing him by the arm and pulling him towards the bus. "I hope you weren't expecting to sit with anyone else." She smirked. "No, not at all." The boy smiled back. "Good, because I don't know how long this bus ride will be and you're going to be my pillow just in case I fall asleep. Setsuna, please try to refrain from doing any unholy acts. We are going to be in a confined space after all." Shiozaki added on from a few steps behind them. Seriously, a few other students deadpanned. "TCH, you people are no fun," the lizard tail splitter user scoffed at the vine-haired girl. "Besides, what's wrong with committing a little sin here and there?" All Shiozaki could do was gasp at the girl's words, earning a not-so-subtle laugh from Takage and a lot of not-so-subtle blushing from Midoriya. "How can you say such perverse things with no shame?" Shiozaki then asked. "Oh man, I can already tell that this week is going to be a blast. Don't worry, Ibara. You've got 7 straight days of pure and unadulterated Takage to look forward to. And I promise to not pull my punches." Takage began patting the girl on the shoulder while laughing. All the vine-haired girl could do was say a silent prayer before boarding the bus along with Tsunotori. With her first bit of fun for the day finally out of the way, Takage went right back to her previously scheduled flirting and once again grabbed Midoriya by the arm. "Oh yeah, this is going to be one fun week. Are we there yet? A waste groaned from his spot next to Tetsu. At the moment, the 1B bus was a flurry of activity. Everyone was either talking, sleeping, or occupying their time with their phones. For the most part, the students were just happy to have the opportunity to even go on the field trip. Especially the 4 that ended up failing their exams: Tsuburaba, Kiwaro, Komori, and Bondo. Needless to say, they were a bit less cheery than the others. But aside from that, everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Quiet, dumbass. I'm trying to enjoy this song, Kamakiri responded from his seat towards the back. Dude, we've been stuck on this damn thing for the last 3 hours. I'm dying over here. The head been wearing teen shock back. Well, complaining about it won't help, said Shota a few seats ahead. Dude, I don't even see the 1A bus anymore. Alright, settle down everyone, Kan ordered the slightly unruly class of teenagers as he turned around in his seat. We'll be there in less than 5 minutes, so get ready. Like I said last week, we're hitting the ground running as soon as we show up. With that confirmation, Midoriya decided to go ahead and wake up the green-haired girl that was currently sleeping on his shoulder. True to her word, Takagi didn't even make it a full hour into the bus ride before passing out. Midoriya didn't mind, especially since the ride over was way more quiet than he expected. And it helped that he was able to get an hour of sleep in himself along the way. Setsuna, it's time to get up. We're almost at the camp, the boy said softly while giving her a light shake. 10 more minutes. The girl groaned out while digging into his shoulder a bit more. So cute, Midoriya said to himself. We'll be there in less than 5. Kan-sensei said that we need to get ready. Ugh, fine, she replied before sitting up and stretching her arms out. The girl couldn't help but let out a loud yawn as she felt her joints pop. You know, Izuku, if this whole hero thing doesn't work out, you've got some real potential as one of those professional cuddlers for women who can't get a boyfriend. Thanks. The boy blushed as a weird compliment. Wow, you haven't even been awake for a full minute and you're already flirting. Kendo joked. Wait, that's actually a thing? Tsunotori asked. The American girl had heard about that being an actual line of work in Japan, but she assumed that it was just a joke. Sure enough, less than 5 minutes passed before the bus came to a halt in front of a decent-sized lake in the middle of a heavily wooded area. The only visible structure that they could see was a small shack on the shoreline. As the students departed, they couldn't help but notice that the 1A bus was nowhere to be found. They had all left together, but at some point they must have either gotten separated or lost. Sensei, what became of 1A? Shishida asked what most of the others seemed to be thinking. Me and Aizawa decided that we'd do things a bit differently on the first day, the themed hero explained, while he's putting his class through whatever he's got planned. We're going to be doing a bit of a team-building exercise. He continued. In reality, he wasn't really a fan of Aizawa's idea to have all of the students run through the forest of beasts for damn near the entire day. So the two agreed to split up and handle their classes differently. So what are we going to be doing? Asked Tetsu. That's an awesome question, a very peppy voice said from behind them. The group of students all turned their heads and were met with the sight of a large man with black paint over his eyes and a woman with emerald green hair. They were both dressed in what looked like cheerleading uniforms, except in one was wearing brown and the other was wearing yellow. Who are you guys? They're the Wildcats, Midoriya suddenly blurted out. They're a hero team that specializes in mountain rescues. This is Ragdoll and Tiger. Oh yeah, I've heard of these guys before. Takagi piggybacked off the boy's explanation. That's right, the green-haired cat-themed hero said happily. The Wildcats own the land that we'll be using for the training camp. Cam began explaining. They'll also be helping us supervise and train you all for the entire week. Cool. While you're with us, we'll be sure to beat you maggots to a pulp and push you to surpass your limits. The man now identified as Tiger slammed a fist into his open palm. Did he just say that he's going to beat us to a pulp? Ibara nervously asked the students standing around him. It was bad enough that the guy was already pretty big, but the ominous aura surrounding his body just made him that much more intimidating. Hoping to get everyone back on track before things got too out of hand, Kan decided to get the party started. Like I said, they'll be helping us supervise your training, which includes today. As I'm sure all of you have noticed, the only thing here is this giant lake. And there's a reason for that. And what is that? Sensei Kendo asked. That's because the lodge that you kittens will be staying at is actually 20 kilometers that way. Ragdoll pointed a paw over to the mountain in the far distance. What? That's right. You students have to traverse the terrain to make it to the lodge. It's going to take us hours to get there. Tsuburaba whined. But wait, there's more. Of course there is. Inagi deadpanned. Along the way, there are 5 separate obstacles that you students need to overcome as a class. Each obstacle is focused around rescuing a mannequin from a specific type of danger. Tiger announced. That sounds easy, Inaug. The kicker is that after you rescue them, you lot have to carry all of the mannequins with you for the rest of the journey. Oase threw his head back in defeat. Although it was definitely going to be annoying, carrying the mannequins wasn't going to be too difficult. There were several students in their class that could carry a significant amount of weight for longer periods of time. Midoriya, Yanagi, Shiozaki, Kendo and Shishida being the prime candidates for this. But the students had a feeling that the exercise was going to be far more complicated than that. We'll be throwing a few curveballs at you during these exercises, so stay on your toes. For now, go ahead and get changed into your gym uniforms and get back out here. Try to remember, this is your time. The longer you take to finish, the less free time you'll have at the end of today's training. Kan said. Yes, sir. After getting changed into their gym uniforms, the students all gathered around their instructors and waited for their training to begin. They had no clue what to expect aside from that it was going to be rescue-oriented. But knowing Vlad King, he probably had something interesting in mind. Alright, here's your first trial for the day, the themed hero announced. This one is going to be pretty easy, but they'll get progressively harder as the day goes on. What are we gonna do? Takage asked. Aquatic Rescue Ragdoll interjected. In the middle of the lake, there is a mannequin that will simulate a person stranded in the water. Your job is to go out and bring him back to safety. The group looked behind the woman to see her partner standing in a small boat in the middle of the lake. The man was waving the mannequin in the air above his head and mildly flexing. This will be a piece of cake. We'll pretty much only need Izuku for this one, Takage thought. Unfortunately for her, Kan was already a few steps ahead of her. However, flying is not allowed. If I see anyone floating in the air, you guys will receive a penalty that the entire class will have to suffer through. It makes sense that he would say something like that. These aren't supposed to be easy exercises, Midoriya said to himself. In truth, he thought that he would be able to handle this one task in less than a couple of minutes. You guys can sort out your plan if you think you'll have the time. What do you mean by that? Awase asked. She means that the exercise has already started. Kan added. What do you mean? Yeah, we're action. Do it. Ragdoll cupped her gloved hand over her mouth and shouted towards her partner. Without missing a beat, the muscular threw the mannequin up into the air with an impressive amount of distance. The 1B students all watched in awe for a moment before the training tool landed in the water. Splash. I suggest you all hurry up and go save that injured person. A landing like that probably knocked them out cold, Kan said with a satisfied smirk on his face. Well, we don't even get time to prepare, said Subiraba. That's a part of being a hero. Situations like this come at you at the drop of a hat. The man replied. That's some bull. Worry about it later. Kendo cut him off. Quick, who's the best swimmer out here? Without so much as a thought, Midoriya wasted no time in jumping into action. The boy didn't even consult his classmates before running towards the water and jumping into the lake. Although it was only an exercise, Midoriya knew that he should take stuff like this seriously. He wanted to be a rescue specialist after all, so he needed to make sure that he acted quickly in times of an emergency. I guess now is as good a time as any to test out that theory of mine, the boy thought before activating his quirk on himself. He never really had a reason to try this up until now, but Midoriya had always wondered if he could use his quirk underwater in the same way that he could while in the air. A few weeks back, he saw a few clips from some old-era American movie about a man from an underwater city. While watching it, he realized that the way they zipped through the water was the same as flying, and wondered if the same principles would apply to him. With no more time to waste, the telekinesis user focused his power and began zooming through the water in the direction that he saw the mannequin land. What he didn't plan on, however, was the fact that in his hasty attempt to get to the person in need, he didn't take a big enough breath before jumping in. Seeing as he didn't have a lot of time, the boy quickly swam up to surface before poking his head above the water and taking a deep breath and going back down. Wait, how did he get over there so fast? Honuki wondered. I guess he can use his quirk underwater too. Takage smirked. She forgets sometimes just how versatile a quirk like telekinesis is. Not even a few seconds later, Midoriya finally located his target. Thankfully, the water was clear enough for him to see the mannequin that was slowly sinking below the surface with each passing second. The boy quickly used his quirk to grab hold of the thing and brought it to him. However, the second that the foxperson was in his arms, he couldn't help but notice how heavy the thing was. This thing must weigh at least 100 kilograms. With the mannequin now secured, Midoriya shot back up to the surface to once again catch his breath. In the distance, the other 1B students let out a collective sigh of relief at the sight of their green-haired classmate's face. It didn't take long for the boy to make it back to the shoreline, and the moment he was back on dry land, Midoriya was met with cheers from his classmates. Midoriya, that was awesome. Awase complimented the boy. I didn't know you can use your quirk underwater like that. Kendo asked. Yeah, me neither. He didn't really think that all the way through, the boy bashfully admitted. Damn, this thing is heavy, said Tetsu as he inspected the mannequin. To his left, Midoriya hadn't noticed the borderline predatory look that Takage was giving him. The image of him standing there in a soaking wet uniform that provided just the right amount of eye candy was already good enough for the girl. But the way his sopping wet, curly hair was draped over his face was a little too much for her to handle at the moment. He ain't the only one getting wet right now. Damn, if only he took his top off before jumping in the water. Takage smirked, reminding herself to find an excuse to get him out of his shirt as soon as possible. Yes, that was a fine job, Midoriya. Kan interrupted the students with a few sarcastic claps of his hands. However, as I mentioned before, these are supposed to be team exercises. And since you guys failed to work as a team, you have to face the consequences. A few students said with confused looks. Since Midoriya was the only one to save the mannequin, that means that he has to sit out for the next 2 exercises. Oh, and one of you will have to carry the mannequin, not him, the themed hero explained with a slight smirk. What? Oh, come on, Sensei, most of us were useless in that situation. On top of that, none of us have aquatic quirks. Kamakiri immediately began complaining. That doesn't excuse the rest of you standing around and doing nothing while your classmate did all the work. At the very least, you could have tried to provide some assistance for his return, Ragdoll cheerily interjected while pointing a finger and laughing at their expressions. None of the students had a good enough response to the critique. In truth, all of them were pretty certain that Midoriya could handle the situation by himself. But the fact that none of them were as fast as him when it came to both reacting and getting to mannequin made them pause. But now that they were short one of their most powerful students, it would only make the exercise that much harder. I was planning on taking Midoriya out of the equation at some point depending on how he did. But this just makes it easier. These guys need to learn how to work around their own shortcomings a lot more, especially the ones with combat-oriented quirks, Kan thought. Hoping to bring the now deflated morale of the group back up, Kendo addressed her class. Come on guys, we got this. Even if Midoriya-kun is out of play for a while, we're still more than capable of handling things. With our combination of quirks, this will be a piece of cake. Hitsuka's right, there's 19 of us. We got this in the bag, Takage piggybacked with a confident thumbs up. Oh yeah, Monom is also not allowed to use Midoriya's quirk for the duration of the exercise. Kan added on while giving a sharp gaze over to the blonde-haired student who was casually making his way over to Midoriya. Well, there goes my plan out the window, the copy quirk user sighed. On top of never getting the chance to actually copy the green-haired boy's quirk, Monoma knew that his power was way too useful for stuff like this. Luckily their teacher hadn't said anything about Yanaga's power being off limits as well. Alright, now that we have the first exercise out of the way, let's move on to the next one, Ragdoll cheered before marching into the tree line. What's next, Takage asked the pro-heroine. You'll have to wait and see, but it's going to be something particularly entertaining for us. I have a feeling that we're not going to like this at all. The students collectively groaned as they walked towards their fate. 5 hours later, the moment the students stepped into the giant clearing in front of the lodge, they were absolutely exhausted. When Ken the Cats told them that they were going to be increasing the intensity with each exercise, they were expecting a gradual incline, not leaps and bounds above the previous one. Someone get this damn thing off of me, please. Tetsu pleaded as he dropped the ground with a 150 kilograms mannequin still on his back. He had been carrying the thing for the last 4 to 5 minutes and his legs were about to give out. I would totally help you out there, metalhead, but I'm a bit short-handed at the moment. Takage weakly chuckled while waving around 2 nubs where her hands were supposed to be. The girl lost them about 2 hours ago after a slight mishap when her and Yanagi attempted to hold up some boulders together. I'm sorry, Takage-chan, I thought that those rocks were within my weight limit, but they were more dense than I imagined. The gray-haired teen apologized in her usual Montine voice while propping herself up on Kendu's shoulder. Her head was throbbing and she had been using her quirk non-stop for the last few hours. It's fine. The lizard tail splitter user waved off. A few seconds later, Midoriya walked out from the tree line looking a lot more tired than usual. Not only was the boy carrying 2 of the mannequins by himself, but he was also transporting Kiwaro and Shota. The latter was too exhausted to move thanks to overusing his quirk during the last exercise. Seriously, whose idea was it to have a simulated rock slide as our last obstacle, Kamakiri droned out. The only person who looked somewhat okay was Bondo. But since no one could really tell what the gentle giant of the class was thinking due to him not having an actual face, it was hard to say. On top of that, his skin was drier than usual after using his quirk to help rebuild a destroyed bridge. My feet are killing me, Tsunotori groaned in her native English. Where are Komurichan and Fukadeshi-kun? Kendu looked around the group of tired teenagers. Wherever the short brunette girl huffed out as her and Fukadeshi finally crossed the tree line. The 2 of them working together to transport another mannequin. It's messed up how you made the 2 smallest people in your class carry the heaviest mannequin, Ragdoll laughed while waving a paw at Kan. Honestly, I did that just to be funny. The themed hero silently chuckled. Once everyone was finally accounted for, the students were given a quick 5-minute break to catch their breath and rest their feet. Once that was over, everyone gathered around their homeroom teacher and 2 new instructors. I must say, you maggots got here sooner than I expected. I was pretty sure that we wouldn't get here until sundown. Tiger complimented the class. Sundown was still a good 2.5 hours away, so there was a lot of time left in the day. Indeed, Kan interjected. The purpose of us dragging you through this hell was to get a feel for what this camp is going to be like. But mainly because I wanted you all to focus on how you use your quirks. Like I said at the start of the year, you have to learn how to think outside of the box and be able to adapt to any situation that comes. I thought it was just to watch us suffer. Ibara groaned from his spot on the ground while clutching his still sore fingers. In any case, you all did well. Which means that you have the rest of the afternoon to rest and relax. Everyone's spirits were lifted ever so slightly at that announcement. Your classmates still aren't here yet, so you'll have to wait until they show up to have dinner. But that means that you kittens don't have to share the showers or the hot springs with them, Ragdoll then explained with a smile on her face. Hot springs? Takage's ears perked up at the mention of the word before darting her eyes over to Midoriya. Needless to say, the girl was having some less than appropriate thoughts at the prospect of finally seeing the boy without a shirt on. Ragdollson, the hot springs are separated by gender, correct? Shiozaki immediately raised her hand. Of course, the green-haired girl cursed under her breath. For now, all of you go grab your bags from the front of the lodge and get cleaned up. We'll call you when it's time to eat. With no hesitation, the students of Class 1B stood up on their shaky legs and made the trudge over to retrieve their belongings. Deciding to have a little bit of fun with this situation, Takagi walked over to Midoriya and jumped on the boy's back. Setsuna, WW, what are you doing? The blushing teen asked. Too tired to walk, need a piggyback ride. The girl replied with a slight smirk. Also, I'm going to need some help carrying my stuff since I kinda don't have hands right now. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Are you going to be okay? Yeah, I just need to get some calories in me to help speed up the regeneration. I'm running on empty right now, but I should be good by the morning. That's good. In the meantime, that also means that I'm going to have some trouble when it comes to showering. You want to give me a hand with that? Midoriya's face suddenly heated up at the implication of her words. They may have been officially dating now, but he was certain that he would never get used to how easily the girl could say stuff like that out loud. Just when the boy was about to fumble through his response, Shiozaki came to his rescue. There will be no indecency while we're here at this camp, the blushing vine-haired girl stated. What do you mean, Ibara? I was just going to ask Izuku to join me in the show. Takagi's mouth was suddenly covered by one of the girl's vines. I'm too tired to deal with this. Yanagi droned out while using her quirk to pick up both her bags and Takagi's. You and the boys go on ahead. I'll make sure that Takagi doesn't try to peek at you guys. You people are no fun. The green-haired teen huffed out in annoyance before acquiescing to her classmates and joining the rest of the girl to make the journey over to their assigned room, leaving the boys to do the same. After a much-needed shower and soak in the hot springs, the girls of 1B were all chilling out in their room. The sun was beginning to set and a few of them were starting to get more than a bit hungry, Takagi in particular. Because of the lack of sufficient calories, the process for her regeneration was going at a snail's pace. Thankfully, the girl had the foresight to pack some granola bars in her bags before leaving just in case something like this happened. But even that wasn't enough to help her out. Right as the girls were in the middle of a conversation about what they were going to be doing for the duration of the camp, the door slid open to reveal the girls of Class 1A. And judging by their looks, they must have just gotten back from whatever particular brand of hell that Aizawa had put them through. Wow, you guys look like shit, Takagi said in a joking fashion. Wait, are we going to be sharing this room? Yaoyorozu asked. Her voice sounded dry and Takagi could swear that the girl was thinner than usual. Yeah, Kendo answered. Since there's only 13 of us, we'll all be rooming together. And the boys have their own room. But Ragdoll did say that this was the biggest one. Oh, I see. What took you so long? We've been waiting hours for you to show up. We just spent the last 8 hours fighting giant dirt monsters. Ishida replied while holding her wrists. That sucks. What about you guys? Kansensei put us through a bunch of rescue exercises that were way too difficult for us to handle properly. But we did manage to make it back a few hours ago. Lucky, Gyro mumbled out. Judging by the fact that Takagi doesn't have any hands, I don't think that lucky would be the right word to use, Jiro. The frog-themed girl with the scar on her face bluntly told the purple-haired rocker. The girls stood around and talked for a few minutes before Pixie Bob, another member of the Wildcats, told them that dinner was ready. With a wide grin and an almost empty stomach, Takagi nearly charged out of the room and made a beeline straight for the dining hall for some much-needed grub. Yo, Midoriya-kun, it's nice of you to finally join us. Honuki waved to the green-haired teen who just walked into the room. What's that desire to mean? Tsunotori asked the lipless teen. Midoriya didn't join the rest of us in the hot springs. He just went straight to the showers and took a nap. Waste clarified. Sorry, I was just really tired. The boy lied, although it was true that he did take a nap after his midday shower. The reason why he didn't join the rest of the boys in the hot springs was because he didn't want to run the risk of any of them seeing his scars. The only person who was able to pick up on this was Yanagi. It's cool. Izuku, get over here, I need you to feed me, Takagi blurted out loud enough for a few 1A students to turn their heads in curiosity. What? I don't have hands right now, dude. I need your help. The girl waved her nubs in the air above her head. In all fairness, Takagi did have a point. Without her hands, the girl wouldn't be able to eat. And it was a hero's duty to help someone in need, especially if that someone was your girlfriend. Now that he thought about it, the two of them never did get around to defining exactly what the nature of their relationship was. Maybe they should handle that sometime soon. After letting out an embarrassed sigh, Midoriya made his way over to the table. Aside from Takagi herself, Kendo, Tetsu, and Yanagi were all sitting with her. Generally speaking, the two classes had decided to stick together instead of intermingling that much. The only really oddballs were Todoroki and Shinso, both of them sitting in rather secluded areas of the dining hall away from everyone else. Once he sat down, Takagi wasted no time in sliding a bowl of fried rice in front of him while giving the boy a devious look. Obviously, the girl was enjoying his embarrassment over the matter, but Midoriya couldn't quite bring himself to turn her down. The green-haired teen looked around for a moment before spotting a spoon in the tray of utensils at the center of the table. Without so much as thought, the boy used his quirk to lift the spoon, scoop up some rice, and levitate it over to the girl's mouth. What Midoriya wasn't expecting, however, was for Takagi to give him an annoyed look and pout at him. You're a dork. She shook her head and huffed. What? I didn't mean for you to use your quirk to do it. She explained as if it was the obvious thing in the world. Oh, the now blushing teen realized what the girl meant. You're lucky that you're cute. Takagi began laughing before the unmistakable sound of her stomach grumbling drew in everyone's attention. We'll worry about it later. For now, bring on the grub. Near the front of the room, Aizawa, Kan and the rest of the pro heroes were sitting at their own table and enjoying their meal. They had already worked out the schedule for the next few days, so there was really nothing else to talk about besides regular everyday stuff. Aren't you going to do anything about those two? Aizawa lazily looked to Kan. No, the man casually replied while taking a sip of his tea. Why not? I don't really see a point. The gray-haired man shrugged. It's not against the rules for teenagers to date. On top of that, they are two of my better and more well-behaved students, so I don't really see a problem with it. I see, the back-haired man simply replied. He himself thought it was irrational to allow students to openly engage in relationships like that. But then again, Kan did have a point. To his knowledge, Takage and Midoriya were two of the top students in 1B. In any case, it wasn't his class and by extension it wasn't his problem. So the nocturnal hero decided to drop it. Later that night, after everyone finally managed to eat and take part in the hot springs, the girls of 1A and 1B were all packed inside their assigned room. Like previously mentioned, they were all going to be living together during the training camp, which gave the students plenty of time to mingle with each other. Man, talk about one hell of a day. Takage stretched out her arms. Now that she had a sufficient amount of calories in her system, her regeneration was moving faster than it was earlier. The bottom portion of her palms were already starting to form. I'll say, my hands still haven't fully recovered from earlier. Kendo agreed. I still can't believe you guys had to spend the entire day fighting those dirt monsters. That must have been rough, said Komori, the shorter girl with brown hair styled into a bob cut that covered both of her eyes. It was. Uraraka nodded. Well, at least we now get a chance to unwind before tomorrow. Certainly, Shiozaki agreed. I wonder what they're going to have us do. Whatever it is, it's probably going to be brutal. You can count on that. In the meantime, why don't we take our minds off of that and have a little girl talk? Ishido gave the girls a wide grin. I don't like the way you said that. Gyro scowled at the pink-skinned girl. Come on, this is the first time that all of us are together like this outside of class. It'll be fun. So, what did you want to talk about? Boys, obviously, the acid quirk user proclaimed as she stood up from her futon. Here we go. Kendo deadpanned. Now we're talking. Takage also stood up on top of her futon. More than happy to have this particular kind of conversation. So, which guys do you think are the hottest? Do we really have to answer that? This is ridiculous, Yanagi stoically said while scrolling through her phone. Come on, Ghosty, what's the harm? Takage smiled at the girl and threw her arm over her shoulder. You're a hormonally challenged girl just like the rest of us, right? Which guy do you think is the most attractive? I'm dying to know the answer to this. In order of general attractiveness, I would have to say Kaibara-kun, Awase-kun, Midoriya-kun, Monome-kun, and Honuki-kun are the 5 most attractive boys in our class. Silence fell among the students as everyone gawked at the gray-haired teen. In response, Yanagi simply looked around the room and waited for a reply. Wow, Takage blinked in surprise. I wasn't really expecting you to just come out and say it like that. What would be the point in lying about it? A lazily blue eye glanced back at her. You are seriously one tough nut to crack. The green-haired girl shook her head before moving on. Forget all that, I want the details. And Takage and Midoriya. Ishido cooed along with Hagakure. Are you two awfully a couple or what? Because him feeding you in the dining hall earlier was the cutest thing on earth. Something like that. The girl smirked while pretending to be coy about the situation. Meanwhile, in the Class 1B boys' room. Alright Midoriya, what's your secret? Awase asked the green-haired boy. My, what a very confused Midoriya looked to his classmate for an explanation. Don't try and act dumb. I'm onto you in your little game, you douche. How come you're always surrounded by attractive women? What? You know, Awase does have a point. Subiraba joined in. You are quite the ladies' man, dude. To say that Midoriya was perplexed would be putting mildly. He honestly had no clue where any of this was coming from. Guys, what are you even talking about? Don't give us that shit. You and Takage are obviously together. You and Yanagi talk and hang out all the time. Plus that hot third-year girl with the huge ass apparently has taken an interest in you. And don't even get me started on Blizzard. The headband-wearing teen began listing off his evidence. Dude, that may or may not be his older sister. Gross. A chuckling Honuki chimed in from the other side of the room while very much enjoying this conversation. I'm telling you bro, it's the freckles. Chicks dig that shit. Kamakiri decided to put in his 2 cents. Now that he was fully committed to this act, Awase walked across the room directly to Midoriya and placed his hands on the boy's shoulders. He even took a few seconds to stare into his eyes and pause for dramatic effect. Tell us, you son of a, how do you do it? Knowledge is meant to be shared, not hoarded. The wild quirk user began shaking him. What are you, some kind of generic anime harem protagonist? Ah, so this is what it's like to have sleepovers, Midoriya thought as he tried to come up with a way out of his comically dreadful situation. In a seedy bar in the middle of Kamino Ward, a certain group of individuals were gathered around a table in the middle of the room. These men and women were carefully going over their plan for events yet to come. Twice's clone just checked in with us not too long ago and confirmed that the brats were hiding out in some lodge in the middle of Akita Prefecture. Tamura Shigaraki, a young man with sky blue hair and dry skin, announced to the group. By a sheer stroke of luck, one of his newest party members just so happened to spot a bus containing their current quest objectives and sent one of his clones to tail them. So tell me again why we're going through the trouble of snatching up a couple of kids. A man with black hair and scars all over his body asked. wondering what the point of all this was. Our goal is to deal a blow to hero society as a whole. And what better way to do that than to turn a couple of top hero prospects to our side? And what if this doesn't pan out the way you want it to? The scarred man rebutted. Then we'll just kill them. Either way, the public will lose its faith in the disgusting institution that it clings to so dearly. Fine, the man replied. And after we prove ourselves on this little kidnapping job of yours, you'll introduce us to Stain, right? Of course, Shigaraki lied under the dismembered hand that he was using to mask his face. Ever since that business in Hasu, his league of villains had been attached to that lunatic bastard known as the Hero Killer. In truth, the pale man wanted nothing more than to turn that asshole into dust. But using his name to gather more NPCs was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Oh, this sounds so much fun. I can't wait to start slicing people up. The psychotic blonde girl with yellow eyes cheered with a sadistic smile on her face. So when do we start? We're still waiting on that support gear from Jurin to get finished. It will be done by tomorrow night. The attack itself will be the day after tomorrow. On top of that, we're waiting on a few more members to join our party. Fine, the scarred man nodded. Does all of this sound okay to you? Sensei Shigaraki then turned toward the television monitor in the back of the room. It sounds wonderful, Tamura. A cold and sinister voice replied in an amused tone. His apprentice may still have been a bit rough around the edges and needed proper guidance, but he was coming along quite well. His earlier defeat at the hands of All Might had really lit a fire in his soul. However, might I make a small request? What is it? In addition to capturing Ragdoll of the Wild Cats, I would like some time with Izuku Midoriya once your plan succeeds. There's a certain matter concerning him that I wish to attend to. All right, the decay quirk user nodded. He learned a long time ago that his sensei always had some kind of nefarious scheme in the works, and that it's better to not ask questions. As long as he got what he wanted, there was nothing to worry about. Excellent. The man behind the screen smiled at this very fortunate turn of events. The early morning wake-up call courtesy of Mandalay was definitely not what the students were expecting to hear before the crack of dawn on their first full day of training. For most of them, their daily routines didn't require them to get up at such an ungodly hour. But with the promise of severe consequences for showing up late, the Hero Course first years had very little trouble finding the motivation to get out of bed. After he was done brushing his teeth and putting on his uniform, Midoriya hazily strolled over to the front of the lodge. The green-haired boy himself was a bit more used to waking up early thanks to all his time training at Dagobah Beach. But even he was having trouble getting himself going. By the time he made it outside of the lodge, Midoriya took a moment to take in the early morning view. Overall, the place was absolutely stunning. The trees were a beautiful shade of summer green and the mountain air felt fresh in his lungs. It had been a few years since he'd last been outside of the city and he was grateful to be able to experience something like this. Midoriya, a calm voice called out from behind, slightly startling him. The boy then turned around only to be met with the sight of the heterochromatic teenager known as Shoto Todoroki. Todoroki-san, good morning. Midoriya greeted the boy with a polite bow. The air between them grew awkwardly thick as the son of the number 2 hero remained silent while staring at the telekinesis user with his cold gaze. As far as Midoriya knew, Todoroki was a particularly antisocial guy who rarely ever talked to his classmates. Is there something that I can help you with? The green-haired teen asked in a slightly confused tone. Since it's only the two of us out here for the moment, I guess now's as good a time as any to say this. But looking at things objectively, I'm stronger than you in terms of raw power. The two-tone teen suddenly said. Okay, but for some reason, you've been able to beat me every time the two of us have gone up against each other. The boy continued. Okay, Midoriya repeated, wondering exactly where the boy from 1A was going with this. I'm letting you know that from here on out, you will never beat me again. The next time we face each other, I will be victorious. Yumo right. Midoriya simply nodded. He wasn't exactly sure what brought on this sudden announcement, but he had a feeling that his victory over the powerhouse of Class 1A in the sports festival had something to do with it. What's this all about, Todoroki-san? You know my father's the number 2 hero. Yeah, I talked to him once during the sports festival. Midoriya's words were enough to make Todoroki pause. Apparently this was the heterochromatic teen's first time hearing about this, and whatever words were about to come out of his mouth suddenly took a back seat. What did he say to you? He offered me an internship at his agency, and you declined. Yeah, why? In all honesty, Midoriya didn't really feel like delving into the multiple reasons why he didn't want to intern at the Endeavor agency. Not only did their short interaction leave a bad taste in his mouth, but everything he heard from Ozhana about how the man operates only cemented his opinion of the current number 2 hero. I had a better offer. From Blizzard, right? Yeah. Once again, Todoroki stood silent for a few seconds as the gears began turning in his head. You know me father isn't very fond of that woman or her older sister, especially after one of his old sidekicks left his agency to go join her. That's understandable, said Midoriya. Ozhana-san's pretty powerful and she does quality work from what I've seen. I can imagine that anyone would be sad to lose a good hero like her. Agreed, Todoroki simply said before drastically changing subjects. So what exactly is your connection to the Katsuragas? I won't pry too much, but I'm curious. One of your classmates said that you're the psychic sister's younger brother. And given your general appearance, your quirk and the fact that you've interned at her agency, it really isn't too hard to imagine that to be true. I really need to talk to Honukasan and Owasin about making these jokes around people. The boy breathed a slightly irritated sigh before opening his mouth to once again let someone know that he isn't related to his mentor. Look, Todoroki-san, I'm not. Oh man, it's way too early for this. The tired voice of Kaminari cut the boy off before he could finish his statement. Near the entrance of the lodge, all the rest of the students were filing out of the building and huddling up in the clearing. Apparently this signaled the end of their conversation because Todoroki simply turned around and left Midoriya with so much as a word. Weird guy. Midoriya simply shrugged before he himself went to join the rest of the class. Once everyone was finally present and accounted for, Aizawa and Kan wasted no time in getting the party started. First, the two teachers went into a brief explanation about how the purpose of the camp to focus on getting the students ready to take the provisional license exam before the start of the next semester, which was certainly shocking news to them. After that, they went on to give a general layout for how their day was going to go. Essentially, they were going to split up into groups with a specific hero and work on improving the overall strength of their quirks. Although many of you have improved in terms of how to best apply your quirks, our objective this week is to try and improve the overall power of them, Aizawa stated. What do you mean? Sensei Uraraka raised her hand. Instead of responding, the nocturnal hero pulled two softballs from out of nowhere. The first one, he tossed to Bakugo, and the other, he threw over to Midoriya. The two of you got the highest scores on the ball throw in each of the classes. If my memory is correct, Bakugo had a score of 705.2 meters. Midoriya came in at 400 even. Kan added on. I see, Shishida remarked. This will be used as a benchmark to assess our overall progress related to our quirks. We've been working hard this semester, so it makes sense that we'd have at least some improvement. Kendo added, I want the two of you to throw those balls as far as you can with your quirks, just like how you did during the quirk apprehension test. Aizawa ordered. Show us what you got. Bakugo Kirishima cheered on from the left side of the crowd. An almost feral grin formed on the face of the ashen blonde teen as he geared up for his throw. Naturally, the 1B students didn't know what to expect, but judging by how all of the 1A students were bracing themselves, they assumed that they should follow suit and covered their ears. Watch and learn, Deku. Bakugo gave a sharp look to the greenette before launching the ball through the air with a massive, yet well-executed explosion. Go to hell. Did he really just scream go to hell? Yanagi asked, wondering if her ears were playing tricks on her. A few seconds passed before the information was received on Aizawa's phone. The black-haired man then checked the number himself before turning it over to face the students. On the screen, they were all pretty surprised to see that the number was only 709.6 meters. What Bakugo said in bewilderment. That's it, Kirishima asked out loud. Kind of a letdown, ain't it? Zero followed up. All right, Midoriya, you're up, Kan then said to his student. Yais, Sir. Midoriya nodded before activating his quirk. Much like how he did at the start of the year, the telekinesis user simply began levitating the ball above his hand before sending it flying directly in front of him. Like usual, once it was outside of his range, the ball immediately dropped to the ground. But by then, it was already further than what anyone could see. Oh wow, Kan suddenly said, slightly raising everyone's curiosity. Aizawa then held the phone out in front of them and showed the class the number 451 on the screen. Are you serious? That's a 50-meter improvement from the last time. Yanagi said in disbelief. That's insane, Takage said in an impressed tone. She wasn't an expert on telekinetic quirks, but even she knew something like that wasn't normal. A 12% increase over the course of a few months was bizarre, and it was even more bizarre when you consider the fact that Midoriya has only had his quirk for roughly a year. Evidently, Katsuragi was right that day during their internships. Midoriya might actually be on the same level as Tornado one day. Damn, Midoriya, are you taking PEDs or something? Suburaba joked from his spot next to Monoma. Midoriya himself was just as confused about the sudden increase in his range as much as everyone else. Nothing about that seemed out of the ordinary as far as his quirk was concerned. But considering the fact that at some point he improved a whole 50 meters in the span of one semester was definitely strange. Granted, this was his first time in a while testing out his maximum range limit. While the 1B students were giving Midoriya a few compliments, all of which caused the boy to turn into a blushing mess. Bakugo was silently fuming a few meters away from him. Not only had he barely improved on his own score, but that loser Deku had the audacity to upstage him in front of everyone. Due to your various experiences, all of you have definitely improved. But those improvements have mostly been limited to mental fortitude and technical application, with a slight increase in stamina thrown in. Kan began before Aizawa took over. But as you can see, for many of you, your quirks haven't improved much on a fundamental level. This will be what we focus on for the majority of the time that we're out here. I guarantee you that this training will be so hard that some of you might consider dropping out of the hero course. A few students couldn't help but gulp at the proclamation given by the nocturnal hero. Bottom line is, get ready for Hell Week. The first hour of quirk training for the students could very well be considered an actual nightmare. Not only were students working hard, they were going at full speed with no chance of slowing down anytime soon. All across the camp, the members of UA's first-year hero course were firing off their quirks left and right. Everyone had been split up into groups assigned to a specific pro hero after their morning meeting with their teachers, and the heroes wasted no time in pressing their foot down on the gas pedal. For Midoriya, his group consisted of himself, Yanagi, Honuki, Uraraka, Awase, and Kodai. And all of them were currently being supervised by Pixie Bob, the blonde-haired member of the Wildcats. From what he could gather, Midoriya assumed that this specific group was put together because everyone present had a quirk that could manipulate objects and terrain in some capacity. And since the woman could control Earth, she was the most logical person for the job. "Come on, Greenie, you can do better than that," she shouted as she formed yet another boulder for him to lift up. At the moment, Midoriya was floating a good 8 meters above the ground while constantly spinning an ever-increasing amount of rocks around his body. Much like his training with Katsuragi back during his internships, the green-haired teen was not allowed to touch the ground. Normally this would be no problem for him, but with the task of also dealing with these rocks it was hard to keep his focus. While that was going on, Yanagi was doing a similar exercise. The other telekinetic student was given the duty of also manipulating some boulders. Except for her, every rock that she was given was the maximum amount of weight that she could lift. While Midoriya's issue was still related to his control over multiple objects, hers was related to her weight limit. Simply put, the more objects that she had to levitate that were close to it, the harder the strain was on her body. For the other students, Honuki was doing his best to control the path that his softening quirk took, which was much easier said than done considering he was so used to just activating it over a large area instead of using it in a more controlled fashion. Kodai was resizing rocks left and right with very little time in between. Awase's hands were beginning to throb as he had been welding rocks and metals of different densities both to each other and his body ever since starting. The headband-wearing teen still hadn't noticed the small pebble still stuck to his cheek. And in the most bizarre of the group, Uraraka was focusing on her nausea issue. For her, the brunette was currently rolling down the mountainside in a giant plastic bubble. And every few seconds, Pixie Bob would put up some sort of obstacle to throw the girl's equilibrium out of whack. "I hope you kittens are having fun, because we'll be going at it like this until you break for lunch," the blonde-haired heroine cheered happily. On the other side of the camp, Takage was certainly not having the best of times. The green-haired teen's focus was all over the place literally. For her, the girl was given the task of separating her body up into as many pieces as she could and spreading them out over as wide an area as possible. On the surface, it didn't seem like anything that she couldn't handle. However, Ragdoll also told the girl that she had to reform her body every 5 seconds before immediately spreading her pieces out again. The problem with this was that it didn't give the girl any time to properly reset her body in between repetitions. Because of this, it was a constant drain on her stamina. So far in the school year, the girl had been able to increase her limit from 20 pieces to 30. But with more pieces also came more energy that she would need to be expended to control and manipulate them. Also in Takage's group were Shiozaki, Tsunotori, Takoyami, and Kamakiri. Based on what Ragdoll had told them, they were lumped together due to their quirks requiring them to manipulate their bodies in some way, shape, or form. Which did make a lot of sense. Just like her, everyone else had been using their quirks non-stop for the last hour and some change. The only outlier of their group was Takoyami, who was in a dark cave not too far away from them. But based on the boy's constant yelling, she could tell that he was having a difficult time just like everyone else. Despite all of that, Takage was still glad that she was not a part of Tiger's group. The brunette man was in charge of everyone with a strength or body enhancement quirk. Even from where she was floating she could see Kendo and Ajiro sparring like there was no tomorrow, along with Tetsu and Kirishima who were just beating the ever-living shit out of each other. Overall, the first day of training was shaping up to be quite a drag. By the time their lunch break came around, the students were already feeling the burn. Most of the wannabe heroes were well past their limits by now, but the promise of having to do more of the same didn't boost their morale in the slightest. Being exhausted, Awase groaned after dropping his body to the ground to rest his limbs. Kodai nodded in her usually neutral tone while trying her best to open up a bottle of water. Across the clearing, Midoriya was taking the time to rest his body and mind. The boy found a comfortable patch of ground not too far from where he was training that was just soft enough to be considered dirt. Although he was still grateful that he finally had a quirk of his own. The downside to its versatility meant that his training was going to be just as multifaceted. "How are you holding up?" the stoic voice of Yanagi asked after making her way over to him. Needing to walk around for a bit after spending most of the morning in the exact same spot. "I'll survive," he joked while giving the gray-haired teen a thumbs up. Deciding to take a moment to rest herself, Yanagi sat down on the ground beside the boy and handed him the extra bottle of water that she was carrying along with a protein bar. All Midoriya did was give the girl a quick thank you before sitting himself up. "This training is just as difficult as Kansensei said it would be," the girl stated. "Yeah," the boy nodded. "This may be one of the few times I'm grateful for not having the ability to fly on my own. I'm already having a hard enough time trying to manage my own training. But you've been multitasking the entire morning." "Yeah, that's true," Midoriya laughed after taking a sip from his water bottle. "Pixie Bob said that my main focus this afternoon is going to be my flying. And I have a feeling that she's going to throw some curveballs in there." The two sat in relatively comfortable silence for the next few minutes as they powered through their food. They were only given 4 to 5 minutes to relax before getting back to their training. and they planned on taking full advantage of it, as well as the others. In fact, Honuki was already taking a nap at the other end of clearing from what they could tell. If we keep going at the same rate as we are now, I wonder how strong all of us will get. Inagi suddenly said. Probably a lot. Everyone in our class already has strong quirks. It wouldn't be surprising if some people made some significant changes. Kind of like you, the girl replied. When did you increase the range of your quirk? A 50-meter jump is nothing to sneeze at. To be honest, I have no clue. He shrugged. I was just as surprised as everyone else. Inagi could tell that the boy was being honest about his response. Still, it's pretty impressive. Yeah, it is. It's even crazier when you consider the fact that I haven't had my quirk for very long, Midoriya said in a joking tone. Barely a second later, the boy finally realized the words that came out of his mouth and immediately regretted it. What do you mean you haven't had your quirk for very long and now curious? Inagi asked in a slightly confused tone. Inside of his mind, Midoriya tried to find a remedy to this solution. Unfortunately for him, the only thing that he could think of was either walking away or abruptly changing topics. And both options would do very little in helping him. The boy racked his brain for a couple of seconds before deciding that he should just roll with it. Inagi already knew one of his biggest secrets, so there was really no harm in telling her this one as well. Well, actually, I've only had my quirk for a little over a year, he nervously admitted. Inagi was silent for a moment as she processed that piece of information. Midoriya only had his quirk for a year. That was certainly strange. Never mind the fact that she had never heard of someone developing a quirk so late. She was shocked that he was already this strong in such a short amount of time. All of a sudden, a lot of things started making sense to the girl, especially the possibility that his former quirklessness was a major factor in why he used to cut himself. That makes sense. The boy tilted his head in confusion. You getting a quirk that late explains why you don't have a lot of control over it. The girl continued on. I always wondered why you used it in such a limited way, but now it makes sense why you do that. It's because it's still developing. I guess you're right. It also explains why you're not as arrogant as most people with powerful quirks. Yeah, I'd like to think so. Midoriya awkwardly rubbed the back of his head. Inaga's reaction was definitely a relief to Midoriya. Part of him was absolutely certain that the girl was going to look at him in a weird way. Of course, he didn't expect her to make a big deal out of it. But her simply just accepting the information as it was without any further questions definitely helped release some of the tension in his chest. Still, he's this strong after only a year. That's definitely something to think about. Eventually, lunchtime came to an end in the UA. Students went back to their training, much to their own dismay. A couple of hours after starting back up, Midoriya was soaring through the air like a green rocket. His focus for the time being was his flying. So far in the school year, the boy had been able to improve his time from around 11 minutes to roughly 20 before he needed to take a break. He still doesn't know why exactly he had improved so much in terms of his control over his quirk. But over the last couple of hours he had noticed that moving through the air was slightly easier than it had been in the past. However, ever since the end of semester exam he had noticed that some things were also easier to move than before. I wonder if me using that overdrive technique has something to do with it, he thought to himself before the voice of his instructor caught his ear. Midoriya-kun, come down here for a second, Mandalay called out to the boy who was moments away from passing by them. The telepathic heroine was standing next to his blonde-haired classmate, Nito Monoma. What is it? The boy asked as he landed on the ground in front of them, wondering what the brunette member of the Wildcats could want from him. Monomakin's quirk just timed out and I was wondering if you'd be alright with letting him use yours. We're trying to get his body used to handling a wide array of quirks at the same time, she explained. Yeah, sure, the green-haired boy replied without a second thought. He had always wondered how his classmate would handle his quirk. He had seen him use Yanaga's a couple of times, but so far in the year, there was never an opportunity for the copy quirk user to try out his power. Thank you, Midoriya-kun, Monoma said to the boy with a grin. Naturally, the blonde-haired boy was really looking forward to this. Aside from Todoroki's, Midoriya's quirk was the one that he had been hoping to try out the most. It wasn't out of some lust for power or anything like that. In truth, the boy really just wanted to see what it was like to fly. Non-mutant-type flying quirks were a rarity, right up there with teleportation and healing. So it was only natural that he would jump at the chance to experience that for himself. Without any hesitation, Midoriya held out his hand towards the boy and Monoma wasted no time in placing his over his classmates and activating his quirk. On Midoriya's end, the boy didn't feel anything. He half expected to feel some type of reaction to having his quirk copied, but there was nothing. However, on the other side of the equation, Monoma was definitely feeling it. He thought so. A copy quirk user looked at his hand. Your quirk and Yanagichin's might be the same, but they function differently. What do you mean? Midoriya asked in a curious tone. Well, for starters, you're out of nowhere. Monoma's nose began leaking, his eyes became shot, and the boy suddenly doubled over in pain. Monomek and Mandalay shouted, catching the attention of everyone who was nearby. Unfortunately, neither of the two were able to stop the blonde-haired boy from falling face-first into the dirt. When Monoma finally regained consciousness, the boy was lying on a sofa in a large room. It took a second for his vision to clear up, but once it finally did, he was met with worried expressions of both Midoriya and Mandalay. Actually, it wasn't just those two in the room. There was a smaller kid with a weird hat that he didn't recognize. My goodness, how long was I out? The copy quirk user asked as he tried to sit up. However, that slight bit of movement was enough to cause a sudden spike in the pain that he was still feeling in his head. Whoa, easy there, kid, the woman told him in a soft tone before turning to the child. Kota, can you go grab a bottle of water from the kitchen? Whatever the boy now identified as Kota scowled before shoving his hands in his pockets and walking out of the room. A few seconds went by before the focus was now back onto Monoma in his current condition. How are you feeling? Aside from an ear-splitting headache, I'd say I'm doing rather well, the boy replied to the heroine. What happened to you? Monoma racked his brain for a moment as he tried to find the right words to explain how he felt right before he blacked out. One of the benefits of his quirk was that he was instantly able to use it and know how it operates to a certain extent. And because of that, he had a pretty good idea of what happened. To put it simply, my body couldn't adapt to the quirk very well. What do you mean? The telekinesis user inquired. Whenever I copy someone's quirk, I also copy their body's natural resistance and adaptation to it. For example, when I absorbed Bakugousen's quirk, the muscle tissue in my shoulders and forearms increased. Or when I copied Tsuburabakun's, my lungs briefly expand. That does make a lot of sense, Mandalay commented. But what does it have to do with what happened this time? The blonde-haired teen stayed silent for a moment before glancing over to Midoriya. When it comes to Midoriya-kun's quirk, it was almost as if his body had little to no natural resistance to the actual quirk itself. Barely a few seconds after I activated it, it felt like someone hit me in the back of the head with a hammer. That phrase stuck out to Midoriya quite a bit, mainly because he felt the exact same pain after using overdrive. The boy couldn't help but wonder if him developing a quirk so late had something to do with what Monoma had explained to him. Well, I guess that makes sense. I've known a few people who have had quirks that weren't exactly suited to their bodies. I actually know a guy I went to high school with that had the ability to manipulate plants. The downside was that he was seriously allergic to pollen. Well, that's ironic. Midoriya tried to hold in a slight chuckle. I actually did learn something else before I passed out. Monoma continued. And what is that? Although your quirks are similar, both your power and Yanagichin's don't work the same way. Hers is more area of effect while yours is more direct. I don't understand, the green-haired teen stated. Midoriya was curious though on how exactly his quirk differed from his classmates. He knew that no two quirks were exactly the same, but if the difference was enough for Monoma to notice only after a few seconds, then it must have been significant. To be perfectly frank, I think I could explain it very well. It's a difficult concept to put into words. Honestly, you might have a better chance of asking Blizzard or someone who specializes in telekinetic quirks. Yeah, I can understand that. Midoriya dropped his shoulders a bit. He was already cataloging this newfound information in the back of his head so that he could write it down in his hero notebook later. But he had hoped that his classmate would be able to give him a bit more insight into what he discovered. If Monoma's quirk truly allowed him to instinctively know how a quirk works, then that means the boy might be better at analyzing quirks than he is. Before Midoriya could ask another question, Kota returned to the room with a bottle of water. Mandalay made the decision to let Monoma rest up for a bit before going back to training and told Midoriya to head back outside. Of course, the boy complied with the order, but he made a mental note to talk to his classmates later to get a few more details on this matter. Once training for the day was over, the Hero Course students were finally able to sit back and relax for a bit. Of course, most of them were a bit peeved that they had to cook their own dinner after pushing their bodies to the limit for the entire day. But overall, they were just too tired to really care at this point. Oh my god, I don't know if this curry is actually good, or if I'm just so hungry that my tongue doesn't actually care about flavor anymore, Tetsu said as he inhaled his food like it was his first meal in days. Let's just be glad that it's actually edible. Honuki followed up while also shoveling his food into his mouth. Seriously, I don't even care that my hands are still cramping up. Kendo giggled. Aside from the three of them, their table consisted of Midoriya, Takagi, Yanagi, Shiozaki, Awase, and Tsunotori. It was pretty obvious by this point in the school year that this was their default group of friends. But neither of them were complaining. They had a pretty good dynamic and everyone got along really well. Man, Pony, you were really kicking it into high gear today, weren't you? You did like 200 laps around the entire camp this afternoon, said Awase. Yes, my feet still have much exhaustion. Might need replacing horseshoes after camp. The American teen pointed down to her hooves. What about Takagi? She was all over the place literally. I'm just glad that I didn't lose any limbs today. The girl gave a toothy smirk while scarfing down her third plate. To her right, Midoriya was busy trying to keep the world from spinning too fast. One of the side effects that came with overusing his quirk for flying were sudden episodes of nausea. And since he had practically used it non-stop for the entire afternoon, he was having a difficult time keeping his food down. Across the table, Yanagi seemed to be in the same boat. The gray-haired teen had her hand over her exposed eye and was taking very slow bites. You doing okay? Izuku Takagi asked her boyfriend. Now that she thought about it, the two of them never did clarify exactly what they were to each other. They were dating, that much was plain as day. But were they on the boyfriend-girlfriend level yet? Maybe she should get around to doing that sometime soon. Preferably when the boy is not minutes away from passing out at the table. Yeah, I'm fine. Out of nowhere, Take's hand popped off her arm and placed itself on Midoriya's forehead. "HMI, you don't appear to have a fever, but you do look pretty hot to me." The others were quick to pick up on the girl's not-so-subtle innuendo. "Do you need to rest your head on my lap?" At the other table, Minta began violently coughing. Midoriya's furious blush was enough to get a few laughs from everyone around them. Although he should really be used to this by now, Take's antics were still enough to throw him off guard, especially when she would ask him stuff like that completely out of the blue, and in front of other people. "Oh yeah, that reminds me," Take suddenly blurted out and looked over at the other end of the table. "Hey, Ibara." "Yeah," the gyrate quirk user answered. The boy was still fiddling with his camera after finishing his first plate. Evidently, he had a thing for photography, and a friend of his in the journalism club asked him to take pictures of their time at the camp. "What kind of girls are you into?" Suddenly all movement in the area stopped at the girl's question. All of the boys were wondering why she asked him something like that out of the blue, but the girls had a pretty good idea of what was going on. Ibara blushed. "What kind of girls are you into?" she repeated. "I overheard some third-year girls talking in the bathroom during lunch the other day, and apparently they want to get a piece of you." Take could almost feel Yanaga's freezing cold gaze on the back of her head, but she decided to have some more fun with this before calling it quits. "Wow, you're kinda putting me on the spot here." The red-faced teen sputtered out while scratching his cheek. "Seriously, is every guy in one be a secret ladies' man?" Kaminari whispered to Minta in a slightly jealous tone. "Hey, while we're on the subject of Ibara," Kamakiri decided that now was a good time to put in his 2 cents. "Hey, Bakugo," what the ashen blonde teen shouted back. "Ibara here really wants to know your opinion on something. Do you think that art is an explosion?" "What?" PFFFT Take couldn't stop herself from laughing out loud. "I hate you, Kamakiri, very much." Ibara dropped his head in defeat, although he actually did want to know what the answer to that question was. He wasn't dumb enough to directly ask the person who could blow him clean of the face of the earth. "You gotta admit, that was pretty funny," Honuki chimed in, also failing to hide his own laughter. "Less talking and more eating," Aizawa suddenly announced after popping up out of nowhere. "You remedial students only have an hour before your classes start, so if you want any time to relax tonight, I suggest you start stuffing your faces." "Yes, sensei," the aforementioned students weakly replied. In addition to Tsubiraba, Kiwaro, Bondo, and Komori from 1B, Bakugo, Todoroki, Kirishima, Kaminari, Ashido, Shiro, Ayama, and Uraraka were the students from 1A who failed to pass their exams, which meant that in addition to their regular training during the day, the 12 of them had to go through supplementary lessons that were going to be led by Aizawa. Unfortunately for them, given the man's reputation as a nocturnal hero, they could very well be up for the rest of the night. Needless to say, Midoriya and the others did not envy them one bit. Not too long after dinner was finally over, the non-remedial students were given the rest of the night to relax and recover their stamina. Most everyone was either in the lounge area talking to one another or in their rooms playing on their phones. For Midoriya and Take, the 2 of them along with their usual group of friends were all sitting around one of the tables and talking about random topics. They were in the middle of a rather interesting conversation about hero teams before the green-haired boy had to excuse himself to head over to the restroom. Just as Midoriya turned the corner onto the next hall, the boy was greeted with a person that he knew all too well. Much to his dismay, he found himself standing almost face-to-face with none other than Katsuki Bakugo. The boy was one of the remedial students since his team ended up failing their exams, and judging by the direction that he was traveling, he was on his way there. Midoriya had hoped the explosion quirk user would just walk by without saying a word, but obviously luck was not on his side this particular evening. Deku, the blonde boy with the explosive personality, said in a highly aggressive tone, loud enough to catch his attention, but not loud enough to be heard anywhere else in the hall. Against his better judgment, Midoriya decided to humor his former classmate and respond. "Hello Bakugo, what can I help you with?" he said in a slightly sarcastic tone. "You got a lot of nerve, you useless piece of shit. What did I do to bruise your ego this time?" If they weren't standing in the middle of the hallway not too far away from the nearest adult, Bakugo would have been liable to set off a small-scale explosion right in Midoriya's face. But the ashen blonde teen already had one issue that he was dealing with, that being his pending remedial classes, and he definitely didn't want to get scolded by the teachers about blasting the smug attitude out of this worthless loser. "How dare you make a fool out of me in front of everyone? You think that just because you've improved a little with that shitty quirk of yours that you can humiliate me? Wow, I can't believe that I actually wanted to be friends with this guy not too long ago. No, that's not what I think at all." Midoriya's tone was now dry and almost apathetic. To the outside person, one would say that the boy's personality completely changed since the beginning of this conversation. Apparently that was the wrong answer, because it was enough to make Bakugo's boil. This kid used to shake in fear at the mere sight of him. Now he's talking to him as if he was a minor inconvenience. "Let me make one thing clear, Deku." Bakugo almost growled. "It doesn't matter how strong you get with that quirk of yours. You're just a piece of trash, an insect beneath my feet. No matter what, I will be the #1 hero. Not you." Cool, Midoriya shrugged almost nonchalantly, where Bakugo blinked a couple of times. "Go ahead and be the #1 hero if that's what you really want. It doesn't matter to me. Don't give me that shit, you nerd. As long as I can remember, you used to run around claiming that you were going to be just like All Might one day. Don't act like that you've changed all of a sudden and that you don't care. Why on earth would I want to be like him? There are other aspects of heroics besides solving everything with your fists and wearing a fake smile all the time. That was enough to make Bakugo pause for a moment. Did worthless Deku actually just say something negative about All Might? That was impossible. The shitty loser revered him almost like a god. For him to say something like that was definitely not normal. But more importantly, how dare this bug talk down about the symbol of peace? Out of instinct, the ashen blonde teen attempted to grab a hold of Midoriya's shirt collar, but he didn't even make it halfway through his motion before his body froze up and locked in that position. Bakugo's eyes then traveled upwards only to be met with a cold gaze that was unlike anything he had seen before. Listen, Bakugo. Midoriya leaned in a bit. I'm not competing with you. I don't care about being the strongest. I don't care about being the best. And I certainly don't care about something ridiculous like being the #1 hero. You can hold on to that childish goal of yours all you want. But understand this. Bakugo's body then began to move on its own and the boy suddenly found himself standing straight up with his arms at his sides. I'm not putting up with your ego anymore. Either learn to get over yourself or continue falling behind the rest of your classmates. But whatever you do, leave me out of it. Following that last statement, Midoriya released his hold on the boy and began walking past him. A now furious Bakugo then turned around and barked at the back of the boy's head. You think you're so damn cool. I wonder how your classmates would act if they found out that you were a freak up until recently. And I wonder how the school would act if they found out how you used to treat freaks like me. Midoriya immediately shot back. Bakugo simply remained silent as Midoriya turned the next corner to continue his way to the bathroom. He'll admit that Deku may have gotten him the best of time on this particular conversation, but that didn't make the explosion quirk user any less furious. At the other end of the hallway just around the corner, Ochako Uraraka was trying to make sense of the interaction that she had just witnessed. Like her classmate, she too was on her way to the mandatory remedial class. But just when she turned onto the next hall, she caught sight of Midoriya and Bakugo talking. It was no secret that Bakugo hated the green-haired boy from 1B. The guy made it obvious every chance he got. And judging by the look on Midoriya's face just a minute ago, the feeling was definitely mutual. Still, the girl was just close enough to hear what the two of them were saying. And she'd be lying if she said that her curiosity wasn't piqued. Especially when it came to what Bakugo mentioned about Midoriya being a freak. However, as much as the girl wanted to get some more information on this, she had to hurry up and get to her class. Something's definitely up with those two. Bakugo-san I get, but Midoriya-san is usually so nice to people. I wonder why there's so much bad between them. All Midoriya could see around him was a vast plain of darkness. There was no light, no sound, nothing other than his own body floating in an endless miasma of pitch black. Midoriya wasn't one who dreamt very often. In actuality, it was a rare occurrence for the boy altogether. HMPH, a sound from behind him suddenly caught his attention. In reaction, Midoriya quickly rotated himself around, only to meet with the sight of another person. Actually, saying that it was a person was a bit of a stretch. Before him was a human-like silhouette cloaked in gray mist. It took him a second, but he could clearly see that the figure had to be a woman based on slight curves that shaped her form. Her features were indistinguishable except for one thing, her eyes. Much like him, the figure possessed a pair of emerald green orbs that seemed to be boring a hole into his soul. But unlike him, these eyes were different. If he had to describe them, they were cold, vain, and almost judgmental. He couldn't see the person's face, yet it was obvious that they were looking at him with a slight bit of contempt. And for some reason, she seemed vaguely familiar. Who are you? Midoriya asked hesitantly. Something told him that he should choose his words carefully so as to not anger them. HMPH was the only response that the figure gave as she turned her head, almost as if she was disgusted for some reason. Before the boy could say another word, the massive gray mist dissipated in an instant, leaving him all alone in the void. The morning training session came and went for the Wood Heroes of UA. Just like the day before, the students had been rigorously training their quirks and pushing themselves to the limit. Not only were they starting to feel the wear and tear from today's training, but the fatigue from yesterday's session was still howling in their muscles. Thankfully, the future heroes were granted a respite from their labors. Shortly after lunch was over, everyone was told to head over to the base of the nearby cliffside and await further instructions from their teachers. All right, students, listen up, Kan shouted. We're taking a break from your quirk training this afternoon and are going to switch things up a bit. What do you mean? One of the students followed up. Today you maggots are going to be going up against each other in a game of quirk dodgeball, Tiger impatiently announced while flexing his muscles. Quirk dodgeball, Shiozaki repeated curiously. What are the rules? Asked Honuki. As the name suggests, all of you will be participating in a few games of dodgeball in which you are allowed to use your quirks. Aizawa explained. Standard rules still apply. If you get hit by a ball, you're out. If you catch a ball, then the person who threw it is out and you get to recall any member of your team that was taken out prior to that. You'll be split up into teams of 10 and both opposing teams will start at either end of the playing field. Use your quirks as necessary for mobility, offense, and defense. However, to show some restraint, the man finished off by giving a sharp look towards a certain ashen blonde student. Kirishima was the first to raise his hand. So where's the playing field? Right here, Pixie Bob announced before activating her quirk. The students watched as the woman created dozens of large pillars of various sizes over an area about half the size of a soccer field. Judging by what they could see, it would be hard for anyone without a high mobility quirk to maneuver in between the obstacles. How they were supposed to play a game of dodgeball and there was a mystery. This is gonna be awesome. Subiraba smirked. Like we said before, you're going to be split up into 4 groups of 10. Ken said after regaining everyone's focus. The first group will be Takage, Shinsu, Shoji, Hagakure, Oase, Bondo, Ashido, Yanagi, Rin and Shiozaki. The aforementioned students looked around at one another for a moment. In terms of fighting strength they were pretty balanced. And they had some team members who were pretty good when it came to mobility. The only wild card was Shinsu. In Takage's mind, his quirk wasn't exactly the best for this kind of scenario. Their opponents will be Uraraka, Takoyami, Tetsu, Kodai, Ajiro, Tsunotori, Minta, Shota, Midoriya and Bakugo. Almost immediately Midoriya and Bakugo simultaneously did a double take towards one another. The two of them were on the same team that didn't bode well in the slightest. Any semblance of team chemistry their group might have had suddenly flew out the window after hearing that. However, unbeknownst to the two former classmates this was no mistake. Aizawa had purposely out them together. When it came to Bakugo, the nocturnal hero could identify quite a few major flaws in how he operated. One of which being his reluctance to work with others. During the exam, he and his team would have fared much better if he bothered to try and work with them instead of attempting to do everything on his own. The second issue that was apparent to the man was that for whatever reason Bakugo absolutely hated Midoriya. He had no clue what the reason behind this was, but every time the green-haired boy from 1B was brought up in conversation around him, he would become noticeably more irritable than usual. This game would be a good measure of whether or not he learned anything from his failures. Now that the first 2 teams have been announced, you all have 10 minutes to come up with a strategy before we start. Good luck. Alright Midoriya, so what's the plan? Tetsu said to the green-haired boy as their group huddled together. And the hell makes you think that Deku is in charge? Shitty eyelashes Bakugo immediately protested. Because he's the strongest one here, he's good at coming up with plans. His quirk is perfect for this kind of thing and unlike Yao's actually a team player. The silver-haired boy replied without any hesitation. Although Tetsu normally wasn't one to judge people he didn't know all that well, Bakugo was a bit of a special case. His introduction to the boy at the start of the school year left a pretty bad taste in his mouth. Especially how he seemed to have no trouble calling Midoriya a freak for allegedly being quirkless. After that, nothing he had seen from the ashen blonde teen was enough to warrant his respect. It was still a mystery to him why someone like Kirishima enjoyed being around the guy so much. Somehow Bakugo was able to keep his temper under control just enough to not blast Tetsu into a crater. He was starting to get sick and tired of these 1B rejects thinking that they could get away with talking to him so recklessly. Like hell I'm going to let that useless nerd boss me around, the explosion quirk user declared. Midoriya, be honest with me. Has this guy always been this angry? Tsunotori whispered to her classmates in her native tongue. Maybe she could just chalk it up to one of the many cultural differences between here and her home country. But the American girl really had a hard time wrapping her head around how someone like Bakugo could be a hero candidate. Aside from his powerful quirk, there was nothing heroic about him in her opinion. The guy was a walking time bomb with a temper to match. Back home, no one like him would have ever been allowed to enter a hero school without some serious counseling and reconditioning. But she assumed that the people of Japan just had different views on the subject. So I take it that you want to be in charge then? Shota dryly asked, already dreading having to deal with the 1A boy. I don't want to be in charge. I am in charge as long as you extras do what I say. Well, beat those other losers. And you really expect us to do what you want after you just called all of us extras? Tetsu deadpanned. Guys, just let Bakugo be in charge. We don't really have the time to argue about it, Midoriya suggested while pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew something like this was going to happen. Are you sure? Yeah, he nodded. It's good to see that you still know your place. The ashen blonde teen gave the boy a city eye. All Midoriya did in response was roll his eyes before letting Bakugo tell them their strategy. Although a part of him hated the idea of taking directions from his former tormentor, he was mature enough to put his personal feelings aside for the time being. At the very least, he hoped that this was going to be over quickly. Alright team, so how are we going to play this? Takage looked to the other members of her group. They have a lot of heavy hitters in their group, especially Midoriya. I think we should make taking him out our first priority since his quirk is perfect for this. Oase commented. Bakugo's going to be an issue too. Rin stated. Yeah, you're right about that. Takage began rubbing her hand on her chin. Their team is pretty stacked. On paper, it was easy to say that Midoriya's team had the advantage. Aside from him and Bakugo, they had Tokoyami and Uraraka as well, which meant that they were pretty well balanced in terms of range. Be that as it may, Takage was never one to shy away from a challenge. Not only was she really looking forward to once again getting the chance to go up against Midoriya. With the people on their team, victory was almost a guarantee if they played their cards right. I vote that we play the defensive game, Rin suggested. There's a limited number of balls anyway, let's just wait it out for a bit until they don't have the chance to attack us. That doesn't really matter since Midoriya can just levitate as many balls as he wants. Oh, don't worry about Izuku. I've got the perfect strategy to take him out. And it involves you, Ghosty. The green-haired girl practically beamed confidence while grinning towards Yanagi. All right, Red-Eyed and Ragdoll shouted in a joyous tone towards the students. The second the woman lowered her hand, most of the students acted as one would predict. Some of them rushed to the center of the playing field where the balls were at while others intentionally stayed behind. Bakugo of course flew straight in and started sending explosion-powered balls flying in every direction while laughing like a maniac. In the span of a couple of seconds, he managed to knock out Ishido and Shinsu with very little effort. While that was going on, a few other students were making their moves. On the other side of the field, Ajiro and Uraraka were doing their best to avoid getting nailed by Shiozaki. The girl was using her vines to throw multiple balls at once, which proved to be quite a difficult situation. Takoyami was using his dark shadow to maneuver between pillars with some rather impressive speed. And in the most hilarious turn of events yet, a waste managed to get Tetsu out in one throw. By a sheer stroke of dumb luck, the Weld Quirk user activated his power right as the ball hit him in the face. According to Mandalay, this technically counted as a catch, which meant that the headband-wearing teen was still in the game. However, there was one thing that left everyone scratching their heads, and that was Midoriya. The boy quite literally wasn't doing anything at all. He was simply floating in the air above the playing field and watching. Unknown to the others, Bakugo had directed him to simply stay up there and keep an eye out. Midoriya had no reason to deny it, so he just rolled with the de facto group leader's demands. Yet, that certainly didn't stop him from having his own plan. Unbeknownst to everyone else, while the madness was in full swing, Kodai was shrinking as many dodgeballs as she could and stuffing them into her pockets. Once the black-haired girl had a decent amount, she circled back around to where she was in Midoriya's line of sight. After enlarging the captured dodgeballs quite a bit, the girl gave him a thumbs up and Midoriya began levitating them into the air. The moment they were all in position, Kodai activated her quirk once again and the dodgeballs all grew to an absolutely ridiculous size, about the same as a car. Without a second thought, the green-haired boy dropped the balls out of the air and chaos quickly ensued as the other team began retreating from the giant red balls of death. Unfortunately, the boy wasn't able to enjoy the success of his plan before narrowly avoiding a dodgeball that came at him from below. He looked down to see none other than Yanagi. The girl was floating several balls around her body somewhat like a protective shield. The boy didn't even have enough time to think before another 2 balls were sent flying at him. Midoriya knew that the range of the girl's quirk was limited to about 30 meters, so the sooner he got away from her the better. As he began ascending further into the air, a strong force flanked him on his right arm. The second he turned around, Midoriya was narrowly able to dodge another dodgeball, however this one was different. Right after it passed him, the thing came circling back around at a pretty impressive speed. Just when he was about to begin maneuvering through the air, another force struck him from behind. "Sorry Izuku, but you're too much of a threat to leave alone," the floating head of Takage shouted at him from close by. Immediately after that, the girl encased his entire body in one of her scale storms. But that was only part one of this attack. What Midoriya hadn't noticed was the other set of pieces above him that was mere moments away from making contact. Nor could he see the lone dodgeball coming at him from below. Over the last few weeks, Takage had been working on splitting her focus to conduct multiple attacks at once. It wasn't easy by any means. In fact, it took all of her brain power to literally move her body in separate directions across multiple areas at once. But now she was finally starting to get the hang of it. And there was no better person to test it on than like Midoriya, whose quirk was also versatile enough to counter it. Back with Midoriya, the boy was quickly trying to think of a way out of this situation. He was literally pinned down from all sides and was about to get taken out of the game. Unfortunately for him, this would prove to be futile. What the boy didn't realize was that this was all just one giant diversion. Instead of actually planning to hit him with either her second wave of pieces or the dodgeball, Takage had other ideas. Just when it looked like Midoriya was distracted, the girl sent on her pieces flying at him and nailed him in the side of the head. Without that helmet on, he's pretty much a sitting duck. The girl grinned outwardly. As expected, the sudden impact was enough to disrupt Midoriya's control on his quirk. As the boy began losing altitude, Yanagi finally took her shot. The gray-haired girl sent about 7 dodgeballs his way and connected with each and every one of them. Luckily, the boy just so happened to be floating a few meters above one of the nearby pillars, so his landing was relatively safe. "Midoriya-kun, you're out," Mandalay shouted from the sideline. Very impressed by the teamwork that she just saw. "I almost forgot that Midoriya-kun actually has a weakness," said Kendo to a few of the 1B students. It was easy to forget that the powerhouse of their class could be taken down with one good blow to the head. "Alright, good job, Ghosty." Takage gave Yanagi a thumbs up. "I can't believe that actually worked," the poltergeist user thought to herself. Barely a few minutes later, the game to an end with Takage's team coming out as the victors. Thanks to some impressive skill on Shiozaki's part to take down Takoyami and a few others, they were able to take a good lead. And much to everyone's surprise, Toru Hagakure, the invisible girl from 1A, managed to sneak up behind Bakugo and take him out of the game. Much to the explosion quirk user's annoyance. The rest of the afternoon was spent like this, and the students were more than happy to take a break from their hellish training to have a little bit of fun. Once training for the day was complete, the students were finally given some time to relax before they needed to start making dinner. Well, everyone minus those in the remedial class. Those lucky souls were tasked with helping Tiger and Pixie Bob get the supplies from the kitchen and storage shack. After changing out of their uniforms, Midoriya, Takagi, and Tetsu were all walking together to the lounge area to join their classmates. The trio were seconds away from turning the corner when they just so happened to run into Shinsu of all people. The boy looked particularly exhausted out of everyone. From what they had seen, Aizawa had the general studies student focusing more on physical training rather than quirk-related exercises, which wasn't all that surprising considering his rather frail frame. "What's up, Shinsu? Good work out there today." Tetsu politely greeted the boy with a friendly wave. "HMPH," the purple-haired teen scoffed. That rude action was enough to rub Takagi the wrong way. Sure, the boy didn't seem overly friendly, but that wasn't an excuse to be rude to people for no reason. "Geez dude, what's your problem?" "None of your business," he shot back. "Wow, I guess the girls from 1A were right. You are kind of a..." "Excuse me, you heard me." Takagi scowled with her hands on her hips. "The entire time we've been out here you've been avoiding everyone else. You know, if you do end up getting into the hero course you're gonna have to get rid of that attitude. And why should I care about what you have to say? Last time I checked, I'm the one who won our match in the sports festival." "Yeah, you sure did," she shrugged. "But now that we all know how your quirk works, the chances of that happening again are slim." For some reason, the girl's words seemed to strike a nerve with Shinsu. Sure, his quirk was strong, but when it came to fighting, it was pretty one-dimensional. "Well, I'm sorry. Not all of us can have super flashy and versatile quirks like you people do. Some of us actually have to learn how to get by with what we have." "Okay, I think it's best that we all just calm down," Midoriya said nervously as he attempted to defuse what was already shaping up to be an intense moment. "What are you talking about?" Tetsu immediately followed up. "People like you would never understand what it's like. You were all blessed with awesome and heroic quirks that people didn't ridicule all the time. It must have been so nice having your powers put up on a pedestal and being praised for them." Shinsu continued. "So what, you have a grudge against people with strong quirks or something? That's kind of hypocritical coming from someone with the power to brainwash people at the drop of a hat." "Yes, my quirk is pretty good on the surface. But imagine growing up with something that caused everyone to automatically label you as villainous and having to put up with that for your entire life." Oh yeah, this dude definitely had a chip on his shoulder, and a big one at that. It was no secret that society nowadays was what one would call hero-centric, and people would have their abilities categorized into either two main areas. But even though the 1B trio could understand where the guy was coming from, that didn't give him the right to be so rude. Being around you people makes me feel even more jealous. All of you probably grew up pretty easy and let all that praise go to your head. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky. With my quirk, people told me that I'm gonna end up as a villain. There were a lot of times that I wished that I was born quirkless. It probably would have been better." That statement was enough to make something click in Midoriya's head. He honestly couldn't believe that someone could say something like that so casually, like it was some sort of joke. To be frank, he was having a hard time wrapping his head around it. To say that I'd rather have been born quirkless as opposed to having a powerful brainwashing quirk was just ridiculous. His mind quickly flashed back to all of the torment that he had suffered before his quirk developed. All of the mental and physical anguish that he had to go through just because he was powerless. He couldn't even count how many times he cried himself to sleep at night wishing for a strong quirk like Shinsu's. And here this boy was, being ungrateful for the power that he had. Just before Midoriya could voice his opinion, Takagi decided to speak up. "Wow, that has to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard." What? Shinsu shot the girl a confused look. "You should be grateful that you even have a quirk to begin with, especially a strong one like yours. Not everyone is born with a quirk, and those that don't have one have a much harder time than you ever did." "Please, you have no idea what you're talking about." "Actually I do," she retorted. The girl was now very annoyed and it was showing. "A couple of friends of mine were born quirkless, and their lives are far from easy. In fact, I doubt you'd even last a day in their shoes. So before you go around saying something stupid like that, you should probably look up the suicide rates for quirkless people. I guarantee you that they'd be more than happy to switch places with you." Midoriya was shocked by what he was witnessing. This may have actually been the first time in his life that had ever seen someone outright defend quirkless people and their lives that didn't have to go through that pain themselves. Whatever. Instead of letting people's ignorant comments get to you, you should focus more on learning how your quirk can save lives. I mean, we have a guy in our class whose quirk is only good for blowing things up. That's way more villainous and dangerous than brainwashing. Maybe you should learn to think for yourself in the future, was the last thing the girl said to him before walking off in the direction of the lounge. Although he wouldn't admit it, Shinsu was having a hard time coming up with a response to Takagi's impromptu speech. He still felt like his opinions were justified, but had be hard-pressed to deny what the girl was saying might have been true. Either way, there was nothing more that he had to say. Electing to get out of this painfully awkward situation, Midoriya and Tetsu began walking away to go rejoin their classmate. However, the green-haired boy took a second to look back at the hero course hopeful. He may not have fully understood what it was like to grow up a quirk labeled as villainous, and he could sympathize with his apparent feelings towards those blessed with powerful quirks from birth. especially because he still had similar thoughts himself, even nowadays. But he definitely didn't appreciate the boy's earlier comment. Either way, he was glad that Takagi was the one to speak up instead of him, because his choice of words might not have been as nice. After dinner was over, Midoriya was laying down on his futon with the other members of his class. Things were quickly heating up as some of the boys decided to get into an arm wrestling match to see who was strongest. And Tetsu was on his way to a rather impressive undefeated streak. The boy was halfway tempted to join in on the fun before a text notification popped up on his phone. T-Rex, you busy? Rabbit, no, why? T-Rex, meet me outside the back entrance in 5 minutes. Rabbit, okay. True to his word. 5 minutes later, Midoriya was standing outside the back entrance of the lodge waiting for Takagi to show up. The students still had a full hour left until their designated curfew, so it wasn't like he had to worry about staying out too late. However, he was curious as to why the girl suddenly asked him to meet up with her. Luckily, he didn't have to wait long to get an answer. Hey, Takagi greeted him with a warm smile. The girl was dressed in her usual nightly attire of a pair of running shorts and a loose-fitting t-shirt, along with her hair tied up in a ponytail. Midoriya would be lying if he said that he didn't enjoy this look. Hey, he greeted her back. Sorry for taking so long, but that Ishido girl from 1A was telling us a pretty funny story and I lost track of time. It's fine, I wasn't waiting long, he told her. So is something wrong? Nope, I just thought that since we have a full hour until lights out, we could spend a bit of alone time together. Oh okay, the boy nodded. Takagi did have a point. The two of them hadn't really spent any time together where it was just the two of them ever since the camp started. With all the training and the few moments of downtime that they had, it was rather difficult. So what did you have in mind? Takagi closed the distance between the two of them and proceeded to grab the boy by his hand. There's a clearing a bit further into the woods. She pointed in the direction of the nearby mountain. I asked Ragdoll earlier if it's okay for us to go there and she said that it was cool as long as we made it back by curfew. Really? Heck yeah, the girl cheered before pulling him in that direction. Simon, let's go. It only took a few minutes for the young couple to locate the clearing. It was a simple plot of land in the middle of the woods that was devoid of trees which just so happened to be close to the nearby stream. During the daytime it provided a lovely view of the surrounding area. But at night, it had that cheesy romance movie vibe that Takagi was looking for. This place is pretty nice. Midoriya voiced his thoughts while looking around. Told Takagi giggled before planting herself on the ground and pulling Midoriya down with her. The two of them stayed quiet for about a minute and just gazed up at the stars. Living in the city for most of their lives, it was easy to forget how nice the night sky looked without all the extra light pollution. But now that they were out in the middle of the woods far away from the nearest metropolitan area, they were actually able to identify the constellations. So, how's your training going so far? Takagi started off the conversation. Pretty intense to be honest. He laughed. Pixie Bob is really trying to keep me on my toes. How about you? Pretty much the same. I'm honestly not used to using my quirk in such an extreme way for that long. Stamina is still my biggest issue, but I think that I'm starting to improve on speed. She answered back with a shrug. That's good to hear. Midoriya smiled back. Yeah, I think I'll be able to come up with some good ways to use my quirk by the end of the week. But since we're on the subject, when the heck did you improve so much? You were on fire out there today. I honestly have no clue, was his reply. I think using that overdrive technique Fubikasen told me about got me over some type of wall. But I can't be too sure. He'll admit that I'm kind of jealous, though. If you keep going like that, the rest of us will be playing catch-up pretty soon. She teased. I don't know about all that. Midoriya blushed a bit. No matter what, the boy still couldn't get used to being complimented like this, especially about his quirk. He was doing a lot better lately when it came to not being so critical of people who only acknowledge him for his powers. But a part of him was still a bit skeptical. Now that they were getting a little bit more comfortable with each other, Takagi decided to turn up the heat a bit. The girl readjusted herself and laid her head down in the boy's lap while sprawling her body out over the soft grass. Once she was in this position, not only did she have a better view of the sky above them, she also had front row seats to see just how flustered Midoriya suddenly became. What's wrong? Did you want to be the one to lay down? Instead she gave him a toothy smirk. And I know, I just wasn't expecting this is all. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Has anyone ever told you that you have some really comfortable thighs? And I know, well it's true. In fact, I'm tempted to stay like this for the entire night. I don't think that's a good idea. We might get in trouble. Who said anything about staying out here? I was thinking that I would take you back to the girls' room and wrap myself around you like a baby koala. Yeah, I don't think that Shiozaki-san or Kendo-san would agree to that. Now it was his turn to make the jokes. The two continued joking around like this for the next few minutes. After that, an idea popped into Takagi's head. The girl then pulled her phone out of her pocket and opened it up to the photo app. Hey, check this out. Midoriya grabbed hold of the device to get a better look at what she wanted him to see. To his surprise, it was a picture of the two of them. More specifically, one from their first official date. It was right after the young couple had left the udon stand and were holding hands on their way to check out some other areas. It's one of the photos that Aunt Nimiri sent to my dad when she and my sister were stalking us. I thought it looked pretty good, so I saved it on my phone, along with a few others. Yeah, it's a nice picture, he said honestly. You're really cute in it. Takagi admittedly had to fight back a bit of blush herself. There was just something about receiving a compliment from Midoriya that made her feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Slowly but surely she could tell that he was getting more comfortable around her. "Hey, now that I think about it, you never really talk about your family that much," the girl suddenly announced. He looked down at the brunette. "I talk about my family all the time, but you hardly ever mention yours. The only thing I can remember is that your mom has a similar quirk to yours and that your dad works in America." The boy replayed every conversation between the two of them that he could remember. Takagi was right, he hardly ever talked about his mom or dad. If at all, there's really not that much to tell. After all, my family isn't nearly as interesting as yours. Still, what are they like? I'm actually really curious. Well, Midoriya started off as he tried to find the right words to describe his parents. "My dad's pretty easygoing, and he enjoys traveling around the country and antiquing." Takagi had to try really hard to hold back her laughter after hearing that. "What about your mom?" "My mom is me. Mom's kind of emotional. She has a habit of getting too mushy at times, but she loves cooking." It was easy for the girl to pick up on the not so subtle change in his tone. For some reason, Midoriya spoke very differently when it came to his mother as opposed to his father, which was a bit odd in her opinion. "Are you two not very close?" she asked without really thinking. "We've hit a bit of a rough spot recently because of some stuff that happened a while ago." Was all the girl felt like saying before deciding to switch topics. "I understand. I'm kind of the same way with my dad." "Really?" he said in a surprised tone. "Yeah, I hardly ever see him nowadays since he works so much. He just became the lead engineer in his department a couple of years ago, so he's rarely ever home. If I'm lucky, I'll only get to see him at home twice a week." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be." She shrugged. "He makes time for me whenever he can, but I understand that he's got an important job. Plus, he did spend a lot of time making my hero costume after all, so I can't be too mad at him." "That's actually really cool." "I know, right? The only sucky part was that I had to get my haircut to make the special fibers so my suit will activate with my quirk." So that's how her hero costume works with her quirk, Midoriya thought to himself. He always wondered how heroes with transformation quirks got their suits to react along with their bodies. But if it was made out of their DNA, then it just made a lot more sense. "Hey, Setsu." Midoriya's follow-up question was cut off when a pair of soft lips suddenly came crashing into his own. In that last couple of seconds, Takagi decided to get the drop on him. It was her plan all along to try and sneak in a kiss before the two had to go to bed tonight, and this option seemed like the most entertaining. Without any warning, the lizard tail splitter user detached her head from her body and brought it right up to his. Thankfully, Midoriya seemed to be thinking about something at that very moment, so he wasn't really paying attention. Time pretty much came to a halt for the two of them as their brains were processing what was going on. More specifically, Midoriya was trying his best not to burst into flames, and Takagi had to stop herself from letting her hands wander. Eventually the two parted, revealing a one set of flushed cheeks for the girl and one beet red face for the boy. "Sorry for doing that out of the blue, but the opportunity was just too good to pass up." Takagi giggled. "It's okay. Now what do we have going on over here?" a female voice suddenly said from behind the trees. "Aw shit." The students couldn't help but jump at the unexpected interruption. Hesitantly, the two of them turned their heads to the left to see none other than Pixie Bob standing there in her pajamas with a very amused look on her face. "Oh my, two little kittens decided to sneak off and have a bit of private time? Hey, how naughty." The blonde-haired heroine cooed. "What do you mean sneak off? Ragdoll said that it was okay to come out here as long as we made it back by curfew." Takagi shot back, choosing to ignore the fact that she and Midoriya were just caught in the act. "Yeah, you were right about that. Tomoko sent me out here to check up on you guys, but I certainly wasn't expecting to walk in on this." Midoriya would have tried to plead their innocence, but there were two problems with that. The first was that his head was still spinning from actually being kissed by a girl barely a minute ago, and the second was that he had no idea how long the woman was standing there. "Oh, don't worry, lovebirds, I won't mention this to anyone else. Well, just keep this between us. There's nothing wrong with two kittens having a little fun, especially when it's during their free time." "Thank you." Midoriya breathed out a sigh of relief. "That being said, it's almost time for bed, so we'll walk you back to your rooms." "Cool." Takagi shrugged before reattaching her head to her body. She may have been playing it cool on the outside, but on the inside the girl's heart was beating 100 miles an hour. Eventually, their night came to a premature end when the two brunettes were escorted back to their rooms, where they remained for the rest of the night. While everyone had no trouble falling asleep, it took Midoriya a bit longer due to the fact that his mind was still reeling from actually having been kissed by Takagi. It was a welcome surprise, that much was true, but the green-haired boy never really imagined his first kiss coming from a disembodied head, so that was something to think about in and of itself. However, this sudden act of affection guaranteed that he wasn't going to be falling asleep anytime soon. It all happened so fast. The third day of camp started out so well for the first-year students of UA's hero course. Morning training was as tough as they expected. Lunch was actually pretty good. The hero course hopefuls even got a chance to have a friendly relay race against one another during the latter part of the afternoon. Not only that, but dinner was rather delicious. The day was shaping up to be their most fun one yet. Not too long after everyone was done eating, the Wildcats announced that they were all going to be participating in a test of courage, which pretty much boiled down to both classes trying to scare the piss out of each other in the middle of the woods. Class 1B ended up being the first class to act as the scarecrew and wasted no time getting into their positions. Takagi herself was pretty stoked to have a chance for her and Midoriya to sneak off together in the woods while no one was looking. However, Shiozaki and Kendo were already 2 steps ahead of her. After some deliberation, Yanagi ended up drawing the short straw and was chosen as their designated third wheel. Once everything got rolling, the 1B students were admittedly having a good time torturing their fellow students, especially Takagi herself. As it turns out, people get pretty terrified when they see a disembodied head roll from out of the bushes. After Hagakure and Gyro finally regained what was left of their spines, the 2 1A girls began making the journey back to the front of the trail. From what they were told, there was going to be a 5-minute interval between each pair of students, meaning that the trio still had some time before the next group. However, everything changed after that. Out of nowhere, the smell of smoke rapidly began filling the air. Curious as to what could have caused this, Takagi chose to go check it out. If there was a brush fire, then they needed to hurry up and warn the teachers. However, what the girl wasn't expecting was to see Kendo, Tetsu, and Kodai sprinting towards them, all while carrying a passed-out Honuki and Shiozaki on their backs. What the hell happened to them? Takagi shouted at the rapidly approaching group of students. There's some type of gas flooding the area. Juzo and Ibara breathed it in before we knew what was going on. Tetsu frantically replied. What th? Attention students, this is Mandalay. Villains have invaded the camp. Everyone please return to the lodge at once. The voice of the brunette heroine suddenly shouted in their heads. A collective chill went down the spines of the students after hearing that. A villain attack all the way out here. How did they even find them? The school took extra precautions to make sure that something like this didn't happen. Without missing a beat, Midoriya took to the sky to get a better look at the area. If this gas was a result of the apparent attack, then maybe he could get a bird's eye view of the situation. Unfortunately, once the green-haired boy was above the tree line, he got a clear view of what was going on. Directly in front of them was an absolutely massive cloud of pink smoke that seemed to be getting larger with each passing second. And to make matters even worse, it was right where most of his class was. Midoriya and Kenda's groups were placed at the middle of the trail, which meant that they were further away than anyone else, so the gas still hadn't reached them yet. Then to his left was a wall of blue flames that also seemed to be expanding. Midoriya was by no means an expert on fire, but thanks to his dad's knowledge about the subject, along with following Endeavor's career for so long, he knew flames that intense couldn't occur naturally, especially out in the forest. To make things simple, they were boxed in, and their window of escape was closing fast. Midoriya quickly descended back down to the ground to inform the others of what was going on around them. But halfway through his explanation, a loud yell interrupted him, followed by what sounded like some sort of chainsaw. Seeing as he was the fastest one out of the group, Midoriya went to check it out while the others began moving towards where the lodge was located. This was not good. This was definitely not good. That was the only thing running through the minds of Awase, Shishida, Yaoyorozu, and Rin as the 4 teenagers ran for their lives while carrying an unconscious ragdoll with them. Barely a few seconds after the announcement from Mandalay, Awase, Shishida, and Ragdoll all began their journey back to the lodge. The 2 1B boys were helping her direct traffic when the word was put out, and by coincidence, Yaoyorozu and Rin were close by them. However, things went sideways when a gigantic, green humanoid creature attacked them from out of nowhere. To save Awase from what was sure to be a devastating blow, the green-haired heroine pushed him out the way and took the full force of the attack herself, which caused her to be flung into a nearby tree. Thanks to some quick reflexes on Shishida's part, the Beast Quirk user was able to recover the heroine in time before the group retreated further into the woods just as the monster before them sprouted literal chainsaws and extra limbs from his back. This is just like the beast that attacked us back at the USJ. The class rep of 1A thought to herself as her eyes flashed back to see the monster closing the distance between them. If she remembered correctly, the thing was called a Namu, and based on what she heard from Kirishima and Asui, it was some type of bioengineered weapon. What the are we going to do? Awase cried out, hoping that someone smarter than him would come up with a plan. Just keep moving, Yaoyorozu ordered. This was no time to panic. Actually, this was the perfect time to panic. But doing something like that was not going to help them at all. She needed to come up with a plan, something that would either get this monstrosity to stop following them, or something that would subdue it. Just before something could form in her mind, Rin tripped over a tree root and fell to the ground. Suddenly, everything around them seemed to slow down as the Namu came within striking distance. Shishida tried to lunge forward and grab the boy, but he definitely wasn't going to make it in time. Only a split second before one of the chainsaws was about to make contact with Rin's head, the Namu suddenly flew backwards and into a nearby tree with a resounding amount of force. What the? Are you guys okay? A familiar voice called out to them from above. A sense of relief washed over their bodies when they saw a familiar patch of green hair floating in the sky. Midoriya and Shishida howled. Thanking God, you're here. Awase smiled. If they weren't in a life or death situation right now, he might just given the guy a hug. We need to restrain this guy, the telekinesis user replied before everyone's attention was turned back to the Namu. Thanks to Midoriya keeping it under his control, the thing was completely immobilized. But even a strong telekinesis quirk wasn't going to be enough. The boy looked back down to the group and saw that the class rep of 1A was with them, and an idea instantly popped into his head. Yeah, Yorazu-san, make something big and made of metal that we can use to wrap around this guy. Without any reason to argue, the creation quirk user quickly produced a steel beam from her abdominal area. From what she'd seen, Midoriya had the ability to manipulate objects to a rather impressive degree, so something like this should be right up his alley. Midoriya then grabbed hold of the steel beam and wrapped it around the Namu as tight as he could get it. He was still nowhere near Katsuraga's level when it came to reforming metal, but this was more than sufficient. With the Namu now under control, Midoriya lifted the rest of the group into the air and flew off to rejoin the others. Oh, is that ragdoll was the first thing out of Tetsu's mouth once Midoriya returned with the others. The woman was unconscious and had severe bruising on the right side of her body. Whatever happened to her must have been serious. Please tell me that you guys know what's going on, Awase asked the others. Midoriya gave a brief rundown of things based on what he had seen, which wasn't all that much to be honest. But the situation was obviously getting worse. The fires were spreading out over a wider area and for some reason the cloud of pink gas was moving towards the campsite, which indicated that it was probably the work of someone's quirk. There was no way to check up on what was going on around them and none of them had any phone signal this far out into the woods. Yaoyorozu, can you make me a gas mask? Tetsu looked to the raven-haired girl. What? Him going to find whoever is controlling this gas and take them down? What? Are you crazy? Takagi immediately scolded him. Do you know how dangerous something like that is? Well, we need to do something. Most of our class probably got caught up in the middle of that mess. Ibara and Juzo barely breathed any of that stuff in and they are out cold. Think of how bad the others could be doing right now. As much as Takagi wanted to argue with the boy, he was absolutely correct. The longer they stood around talking, the more danger their classmates were in. The logical side of her brain was telling her to head back to the lodge and get to safety. But she couldn't do that when her classmates' lives were in jeopardy. So what are we going to do? Yanagi looked around for an answer. We need to split up. Midoriya was the first to speak up. What? Ragdoll was the only teacher this far out into the woods, so the rest probably don't know what's going on. Kan-sensei and Aizawa-sensei are back at the lodge with the remedial class and the rest of Wildcats are probably dealing with villains where they are now. We also still don't know what the cause of this fire is. As much I don't like admitting this, Midoriya-kun's right. Kendo stated. We need to get this gas under control and find the others. We also need to alert the teachers to what's going on. So what's the plan? Rin inquired. The Chinese boy was still visibly shaken up from earlier, but he was able to keep his nerves in check. If they managed to make it out of this alive, he was going to be sure to send Midoriya a thank you gift for saving his life. He'll go with Tetsu-san to deal with the gas. I have enough fat reserves to make more masks for anyone that we find. Yaoyorozu announced. He'll go hunt down what the cause of the fire is. Midoriya followed up, and Takagi just as quickly made it clear that she was going with him. After another few seconds of deliberating, the plan was set in motion. Midoriya, Takagi and Yanagi were going to check the fire and head straight back to the lodge. Tetsu, Kendo, Yaoyorozu and Awase were going to find the source of gas and locate as many people as they could. And Rin, Kodai and Shishida were going to head straight to lodge to get Ragdoll, Honuki and Shiozaki to safety. It was only a few seconds after the group split up did the next announcement come in. All students, you have permission to use your quirks to defend yourselves and your classmates. A few minutes later, the trio of 1B students landed next to the cliffside where they assumed to be the origin of the fire. Judging by how the entire area around them was already burnt out minus a few trees, they could tell that the flames had already run their course. The downside to this was that there was no indication of what started the fire. They had a pretty good feeling that it was the product of someone's quirk, just like the gas. But there was no way to be sure. We've wasted enough time here, let's hurry back. Tetsu-kun and the others are probably going to need some help. Yanagi suggested. Yeah, you're right. Takagi agreed. Still, this is. Boom. A massive rumbling cut Midoriya off. Before any of the students knew what to do, a few more came in quick succession of the first one. And they all seemed to be getting closer to their current position. Just when the boy was about to activate his quirk to get the two girls to safety, something in the distance caught his eye. Not even 100 meters from where they were standing, the boy could see someone rapidly approaching them from the east. It took him a second, but Midoriya recognized him as Mizo Shoji, the mask-wearing boy from Class 1A. Shoji and Midoriya began waving the boy down. Run away, he frantically shouted back while waving them off. Takagi was confused about what was going on before a gigantic mass of dark energy suddenly bursted out from behind him while demolishing every tree in sight. Recognition set in almost instantly, and the 1B students realized that this had to be Takoyami's quirk Dark Shadow. However, something was odd. The bird spirit seemed to be struggling with something. Unfortunately, the green-haired girl got her answer when what could only be described as a massive wall of muscle came flying towards them like a bat out of hell. Thankfully, Midoriya reacted just in time to move everyone safely out of the way before the object impacted the nearby cliffside, leaving a massive crater under it. Oh yeah, you sure pack one hell of a punch, kid. Keep on entertaining me before I kill you. The wall of muscle suddenly hopped out of the crater to reveal a blonde-haired man with a sadistic look on his face. The 1B students didn't even get a chance to be confused about what they were seeing before a now rampaging dark shadow closed the distance between them and began clobbering the man into the rocks. Get out of there now, Takoyami-kun's not in control right now, the voice of Tsuyu Asui, the new vice rep of 1A, shouted at them from atop Shoji's back. Now that they had a better picture, they could see Minru Minter right beside her. Deciding to just do as they were told, the 3 1B students retreated from the current battle and joined up with the other students. What's going on? Takage looked to the 1A students for an answer. After Mandalay's message, the 4 of us got attacked by some of the villains, Jiro. Takoyami-kun panicked and used his quirk. But as soon as he did, Dark Shadow started rampaging. The frog-themed girl with the scar on her face explained rather calmly. Well, if things weren't bad before, they certainly were now. Based on what Midoriya knew about Takoyami's quirk, it was stronger at night than during the day. And seeing as they were in the middle of a dense forest with nothing more than a full moon to provide any light, Dark Shadow was probably in peak condition. The boys' thoughts were interrupted when Dark Shadow suddenly let out an ear-splitting roar. Everyone turned their attention back to the scene of the fight where the villain was now reduced to a Y-pulp in the middle of yet another giant crater. The students briefly wondered if the guy was still even alive, but they didn't get enough time to ponder it before the shadow spirit turned its attention to them. Some more challengers, the beast menacingly growled towards them. Oh shit, run away, Mind, it cried out while clutching Shoji's shirt. Not a chance, Dark Shadow howled as it dashed towards them. Midoriya doesn't really know what came over him at that moment. In fact, he would even say that his body just moved on its own. But instead of retreating like a smart person, the boy lifted his hands up and activated his quirk in the direction of their current opponent. He wasn't entirely sure whether or not his telekinesis would work on Dark Shadow, but now seemed like a good enough time to give it a shot. By grace of whatever deity was looking over him, his reckless plan actually worked mostly. Although he could indeed use his power on Dark Shadow, the beast was putting up more than a good fight. Izuku Takage shouted back at the boy once she finally realized what he was doing. He'll hold him off, you guys go on ahead. Not happening. Midoriya was about to double down on his declaration, but that brief lapse in focus loosed up his grip on Dark Shadow, causing the beast to begin thrashing even more violently. As the other students watched this power struggle go on, Takage's mind started running wild. Midoriya could only hold that thing in place for so long. Aside from light, Takoyami had to have some other weakness. Shoji, Tsu, please tell me that you guys know how to stop him. She then looked at the 1A students. We have to knock him out. Dark Shadow will disappear if Takoyami-kun loses consciousness. The frog-themed teenager bluntly responded. That little tidbit of information was all that Takage needed. The girl looked back over to their opponent and could clearly see Takoyami's actual body in the middle of all that darkness. Judging by the fact that he hadn't said anything the entire time and wasn't actively trying to suppress his quirk, it was safe to assume that his mind was somewhere else. Without any hesitation, the lizard tail splitter user disassembled her body into 20 pieces and made a mad dash towards the fight. Takage Yanagi called out to her. Izuku, keep holding him, place him, going to try and knock Takoyami out. Something like that was a lot easier said than done. Midoriya was already doing everything in his power to keep the beast from breaking free, but every couple of seconds he would lose control of one of its limbs. One such instance just so happened to occur right as Takage was making her approach. One of Dark Shadow's arms broke free and slammed into a nearby tree, sending debris flying everywhere, and Midoriya ended up getting whacked in the head by a stray branch. The force of the impact was enough to knock him to the ground. Midoriya-san, Kun, the others shouted simultaneously. Out of instinct, Shoji dropped Minda and Asui to the ground and dashed towards the boy. You look like you're going to be fun. I'm going to enjoy Dark Shadow's taunting when cut off when its entire body suddenly locked up. From on the ground, Midoriya stood up on 2 shaky legs and poured every last bit of power he could into his quirk. But there were a few problems with this. The first was that he definitely just suffered a concussion. And the second was that the world around him was starting to spin. But none of that was important right now. At this moment, he was the only one who could keep his classmate under control long enough for the others to act. On the other side of the scuffle, the adrenaline suddenly rushed through Takage's veins. From where she was standing, she could see the begin to leak from Midoriya's nose, something that was a telltale sign that he was pushing his quirk too far. If he kept this up, then he would be in some serious trouble. Setsuna, hurry up and do it, the green-haired boy shouted to her. What the hell am I doing just standing around? Takage clicked her teeth, angry at herself for freezing up at such a time. The girl then disassembled her body into 20 pieces and sent them flying full speed towards Takoyami's body. Thanks to Midoriya, she had a clear view of the boy and was certainly not about to waste this opportunity. Sorry Takoyami, but you're gonna have to take a nap. With as much power as she could muster, Takage slammed every piece of her body into the boy at top speed. Evidently, this reckless idea of theirs worked because Takoyami let out a painful groan before Dark Shadow suddenly disappeared, leaving Takoyami's unconscious body floating in the air. With that finally over, Midoriya set the 1A boy onto the ground before releasing his quirk. That little stunt of his was costly. Not only was his head throbbing, but his vision was blurry as well. He never tried straining his power like that before, and he certainly wasn't going to do it again if he could help it. Izuku, are you okay? Takage yelled while grabbing onto the boy. Now that she was up close, she could see a pretty sizable gash on the left side of his forehead. I'm fine, but I don't think he'll be able to use my quirk for a while. I kinda overboard, he replied with a weak smile. Takoyama-san's out cold, Yanagi announced. We need to check on that villain over there too. Video, you think that his mind is shaky voice stuttered out. No, Jiro, Asui immediately reassured him. Even from here, I can see that he's still breathing. Minta-kun, can you use some of your sticky balls to hold him in place? He may be injured, but that guy is too dangerous to just leave alone like that. Shoji looked to the diminutive student. Right as the purple-headed teen was about to make a comment, Mandalay's voice began ringing in their heads. Students who have just identified the target of this attack. The villains are looking for Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya-kun, if you are out there, please return to the lodge immediately and avoid combat, if you can help it. In a matter of minutes, this little adventure of theirs went from a search and rescue mission to hostage escort duty. The last announcement from Mandalay practically threw everyone for a loop. The villains were after Midoriya. Why, what could they possibly want with him? Did they know him? What were they going to do to him if they captured him? These were the questions running through their heads as they sprinted through the forest in the direction of the campsite, especially Takage. When asked about it, Midoriya himself had no clue as to why he was being targeted. A few minutes passed before the group of students came upon a large clearing that was a sizable distance away from the nearest fire. The situation was bad and getting worse with each passing second. Takoyami was unconscious, Midoriya couldn't use his quirk right now, and they still had no clue what was going on with the others. From the brief look that she got of the area before they left, the only change Takage was able to identify was that the pink smoke was no longer in the area, which meant that Tetsu and the others probably dealt with whatever was causing that gas. How are you doing? Midoriya-kun, Yanagi asked in a worried tone. I'm fine, he answered unconvincingly. You are certainly not fine, Takage shot back. The mere fact that he was unable to use his powers right now and that his head wound was still bleeding was more than enough proof of that. But none of that mattered right now. The main thing on the green-haired girl's mind was getting everyone back to safety. How far away are we from the lodge? Shoji then asked. It's straight ahead, we should be there in another couple of minutes. I'll rig Takage-san behind you. Takage turned her head just in time to see a flash of blonde hair appear in her vision before a metallic gleam caught her eye. Out of instinct, the girl brought her arm up to her face and was met with the painful sensation of something penetrating her forearm. Arg! The girl yelled out in pain only moments before Shoji appeared right in front of her. The masked teen appeared to have pushed something away from her. Setsuna Midoriya screamed out. What the hell just happened? She looked down at her arm, only to see a decently sized knife sticking out from just underneath her elbow. It took every last bit of mental willpower that Takage had to not outright scream at the sight of this. She just got stabbed by who? Awa, that's my favorite knife. Can I have that back, please? An unfamiliar female voice groaned from in front of her. Takage then glanced up to see who this person was. To her surprise, it was a blonde-haired girl with two messy buns on her head wearing a school uniform. Not only that, she was wearing some funky device around her neck that looked like vampire teeth. Who are you? Yanagi said in a stern voice. Hi, I'm Mimiko Toga, the girl greeted in a tone that was way too cheery for their liking. Him with the League of Villains. The League of Villains, weren't those the same guys that attacked the USJ at the start of the year? What the hell were they doing out here? To their knowledge, the last time this group attacked the school they were going after All Might. So why were they now looking for Midoriya? Before either student could get any more information out of this Toga person, the girl began squealing like an excited child. And that she pointed over to the green-haired boy. Is Izuku Midoriya? Oh my god, look at you. You're way cuter than in person, and you're already bleeding for me. How sweet of you. The girl then licked her lips like she was getting ready to devour a meal. Okay, something was definitely off about this chick. Anybody who could stab someone and then immediately call another person cute was not right in the head. Takage was already not a fan of this girl thanks to the knife lodged in her arm. But she definitely didn't like the look that she was giving Midoriya. Setsun, are you okay? Midoriya asked worriedly. The girl fiddled with her arm for a second as she tried to assess the damage. The fact that she couldn't move most of her fingers certainly wasn't good, and she was sure that a tendon in her arm was just split in two. Takage didn't exactly know what the extent of her regeneration abilities were. She never had to worry about anything other than some small cuts and bruises. But this was the first time that she could remember sustaining an injury like this while her quirk wasn't active. It'll be fine. She looked back at him, only to give a very unconvincing grin. Yanagi decided that she was through with all this nonsense and made her move. Toga was definitely in danger of her quirk, and judging by the fact that the girl was shorter than her and had a slender frame, it was a safe bet to assume that she weighed less than her too. Without moving her hands, the poltergeist user activated her power and locked the blonde-haired villain in place. She didn't have that much experience with controlling people since her power was a toss-up in every fight. But now wasn't the time to worry about limitations. What the hell? Takage gasped as she tried to move. She's pinned down. Someone go knock her out, the gray-haired teen ordered. I got you, Takage replied before holding up her left arm and shooting it out towards their enemy. However, that's when things took a major turn for the worse. Just when her arm was about half the distance to her target, a wall of blue flame suddenly appeared and completely engulfed the girl's limb. Pain shot through her senses as Takage watched and felt her arm get incinerated right before her eyes. Arg, damn it. Setsuna Midoriya then turned his head in the direction of the blast. Another one. Good grief to Gathas is what you get for not getting the job done. Out from the nearby bushes came two new figures, much to everyone's dismay. The first was a man with jet black hair and scarring all over his body, and the other was a man dressed in a black and gray bodysuit. Hey Dabai, Twice, what are you guys doing here? Toga cheerily inquired. We accomplished our part of the mission and we're heading back to the rally point. We just so happened to be passing by, the scarred man nonchalantly stated before turning his attention towards the group of students. And will you look at that? Our target seems to be here as well. A shiver ran down their spines at the man's cold gaze. They had no clue who this Dabai person was, but something in their guts was telling them that they needed to retreat. They may have numbers on their sides, but they were facing 3 villains, 2 with unknown quirks, and 3 members of their group were now injured. Asuasan, listen to me. I need you to grab Setsuna and Asuasan, Midoriya shouted when he turned his head to see that the frog-themed girl was gone. She was standing right behind him a moment ago and now she was missing. My, that was much too easy, another new voice taunted. From literally out of nowhere, a man in a white mask, top hat and trench coat suddenly appeared next to the other 2 villains. You children really need to stay aware of your surroundings. Compress, where's Moonfish? Dabai asked. That maniac bit off more than he could chew and got captured. However, I, being the magnificent escape artist that I am, managed to get away in time without compromising my objective. The man now identified as Compress exclaimed before holding up a small green marble in front of him. And lucky me, you just provided me the chance to capture a hostage. It took all of 2 seconds for Midoriya to connect the dots. That man just captured Asui and used his quirk, whatever it was, to turn her into that marble. Judging by the fact that he said hostage and not victim, she could still very well be alive. But Midoriya wasn't going to wait around to find out. Give her back, he shouted. The boy attempted to use his quirk, but it was no good. The only thing he got when he tried was a spike in pain in the back of his head. Now, settle down, Brett. No need to do anything irresponsible, the fire quirk user calmly stated while letting blue flames dance in his left hand. Who are you people and what are you after? Takage shouted, hoping this question would be able to buy her some time to think of a way out of this. Not only was her right arm useless due to the knife, but her left arm was now gone. We're with the League of Villains, and what we're after is him. The man then pointed to Midoriya. Why, Yanagi demanded. Our boss wants him, plain and simple. Give Asuasan back to us now. Now it was Midoriya's turn to speak. He had no clue what these people wanted him for. But there were more important things to think about at the moment. One of his classmates was captured and he needed to do something about it. What followed was a brief stare down between Midoriya and Dabai. It was very clear that the man was fully prepared to kill them based on what he just did to Takage's arm. And something was telling him that this guy was not your ordinary villain. While this was going on, Yanaga's mind was racing to come up with a solution. She could see the green marble clearly and it was in range of her quirk. But that was where the positives ended and the negatives began. She could try and seize the thing with her power, but what about after that? They had villains on all sides of them except for the rear, and this Dabai character had some good amount range with his fire. The moment she attempted to take Asui back, the man could very easily burn them alive before they even had a chance to blink. On top of that, this Toga girl looked to be patiently waiting for her chance. To put things in perspective, the gray-haired girl was starting to panic. Takage had just lost the use of her arms, Takoyami was unconscious, Asui had just been captured and Midoriya couldn't use his quirk. The only people who could put up a real fight right now were herself, Shoji and Mainta. Shoji was strong, but she doubted that he had the speed to close the distance between either villain before one could attack. And no disrespect to Mainta, but the best his quirk could do was put some space between them and the villains. Which didn't really matter because Daba's fire would still reach them. How about we make a deal? The black-haired man then proposed. What? Midoriya shot back. Well, let your friend here go if you take her place and come with us. Well, you've lost your goddamn mind, Takage shouted. Yeah, Izuka's coming with us. Toga began cheering as she skipped over to the others. And if I refuse, then we kill you and your friends. The man answered back. We've already accomplished our goal here, so whether you live or die is irrelevant. But hey, why not sacrifice yourself to save your buddy here? That's what a real hero could do, right? No one could believe their ears. Did this guy really expect them to just believe him, especially after he just injured one of them? However, Midoriya's mind was in a different place. It was obvious that this guy was full of shit, but there weren't really a lot of options at the moment. Their backs were against the wall and they still had no clue what that Toga girl or the other masked guy's quirks were. He could take an educated guess and assume that the girl's was a short-range ability based on the fact that she was using a knife. But the other guy, Twice, was a complete wild card. So what do you say, Izuku? Midoriya? If you think that we're going to trad, I have 2 conditions. Midoriya caught Takage off, causing not only her, but Yanagi, Shoji and Mainta to give him a set of wild looks. Oh, give us back Asuasan and let the rest of my friends go free. If you do that, then he'll come quietly. Izuku. Takage stared at him. Did she hear that correctly? Did Midoriya actually just use himself as a bargaining chip with a bunch of villains? Midoriya, you can't be serious, Mainta shouted in an astonished tone. It looks like we have a deal. Now wait a second, Dabai. Can we take his word for it? Compress interjected. He looks like a pretty honest guy to me. On top of that, it's not like he can do anything to stop us. He obviously can't use that quirk of his or else he would've already done it. So do we have a deal? Midoriya then asked. Instead of replying, Dabai gave Compress a quick glance before the masked man tossed the green marble about half the distance in between them. In response, Midoriya started walking towards them, but the boy barely made it a couple of steps before Takagi grabbed the boy by his wrist with her injured arm. Izuku, what the do you think you're doing? The girl's tone was harsh and rasp. But the worst thing about this was the look on her face as two sets of green eyes met each other. This is our best option right now. Hurry up and get back to the campsite so you can treat your injuries and get the others to safety. The boy tried to explain as calmly as he could. That's not happening. There were a few things that Midoriya wanted to say, but there wasn't enough time. Instead, he just placed his hand on Takagi's cheek and gave her a warm smile. He'll be fine. Do you even hear what you're saying right now? Shaoji-san, can you make sure that Setsuna and the others get to safety? The masked teen held his tongue before replying. He was still trying to wrap his head around all of this, but the situation was not looking good. Midoriya was literally about to throw himself to the wolves just so everyone could try and get to safety. Against every instinct in his body, Shoji moved forward and grabbed Takagi by the waist before throwing her over his shoulder. Shoji, what put me down? Takagi protested while flailing her legs. Midoriya simply turned back around to face the villains before advancing forward. Midoriya-kun Yanagi then spoke. Take Asuasan and get out of here. You should be able to carry her with your quirk. I'm not letting you go with them. Look, I'm pretty sure it'll be okay. They wouldn't go through all this trouble just to kill me. Take care of the injured first. Did you forget that you're injured too? To be fair, Midoriya really didn't have an adequate response for that. So instead he kept walking towards the villains. Release your quirk and set Asuasan. With pleasure, Compress complied before snapping his fingers. In a flash of green light, Asui suddenly appeared on the ground in front of them. Without missing a beat, Yanagi then used her quirk to grab the girl and guide her into her arms. Despite a very delirious look on her face, the vice rep of 1A seemed unharmed. You guys go now, hurry up. To this day, Yanagi never quite forgave herself for going along with this ludicrous plan of his. But in that moment, all she did was click her teeth before turning the other direction and retreating towards Shoji, Minda and a still flailing Takagi. Be careful. I will. What are you doing, Izuku? No was all Takagi was able to yell out before the rest of the group began fleeing into the woods. True to their word, none of the villains pursued them. Much to Midoriya's relief. A fine show. Compress joked. Yay, Izuku's coming with us, this is gonna be fun. Toga cheered before skipping towards Midoriya and throwing her arms over his shoulders. What he wasn't expecting the girl to do was to literally lick the side of his head. Uo, you're as sweet. Dabai then directed his cold gaze towards Midoriya. That was rather heroic if I do say so myself. The boy simply chose to hold his tongue, although he was very aware of the fact that he just offered himself up to a group of villains. At the very least, his classmates had an opportunity to get away. In reality, this was the most reasonable course of action that he could come up with given the situation. The next thing that happened was Dabai pulling a cell phone out of his back pocket and dialing a number into it. Then suddenly, a massive dark purple mist appeared right behind him. Step right, and the black-haired man waved him on. Midoriya silently gulped before doing as he was told and stepping through the apparent portal. Once Midoriya stepped through the portal, he was met with quite the peculiar sight. Instead of some dark and dingy cave in the middle of the mountains, what the boy got was a dimly lit bar. His eyes quickly scanned over the area in an attempt to get as much information as he could about his surroundings. But aside from an old television, a weird-looking chair, and a torn-up All Might poster, there was nothing present that gave him an idea of where he was. Well, nothing except for a young man with dry skin, baby blue hair, and some type of faux hand prop on his face sitting at the bar. In an instant, multiple other portals appeared in the room. From these pathways came a large man with brown hair carrying some kind of weapon covered by a cloth. Another man with a lizard-like appearance. And finally, a being with a smoky appearance exactly like the portals. He must be the one with the teleportation quirk. Give me a status update, the blue-haired man demanded. His voice sounded just as dry as his skin. Moonfish and Mustard appear to have been captured. I was able to recover our Namu, but Muscular was nowhere to be found. The mist man spoke in a polite tone. The blue-haired man then turned his attention over to the main group. And Midoriya felt a chill go down his spine at the sight of a single red eye. Did you get them? We sure did, Dabai replied in a calm tone. Wait, the Midoriya then turned his gaze over to Dabai. What do you mean by them? A sadistic smile grew on the man's face at his words. Without missing a beat, Compress suddenly pulled out another green marble from his pocket and began walking towards the large chair in the back corner of the room with multiple leather straps on it. Did you honestly think that you were the only one that we're after? What happened next truly shocked Midoriya. Once Compress snapped his fingers, Katsuki Bakugo appeared right before his very eyes. He had the same dazed look on his face that Asui had, but no visible injuries that he could see. Bakugo, Deku, Saitama Prefecture. A few hours later. It had been another long day for Fubuki Katsuragi and Shinya Kamihara. The two heroes were sorting through yet another stack of papers and files as they did their best to narrow down any possible leads on their investigation. Ever since the final day of their students' internship, their joint investigation with the local police department kept hitting dead end after dead end. The first one came on the actual day of the attack. Shortly after being taken into the station for questioning, the would-be bomber managed to overpower one of the guards that was in charge of watching him. Neither of the two were there when it happened, but from what they were told, the man was able to grab the guard's pistol and shot himself right there in the middle of the station. This was their first major roadblock. Since the man decided to take his own life, there was absolutely no chance of getting any information out of him. The only interesting tidbit of information that did get on the man was that he happened to be quirkless. The second major obstacle was the explosives themselves. After sending the stuff off to be analyzed, what they got back was certainly interesting. The substance the no-deceased criminal had strapped to his chest was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. In fact, the team of scientists themselves were completely baffled. Apparently, this light blue gel was synthesized in such a way that made it damn near impossible to figure out exactly what it was made of. On top of that, it had 4 times the destructive power of dynamite, was barely 1/3 of the weight, and was practically undetectable by normal means. Whoever the supplier was for this strange new substance, they were truly someone to be feared. I can't believe that we haven't turned up a single lead on this investigation. Kamihara breathed out a tired sigh after setting the stack of papers that he was holding down on the desk. Agreed. Katsuragi nodded. The explosives themselves are enough of a mystery, but this guy was obviously a part of some larger group. No doubt these people are also responsible for the bombings that have been going on lately. Yes, it would make the most sense to think that there's a group of people out there willing to commit such heinous acts of violence. This is truly dreadful. It's almost like we've gone back to the 21st century. The green-haired heroine was cut off when the door to her office suddenly flew open. Standing there was Madoka Ozhana, also known as Ember. The flame control user was panting heavily and looked to be quite disturbed. "Boss, I have bad news." "What is it?" Katsuragi asked the woman. Whatever it was had to be serious to have her off all people so shaken up. "I was just scrolling through the Hero Network when a national alert call came out. There's been an attack and a kidnapping." What both heroes said simultaneously. "What's going on? Who's missing?" Katsuragi quickly followed up. "It's the League of Villains. They have Midoriya." Not too long after the villains left, the paramedics and firefighters had finally arrived. Of the 40 students in total, 16 were unconscious and in serious condition due to the gas, and 1 due to being knocked out. 4 others were injured, those being Takagi and Tetsu, Kirishima and Subiraba. 17 were unharmed, physically, and 2 were missing. One of the 6 pro heroes that were present during the attack, Pixie Bob, was in serious condition due to a blow to the head. Vlad King had suffered a concussion and a couple of severe burns, and Ragdoll still hadn't woken up after being slammed into a tree at full force. The green-haired woman in particular suffering multiple contusions and broken bones. As for civilians, Kota Izumi, the nephew of the pro hero Mandalay, was found at the base of the nearby mountainside. Apparently the boy had fallen off a cliff and was in critical condition. On the villain's side, 3 were caught and arrested. Those individuals being the wanted murderer Muscular, an escaped death row inmate by name of Moonfish, and the gas villain who went by Mustard. The others vanished without a trace thanks to the warp villain. The summer training camp that the students were all looking forward to couldn't have been more of a disaster. The rest of night was practically a blur for Takagi. The only things that she could remember clearly were arriving back at the camp only to learn that Bakugo had also been taken by the villains, cursing out Yanagi and Shoji for leaving Midoriya to fend for himself, and being taken over to the nearby hospital to get rushed into emergency surgery to have the knife removed from her forearm. Never before had Takagi been more grateful for inheriting her mother's regeneration ability than she was now. As it turns out, her stab wound was already beginning to heal and the doctors were certain that she'd make a full recovery within the next 24 hours. She was worried that sustaining such a serious injury without her quirk being active may have led to some permanent damage. But now she could breathe a bit easier. Even her left arm was already a third of the way to its former glory. At the moment, the green-haired teen was laying in her hospital bed and staring up at the ceiling. It had been half a day since the attack and the morning sun had already risen over the horizon. Her father and Kayama rushed over to see her as soon as they got the news, and the two were currently downstairs in the cafeteria right now getting some much-needed breakfast. It was sort of weird for the girl to see the blue-haired man worry over her so much, but she was glad that he was here nonetheless. Based on what she knew, all of her classmates that got caught up in the gas were on the floor above her and most of them were still unconscious. The only ones who were awake being Shiozaki and Honuki. The reason for this might have been because they got the least of it before being evacuated from the area. And even then, Honuki was still a bit out of it. However, as worried as she was for her classmates, there was one person that she truly feared for. Midoriya had been taken. The boy literally threw himself to wolves just to give her and the others a chance to get to safety. Takagi still had no clue what those guys wanted with him. But for all she knew, he could be getting tortured right now and no one would be there to save him. Part of her was angry at him for doing something so stupid, but the other was angry at herself for being a reason that he was in that position in the first place. Just before the girl's mind could descend further into her thoughts, the door to her hospital room opened up. In walked Tetsu and Yanagi, and neither of them looked particularly good. If she remembered correctly, they just got back from giving their statements to the police. "Hey, how are you feeling?" her longtime friend asked in a soft tone. You got shot multiple times and you're asking me if I'm okay. The girl gave him a half-hearted grin before directing her attention to Yanagi. The two hadn't spoken since her little tirade a few hours ago, and she defiantly owed the girl an apology. Hey Ryuko, I'm sorry for what I said to you last night. Don't be, Yanagi answered in a dejected tone, definitely one that neither of the two were used to. You were absolutely right. I was scared, so I let Midoriya-kun take the fall for all of us. I panicked and let him make that decision when there was more that I could have done to stop it. No, Takagi shot back, doing everything she could to hide her shame. You did what you thought was best for everyone, including me. As much as I hate to say it, it was the most logical choice that we had, given the situation. Logical or not, I should have done more. There was a weird tension in the air after that statement. Yanagi was usually a stoic and calm person, but the way she was holding her head in shame really made Takagi sick to her stomach. Some of the things she said to her last night were more than uncalled for, and she wondered how much her words really hurt the girl. She wanted to do more to tell her that she was sorry, but for now she just decided to change subjects. So you guys already gave your statements to the cops? Yeah, Tetsu nodded. You're giving yours later today, right? Yeah, my arms are already on the way to healing themselves completely, but the doctor wants to give me one final check before releasing me. After that, I'm heading over to the station with my dad and Aunt Nimuri tonight. Well, I'm glad that you're doing alright. I was really worried about you last night. Thanks for the concern, metalhead. She gave him a toothy smirk. The atmosphere in the air suddenly shifted as Tetsu then brought up a topic that none of them wanted to talk about. So why do you think they were after him? No idea, Takagi said dejectedly. The only thing we know is that they were after him, Bakugo-san and Ragdoll. According to the detective I talked to, those three were the targets. Yanagi then spoke up. Why those three were the intended victims was a complete mystery. Midoriya and Bakugo obviously had some history with each other. But did that have anything to do with it? And Ragdoll was even more confusing. Sure, the Wildcats were relatively famous, but why her and not someone else? All of this was way too confusing to even think about right now. Just what exactly is going on? This thing sucks. God, I hope Izuku is okay right now. To say that Midoriya would rather be anywhere else in the world right now would be putting it mildly. After the initial hour or so of his arrival to the League of Villains base of operations, things had been rather uneventful. It didn't take long for the group of criminals to tie Bakugo down to a specially made chair and shove the two of them into some windowless room with only a single overhead light. The only consolation prize to all of this was that Midoriya had the luxury of not having any restraints being placed on his body at all. According to their kidnappers, there was no point in tying down someone who could move things with his mind. Not like that did him much good anyway. The boy was still unable to use his quirk. Even if he wanted to, it probably wasn't the best idea considering he still had no clue what the other members of the League were capable of, or what their quirks were. From what he had been able to gather so far, Magna, Spinner, Twice, and Toga were all still unknowns. He had seen Dabai, Compress, and Kurogiri use their quirks already. And from what he had heard about the attack on the school earlier this year, the leader, Tamura Shigaraki, could disintegrate things at will. The only relief to this situation so far came when Compress, the man currently watching over him, and Bakugo left his post at the behest of their leader, finally leaving the two of them some time to figure out exactly what was going on. Neither of them had said a word to each other ever since being placed into this room, but now was as good a time as any to plan their next move. How did you get captured? Were the first words out of Bakugo's mouth once the door shut. Of course, Midoriya hated the fact that he was trapped in a dark room with the one person that he couldn't stand, but his personal feelings had to take a back seat. I let them capture me so that the others could escape, Midoriya answered matter-of-factly, having already predicted what the explosion quirk user's reaction would be. You would? Bakugo barked at him, a look of complete bewilderment plastered on his face. You gave up. It was the most reasonable decision that I could come with at the time given the circumstances. Don't give me that shit. Deku, are you seriously telling me that you just let these clowns capture you? Why the hell didn't you use your quirk on them? I thought you were supposed to be strong. I got injured and couldn't use it at the time. Actually, I'm still not able to activate it right now. I'm pretty sure that I have a concussion, he clarified. It was the truth. His head was still pounding even at this very moment. After all this time, you're still just a useless loser, Bakugo scoffed. Midoriya somehow found a way to keep his irritation down in order to continue the conversation. What about you? How did you get captured? Bakugo turned his face away from him and was silent for a few moments. After letting out a very annoyed groan, he finally came clean on how he ended up in the same spot as him. That weirdo with the top hat got the drop on me when they attacked the lodge. AHIC. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. It doesn't matter how I got caught. Something like that will never happen again. Besides, we need to come up with a plan to get out of here. Keep your voice down, you fool. They are probably listening to us right now, Midoriya told him while looking around. The room was still pretty dark, so it was impossible to accurately tell if there were any surveillance devices. I know that already, you damn nerd. All Midoriya could do was let out an exasperated sigh. This situation was truly terrible. There was no doubt in his mind that in terms of firepower, he and Bakugo could break out of this place once his quirk returned. It might even be easy, but there were still too many unknowns. For all he knew, they could be anywhere in Japan right now. Hell, depending on how powerful Kurogiri's quirk was, they might not even be in Japan at all. The boy's mind then wandered off and started to think about how things were going outside. No doubt his mother must have been a wreck. She more than likely received word that he was kidnapped by now, and knowing her, she was on the verge of a breakdown. He promised her that he would never go missing again after the last time, but it looks like he couldn't uphold his end of the deal. The next thing his mind flashed to was talkage. The look on the girl's face when he told her to go on without him hurt more than it probably should have, and her screams for the others to go back and stop him from giving himself up was still ringing in his ears. He really needed to find a way to make up for worrying her so much. Right as Midoriya was about to speak, the door to the room suddenly flew open. The two students winced for a moment at the sudden flood of light, but after their vision cleared, they could see Tamura Shigaraki and Kurogiri standing in the doorway. Sorry for the lack of accommodations, but we needed to get some things in order. The blue-haired man spoke in a dry tone. What do you want? Face Bakugo inquired impolitely. My, that's quite some colorful language for an aspiring hero. He smiled. But sorry, we're not here for you right now, we're here for him. Shigaraki then pointed to Midoriya. The green-haired boy failed to hide his surprise. Whatever they wanted couldn't have been good. Yes, Master has been wanting to talk to you for some time now. Master Bakugo immediately questioned. So you're not the one in charge? TCH figures. A pass-to-face loser like you doesn't even look smart enough to be calling the shots. Shigaraki chose to ignore those words for the time being and fight off his natural urge to turn the boy into dust. After all, it wasn't such a good idea to kill the hostage you wasted so much effort in capturing. Instead, he just turned his attention back to Midoriya. Let's go. Seeing as his options were to either comply or get turned into a pile of dust, Midoriya chose the smarter of the two and stood up from his seat. He still had their doubts about them taking his life or Bakugo's after going through all the trouble of capturing him. Besides, maybe this would give him an opportunity to learn more about his enemies. Like Bakugo, he too thought that Shigaraki was the ringleader of this group. But if he wasn't, then this might be his only chance to learn about this master person. Possibly even find out if he had any weaknesses that could be exploited. Without any warning, Kurogiri created another portal and directed him to step through it. All Midoriya could do was give a silent gulp before crossing the threshold into the darkness. Where the hell did you take him? Bakugo inquired. He and Master have a bit of catching up to do. But don't worry, he'll be fine. The blue-haired man smiled creepily under his mask. Catching up? What the hell did that mean? Did Deku know who this master person was? Was that the reason why he was taken? Something about the way this smug bastard said that didn't sit right with Bakugo. Like there was something more to it than that. Don't tell me shitty Deku got himself mixed up with a bunch of villains. He wondered before twice and Dabai came into the room. Now that we have that handled, how about the two of us have a little chat? Katsuki Bakugo. Moments after walking through the portal, Midoriya once again found himself in an unfamiliar location. Except this one was drastically different from the last. The place where he currently stood was an even darker and more dreary place than the bar. All around him were metal tables, computer monitors, and what looked like used medical equipment. Wherever he was, it was 10 times scarier. What is this place? My apologies, Midoriya. I do hope that Tamura wasn't too rough with you. All of a sudden the boy felt something that he had never experienced before. An almost overwhelming sense of dread washed over his body, and the hairs on the back of his neck instantly stood on end. He didn't even need to turn around to know that whoever the person was that owned that voice, they were something to be feared. However, for some reason he felt like he recognized it from somewhere. Very slowly Midoriya rotated his body and mentally prepared himself for the worst. He wasn't exactly sure what to expect, but he had to steel his nerves either way. The moment he fully turned around, he was absolutely confused by what he saw. There, roughly 5 or 6 meters in front of him, was a man. But not some ordinary-looking man, one with a bizarre appearance even by today's standards. He didn't really know how to describe it, but the top half of his head was drastically different than the rest. Almost like one gigantic scar. He was sitting in a large leather chair with multiple tubes and wires coming out of various parts of his body. Forgive me for my less than stellar appearance. I may be in marginally better shape than I was the last time that we spoke. However, these old bones of mine do need their rest. The man continued with a slight smile on his face. Who are you? The boy asked nervously. This was odd. He hadn't been in this person's presence for more than 15 seconds and he could practically feel power radiating off his body. Ah yes, I did have to alter your memory after our last encounter, do forgive me. But you can never be too careful these days. Our last encounter? What are you talking about? I've never met you before in my life. Midoriya then said. I will explain everything shortly. After all, the two of us do have quite a bit of catching up to do. The man continued in a soft but still ominous tone. But before that, please tell me, have you been enjoying that quirk of yours? I was a bit sad to part ways with it. But if it's been to your liking, then I have no reason to complain. It took Fubuki Katsuragi all of 4 to 5 minutes to make over to the Central Tokyo Police Department once she received the call from Detective Naomosa Tsukachi. Ever since the attack last night on the UA students, there had been no leads on what was going on outside of getting the injured children to safety. As happy as she was that no one ended up dying as a result of the chaos, her mind was in a completely different place right now. Midoriya was missing and she had no clue what he could be going through right now. Based on the information that she had been given prior to walking into the building, this League of Villains was no joke. Their ranks included a no-captured murderer by the name of Muscular, a death row inmate, Moonfish, who was the same serial cannibal that her own sister captured a few years ago. And if that wasn't bad enough, they were rumored to have connections to the hero killer. The idea that her protege was in their clutches made her stomach churn. The moment Katsuragi walked through the large wooden doors of the conference room, she was greeted with a veritable who's who of heroes from around the country. Headshot, Endeavor, Gang Orca, Best Jeanist, Kamui Woods, Mount Lady, and Tiger were the first people that she noticed. Her eyes then scanned across the room to see who else was present. Sitting near the back corner was Ragdoll, who had a massive cast on her right arm. Next to her was an older hero in a white and yellow suit that she didn't recognize. And sitting near the head of the table next to the detective was none other All Might himself. For a second, the woman had to wonder whether or not she was at a strategy meeting or the national ranking ceremony. Blizzard, thank you for showing up on such short notice. Tsukachi greeted the woman as he stood up from his seat and went over to shake her hand. What is she doing here? A very obviously displeased Endeavor inquired. My student was just kidnapped. Why wouldn't I be here? She countered. It was no secret that Katsuragi wasn't the number 2 hero's favorite person in the world. Her sister had openly disrespected him in the public eye more than a few times when she was still alive. And they were only a few months removed from one of his most valuable sidekicks ditching his agency for hers. Needless to say, the man had a grudge against her that she didn't feel like dealing with right now. Ah yes, that boy is your brother, isn't he? Seriously, how many people were going to ask her that it was bad enough that Ozhana and a few of the heroes at her agency kept joking about it? But the fact that Endeavor of all people said it rubbed her the wrong way. The last thing she wanted was for Midoriya to get dragged into this nonsense. The two of you can hash out whatever problem you have later. We need to get started, there are lives at stake. Headshot interjected, giving Katsuragi a knowing look. Yes, indeed. A group of heroes and police officers sat down in their seats and waited for the briefing to begin. Thankfully, it didn't take long to get down to business, which was good considering the time crunch that they were on. As everyone knows, the attack on the Wildcats property last night was meant to target and capture 3 individuals: Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and Tomoko Shirotoko. Tsukachi began, only for everyone in the room to turn their attention over the green-haired woman currently dressed in street clothes. Katsuragi heard that she had been injured in the attack, and considering her appearance, she was lucky to only have a broken arm. The group known as the League of Villains was able to capture both Midoriya and Bakugo before retreating. We still have yet to determine why these specific people were targeted. How did they get captured? Best Jeanist raised his hand. Bakugo isn't someone that you can get the drop on very easily. And from what I've seen, Midoriya is quite the powerhouse himself. The testimony that the students and teachers have given so far tells us that Bakugo was taken sometime during the assault by Moonfish and the flame quirk user, Dabai. It probably happened when everyone was distracted. As for Midoriya, willingly gave himself up to the villains to buy some of his classmates time to escape and get some injured students to safety. Apparently he was also injured and wasn't able to use his quirk at the time. Katsuragi blurted out. Did she hear that correctly? Midoriya actually surrendered himself to that group. Not only that, but if he was injured badly enough to where he couldn't use his quirk, then that meant that he probably had a concussion or worse. Yes, apparently they were in a no-win situation and the boy chose to just bite the bullet. They had 3 injured students with their group, one of which had a knife lodged in her arm. Tiger added, save that information for later. Gang Orca stated, do we have any idea on how to locate them? The longer we wait, the more danger they could be in. Ragdoll, will you please? The detective then motioned over to the search quirk user. Of course. The woman stood up from her seat and approached the table. As you all know, my quirk is search. I can track the location and weakness of anyone that I tag with it. Okay, Mount Lady gave her a questioning look. The benefit to this is that it doesn't turn off when I lose consciousness. It only deactivates when I want it to. And as of right now, I still have every last one of the students from the camp tagged. That includes Midoriya-kun and Bakugo-kun. Are you serious? Kamui Woods looked to the woman with bewilderment. Ragdoll's quirk was certainly useful for a rescue hero, but he never imagined that it was so powerful. So you know where they are then? Yes and no. The woman shook her head. My quirk is limited by distance, and they are too far away from me to give an exact location. However, I do know the general direction and distance. The closer I am to them, the more exact my quirk can get. Right now, they are about 70 kilometers southwest of where we are now. That's in the area of Kanagawa Prefecture. Everyone thought. So what are waiting around for? Endeavor said loudly. Tsukachi had no trouble explaining the plan as it currently stood. Ragdoll, Tiger, and a few detectives are going to scout the area after this meeting. Once they have an accurate assessment of the locations, we'll move out immediately. Locations. Headshot quirked an eyebrow. That's right. The detective then nodded. A couple of hours ago, Midoriya moved to a different location roughly 5 kilometers away from Bakugo in a matter of seconds. They have a warp gate on their side, so it makes sense why it was so abrupt. Any more information than that? The old man in the white and yellow suit asked. Katsuragi could swear that she knew him from somewhere. They are both still alive, but that's all I can tell from so far away. Ragdoll said in a solemn tone. If everything goes as planned, the rescue operation will begin tonight. Until then, the rest of us will remain on standby and wait for the word from Tiger and Ragdoll. Once we have a good idea of what we're heading into, we'll split up into 2 teams and assault both locations," Tsukachi announced. With no complaints from the heroes, the group quickly dispersed to begin their necessary preparations. In times like these, it was best to have a small group of heavy hitters who knew how to handle themselves. And with everyone present, they were confident that they would be able to get the job done. Once the rest of the heroes finally left the conference room, Yagi, Tsukachi, and Sorahiko were the only 3 to remain. "So what are we going to do about the boy?" The elderly hero looked to the other 2. "We still don't know exactly what is going on over there. For all we know, they might have just separated the 2 of them because they both have top-level quirks. It makes sense given their strength," the detective replied. Yagi simply chose to stay silent. He had his own theories, but none of them could be proven until he saw things with his own eyes. After hearing about what happened back at the camp, the blonde-haired man was now having doubts about his earlier assumptions. "In any case, our top priority is to rescue them. If Midoriya is working with them, then we'll find out once we start the operation. This is turning out to be one giant mess." Sorahiko scoffed before making his own exit. "I just hope that we can solve this without any unnecessary complications." 2 years ago, it was a normal midsummer night in Saitama Prefecture. Business was booming, the citizens were out enjoying themselves, and the general atmosphere was one of peace and tranquility. Nowadays, people barely had any cause for alarm, especially since their town was voted the 2nd safest prefecture in all of Japan only a few days ago. And a large part of that was due to a certain green-haired heroine who was known for keeping the streets clean and watching over them. "I already told you, Lily, I don't give a damn if she is the president of the HPSC. I'm not going to that goddamn ranking ceremony." Tatsumaki Katsuragi, the current number 4 heroine, shouted into her phone at her assistant. "But Mom, you've already missed the last 3, and I'm skipping out on this one too. I don't get why she even bothered asking in the first place." Tatsumaki-san, please. The president is going to be very upset if you don't show up again." "What is she going to do? Revoke my hero license?" The diminutive woman laughed smugly as she zipped through the air on her way back to her agency. On the other end of the line, Lily just let out a defeated sigh. She was thankful to Fubuki for landing her this new job, but dealing with her friend's sister was an absolute nightmare. "I understand, Mom. I will inform the HPSC that you will not be attending the ceremony again." "Good, I have better things to do than waste my time standing on some stage with a bunch of old idiots and glory hogs," she said in a satisfied tone before changing subjects. "Now, where's Fubuki? Her shift should be over by now and she isn't answering her phone." "Fubuki-san hasn't returned yet, Mom. Don't tell me that she's still pouting after I saved her ass again this morning. Seriously, that girl needs to learn to not overestimate herself so damn much." The 2 sisters had a pretty heated argument earlier that day after Tatsumaki came to Fubuki's aid, and the younger sibling pretty much took off after that to do God knows what. "We haven't heard from her since this morning." HMPH Tatsumaki scoffed. "Well, if she shows up before I get back, tell her that I'm going to shove my foot up her ass for being such a damn nuisance. 15th ranked hero or not, she's still my little sister." Yai's mom. Deciding that there was nothing more that needed to be said, the psychokinesis user ended the phone call and continued soaring through the night sky. She had a particularly long day today and still had to submit her report to the police department after capturing that maniac cannibal, Moonfish, last week. Just when Tatsumaki rounded the next building, a frantic scream from below caught her attention. "Help, please, somebody, help. God damn it, just when my shift was about to end." The woman cursed her luck. She quickly shook away the thought and went to go investigate. No matter how tired or annoyed they were, a hero still had to do their duty, and she wasn't about to ignore someone in need. A few seconds later, Tatsumaki found herself in the middle of a dark alleyway where the scream originated from. However, there was one little problem: no one was there. The woman was absolutely certain that she heard the yelling from right where she was levitating, but the only thing that she could see was a pile of trash and some discarded boxes. "Hello, is anyone over her?" Bleh. All of a sudden, Tatsumaki was caught off guard. Some foul-smelling black liquid erupted from her own mouth. The green-haired woman didn't even have enough time to think before her entire body was surrounded by darkness. "What the hell is this?" As quickly as it came, the black liquid that enveloped the woman dissipated, literally leaving her with a bad taste in her mouth. Tatsumaki had no clue what the hell was going on, but whoever was responsible for this was going to pay the price. "As I said, Doctor, I may have only acquired this one yesterday, but I already have a pretty good mastery over it," a cold and ominous voice suddenly said. "I would agree, Master," another replied. The woman quickly looked up to figure out what was going on and was shocked to see that she was no longer in the alleyway. Instead, she was in some dark building surrounded by metal tables and computer monitors, and in front of her was some weird-looking man with tubes sticking out from various places in his body sitting in a large chair. "Who are you and what the hell is going on here?" "It's nice to meet you, Tornado. It's not every day that I get to meet a famous hero such as yourself," the mysterious figure replied smugly. "I asked you a question, Potato," he argued. Without any warning, these strange black tentacles shot out of the man's hand and buried themselves into the woman's sternum. The next thing Tatsumaki felt was a surge of electricity running through her body, along with the sensation that her brain was on fire. This pain lasted only for a few seconds before coming to an abrupt halt. After that, the tentacles quickly retracted, leaving 5 gaping holes in the woman's body. Yes, quite powerful indeed. Exactly what I expected from a top-ranked hero, the man said in a satisfied tone. Years of training and experience kicked in and Tatsumaki instantly took an offensive stance. She didn't know who this guy was, but one thing was absolutely clear to her: he was dangerous. She was in a negative situation, and in her opinion it was kill or be killed. I don't know who you are, bitch, but you won't live long enough to regret ever crossing paths with the terrible tornado, the number 4 heroine shouted with vigor as she activated her quirk with the full intention snapping this guy's neck. Only something was wrong: her quirk didn't activate. What the hell, she thought to herself as she tried once again to use her powers, only to receive the same result as before. Something was definitely wrong. Aside from the holes in her chest, her body felt off. What the hell did you just do to me, son of a slice? The last thing Tatsumaki's eyes ever saw was the image of her headless body hitting the floor in front of her. In an instant, everything went dark and the world around her became ice cold. Unfortunately, this was the last day that anyone would ever see the number 4 heroine alive. What are you talking about? Were the very first words out of Midoriya's mouth. Why do you care about my quirk? The unidentified man sitting before him gave out a slight chuckle before responding. I'm interested in hearing about how you've acclimated to it. That telekinesis of yours is a particularly tricky one to master. I don't understand, the boy countered. Who are you and what do you want from me? Under normal circumstances, all for one would have had a little bit of fun toying with the boy for a few more minutes. But the elderly man decided to have mercy on the child today and get straight to the point. After all, there were more interesting things to get to. Before I answer your questions, my boy, do you mind if I ask you a question? What? Your memories from the time you left home. Are they still a bit foggy? How did you? If there was a state beyond confusion, then that is exactly what Midoriya was feeling right now. Who was this guy? Why was he acting so familiar with him? Why did he ask him about his quirk? And how exactly did he know that his memory about his time away from home wasn't all there? Just like he told Takagi a while ago, a lot of that time is still one giant blur. It was something that he could never recollect, no matter how hard he tried. Obviously this man sitting before him had something to do with it, or he was connected with it somehow. But what role did he have to play in this? Once again, I have to apologize for deceiving in such a way, my boy. I simply didn't want to run the risk of anyone finding out about my hideout at the time. However, I suppose that now is a good time to put the missing pieces back together for you. Where are you? Without warning, a single black tentacle shot out of the man's hand and wrapped itself around Midoriya's head. Just when the boy was about to try and remove the appendage from his body, a jolt of electricity surged through his veins. In an instant, it felt like a fog was lifted from his mind and the world around him suddenly became blank. Life truly wasn't fair. These were the words that repeated themselves in young Izuku Midoriya's mind, over and over again like a broken record scratching away at his sanity. It was a fact of reality that he learned at a very early age but tried to fight as much as he could. Every day he would wake up with just the slightest bit of optimism that this one was going to be better than the last, only to have his expectations crushed immediately after. And today was no different. What started out as a normal day quickly went from mediocre to bad to worse, all in the span of a couple of hours. A dramatic series of unfortunate events finally culminating into having his soul absolutely crushed by the one person that he looked up to most. There was an old saying about never meeting your idols, and apparently it was true. In all honesty, it was an answer that Midoriya was expecting to hear. But that didn't stop him from hoping that maybe the hero of heroes was different from everyone else. In the grand scheme of things, All Might's words were just the final straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't even the realization that his dream will never come true. It was a lot more than that. It was the laughter, the jokes, the pitying stares, the snide remarks, the less than stellar treatment. It was the realization that he was truly worthless in a world where people like him were obsolete. Becoming a hero wasn't even the least of his worries. Being able to find a job and live a comfortable life might as well have been a far-off dream for him. All because he lacked what 80% of the world did not, a quirk. An inborn trait that granted individuals special abilities far beyond that of a normal human being. Something that determined one's value as a person. Or his case, one's lack of value. To Midoriya, today could easily be considered the second worst day of his life. Only after the day that he was officially diagnosed as quirkless. The boy doesn't really remember what happened after his talk with the number 1 hero. His body had switched to autopilot and his mind became clouded. He briefly recalled something about an explosion happening nearby, but that was in the opposite direction in which he was traveling. But there was one thing that was absolutely clear, and his mind needed to get away. It was all too much. He just couldn't take it anymore. School, home, life, it was all just a repetitive cycle of pain and agony that he just couldn't go through anymore. Maybe he was finally starting to lose it. Maybe his childhood friend turned bully telling him to jump off the roof of the school made a little too much sense. Maybe it was the look on his mother's face each and every day as he lied to her to keep her from worrying about him. Maybe it was the growing number of scars on the right side of his abdomen that symbolized his steadily deteriorating state of mind. Maybe all of these were the factors that contributed to his brash decision to run to the train station and board the first train that he could to get away from everything. It didn't matter to him where it went. As long as it was far away from where he was now, then that would be more than enough. Saitama Prefecture. A little over a week had passed ever since that fateful day, and in that time the reality of the situation had already set in for Izuku Midoriya. His brash and impulsive decision to leave everything behind was not one that he fully considered before taking the plunge. But in his mind, there was really no other way. To Midoriya, continuing on with his mediocre existence just wasn't an option, and against his better judgment he chose to stick with his choice. The first couple of days weren't too bad. He managed to get by sleeping in the train station and using what little money he had on him to keep himself fed. But things quickly took a turn for the worst, especially in the last 3 days. With the last of his money completely dried up, Midoriya found himself resorting to dumpster diving and hiding out behind restaurants in hopes of finding something to eat for the day. And if that wasn't bad enough, finding a relatively comfortable place to sleep was just as difficult. The only real positive out of this entire situation was the fact that he could spend a good portion of his day at the public library before being told to leave at closing time. There he would use his time to read some books and charge his cell phone, which currently had over 200 missed calls and text messages from his mother. As much as it pained him to put the green-haired woman through all of this, he knew it was for the best. Eventually she'll forget about him and finally live the life that she deserved. One free of having to deal with raising a defective son that had no use to the world. Or at least that's what he hoped. On one particular night, Midoriya found himself rushing to find shelter from a torrential downpour that seemingly came out of nowhere. The quirkless boy had just lucked out and found a white, hooded sweatshirt that someone left in the nearby park. The article of clothing even had about 500 yen stuffed into its main pocket. He tried to use the money at a local convenience store but was kicked out due to his less than stellar appearance. It had literally been days since the last time he showered, and even he could see the thin layer of dirt starting to cover his body and clothes. With the rain coming down harder and harder with each passing second, Midoriya finally found a small ray of hope in the form of an abandoned-looking building a little further down the street. He had passed by the place a couple of times during the last few days and noticed how there was pretty much no activity either in or outside of it. Even now, not a single soul could be seen near the premise. Seeing as this was his best option to stay dry, Midoriya quickly patted the wet ground over to the building and began searching for any possible ways inside. He scoured the perimeter for a good 2 minutes as he tried to find some type of opening. Maybe I should just try and go in through a window, he thought to himself, only to immediately shake away the thought. Although it was tempting, breaking through a window was a bit further than he was willing to go right now. He was hoping for the possibility that maybe one of the doors was unlocked, but that didn't look like the case. For a brief moment, Midoriya paused as he squeezed himself underneath a shallow door frame in an attempt to minimize his exposure to the rain. There was only enough space for him to stand, which forced him to lean up against the uncomfortable concrete wall. As much as he didn't want to admit, he was just about at his breaking point. These last few days living on the streets had been rough. Sure, there were probably other people out there who were in way worse positions than he was right now, but that didn't stop him from feeling terrible about himself. The quirkless boy took this time to think back to how he ended up here, wet, hungry, and alone while trying to shield himself from the elements. His mind flashed back to all the ridicule and torment he had suffered each and every day, and no matter how much he tried to keep to himself and lay low, people would find any excuse in the book to make his life hell. If he was being completely honest, Izuku Midoriya hated his life. He hated it with every fiber of his being. Each and every day he would wake up disappointed that whatever deity was out there decided to plague him with another sunrise. He tried to be optimistic about things, but there was only so much that could handle, especially when your value as a human being and your very existence was constantly called into question. He hated how unfair the world was to him, simply for something that was completely out of his control. Meanwhile, people like Kaken, someone who was not a nice person by any stretch of the imagination, were put on a pedestal and praised for having been born lucky. It was times like this where Izuku truly wondered if he was paying off the sins of some previous life of his, or if he might have actually been cursed. Yeah, cursed. That was probably the most appropriate word that he could use. He was a defective boy cursed to be powerless in a world where power was everything. Condemned to a life of mediocrity and guaranteed hardship simply for something that was out of his control. Midoriya's mind further descended into this line of thinking as time went on, with each passing second becoming more painful than the last. Eventually, he used what little willpower he had left to shake the water out of his hair and wipe the tears from his face. I can't stay here or else I'll get sick. I need to try and find somewhere Dr. Bleg. All of a sudden, some foul-smelling black liquid erupted from his mouth. This random occurrence immediately caused the green-haired boy to panic. Unfortunately for him, Midoriya didn't have enough time to try and get himself out of this situation before he was consumed by darkness. Just as quickly as it came, the darkness around Midoriya vanished. Whatever it was that came over him left an absolutely horrendous taste in his mouth, and the sudden shock of it was enough to force the frail teen to his knees and begin coughing. "Well, what do we have here?" a voice suddenly said from not too far behind him. Once the initial shock finally passed over, Midoriya immediately turned around in the direction that he heard the voice, and for a split second he was able to take in his surroundings. The boy found himself inside of a dimly lit room with large tables and filing cabinets along the walls. But what stuck out to him the most was right in front of him. There, on the opposite wall sat a person, someone with a large frame who appeared to be dressed in a nice suit. "WW, who are you?" Midoriya didn't even get a chance to finish his inquiry before an overwhelming amount of fatigue came over him and the world around him faded to darkness. "It appears that we have a visitor." The man whose features were covered by a dark shadow said in an amused tone to Kurogiri and the doctor. "Do you think that he could be a spy, sir? He was snooping around the building for the last few minutes. I find it hard to believe that it was just a coincidence." Spy or not, the man known as All for One didn't take kindly to unwanted guests poking their noses around his current hideout. From a seat, he looked over the green-haired individual for a couple of seconds. He was young, thin, and judging by the backpack that he was wearing, he might be a student of some kind. But despite his plain and innocent appearance, decades of experience told the man that he should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book could be aiding your enemies. "Doctor, search his bag and see if there's anything of value in it. Kurogiri, place him on that table over there so that I can search his memories," the man ordered. Like two well-trained dogs, both men complied with the order without a moment's delay. The unnamed doctor quickly began rummaging through the boy's belongings while the humanoid miss set him on top of the nearest table that was next to a large tank. All for One had no clue who this person was or what he was doing poking around his hideout, but he was going to find out in a matter of seconds. The elderly man stood up from his chair and began walking towards the boy's unconscious body. He was merely a few steps away when the doctor suddenly spoke up. "Interesting. What is it?" Dr. Kurogiri then asked. "This notebook, it appears as though the boy has an interest in heroes and their quirks. This book contains information on heroes with rather impressive detail." "Is it so?" All for One said in a curious tone. His suspicions were low before, but now they were slightly elevated. "Let me see that." The doctor complied and placed the item into his master's hand. Despite not having an actual set of eyes anymore, the elderly man still possessed an echolocation quirk that he acquired sometime last year. When focused, this specific ability allowed him to read. So long as the words were written down on the page, he would be able to see them. For about a minute he scanned over the pages and a slight smirk appeared on his face. Right in front of him was valuable information on many top-ranked and local heroes that would normally take years to acquire. There was even a section on Endeavor's patrol habits depending on the weather. Interesting indeed, he thought to himself before handing the book over to Kurogiri. "Scan this and put it into the doctor's server. Well, verify whether or not the information is true once I'm done with him." Without so much as a word, the missed man gave a slight bow before disappearing to complete his given task, leaving the All for One to begin his investigation. The man wasted no time in hovering over the boy's body and placing a hand atop his head. "Chronicle," he spoke as the world inside of his mind began to change, forming a pathway into the boy's memories. In times like this, it was best to start with the most recent events and work backwards. And something told him that this boy had quite the interesting story. Images of this child's life began running through vision like a film reel. What All for One hadn't expected was for him to be a common street vagrant. It was a rarity for someone of his age to be living such a life, but nothing that he hadn't seen before. As the days went by, All for One made a point to take note of anything that he deemed important. Movement patterns, habits, communications, anything that could be used as valuable information. It didn't take long before the man grew bored of this. Apparently, his hunch was wrong and the boy was nothing more than a middle schooler who ran away from home. Just when he was about to release the effects of Chronicle, something caught his eye. Actually, it wasn't something, more like someone. And that someone was a person that he recognized all too well. All might. As if he were operating a remote control to a television, the man paused and played the scene at normal speed, making sure to analyze every moment of the encounter. There he watched his foe effortlessly save this child from certain death by the hands of some low-level thug with a transformation quirk. He wondered what kind of condition the blonde-haired man was in following their last battle, and here he was getting a first-hand account of it. Then he saw it, all of it. He watched the number one hero deflate like a balloon and then reveal that he was only able to maintain his hero form for a paltry 3 hours a day. He watched the boy ask the hero in a skittish tone about his chances of becoming just like him. He witnessed the heartbreak as the boy watched the blonde-haired man give him some words of wisdom before walking through the door at the top of the building. Although he wasn't actually able to discern what the boy was thinking, he could still sense the emotions that he was feeling during that time. And all of them were pointing to one thing: despair. Hatred, disgust, agony, distress. All feelings that one achieves when they've reached the bottom of the abyss. Ones that could easily be manipulated if nurtured properly. It was something that he had seen countless times amongst his followers over the many years that he had lived. And it was something that could be exploited given time and patience. Deciding to delve a little deeper, All for One went further into the boy's memories to gather more information. And as he did so, a brilliant idea came to mind. One that would prove to be most entertaining for him. "Sir, well doctor, it appears as though fate has smiled upon me once again." When Midoriya finally came to, he found himself in a dramatically different place than he was before. His surroundings were replaced by a lavish-looking room with antique paintings and decorations one would only find in a museum. What the hell happened, he asked himself as the blurriness faded from his vision. "Forgive me, Izuku Midoriya. I do apologize for having to knock you out. But you can never be too careful these days." The same mechanical voice from before spoke to him. Out of instinct, Midoriya jumped back, only to find himself sitting on a comfortable red sofa next to a wall. He then lifted his head up to get a look at who was addressing him. Sitting directly across at a large desk was quite the peculiar sight. It was the same man from before, except now he was able to fully take in his appearance. He was tall, well-built, and sporting a mask with multiple pipes running through it. "No need to be afraid, young one. I guarantee that no harm will come to you here." "Who are you? Where am I?" Midoriya blurted out in a frantic tone. "I should be asking you the same thing, child. After all, you were the one lurking around my property in the middle of the night." Midoriya bit his tongue before responding. The man sitting in front of him had a point. He was poking around somewhere that he shouldn't have been. Of course, he had no clue that anyone was occupying the building. But that didn't take away from the fact that he tired breaking into the place. I am sorry," he apologized, more out of reflex than anything else. "Don't worry, my boy. I'm not angry at all." "Oh, where are my manners? Would you like some tea?" the man politely asked as he began pouring a cup from the pot on his right side. "Yumi ice." Midoriya nervously nodded before accepting the offer. Something in the back of his mind told him that he shouldn't drink it, seeing as he had no clue what was in it. So for the time being, he simply held the cup in his hands. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Yamamoto. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Midoriya wasn't a skeptical person by nature, but he doubted that was the man's real name. Yet given the situation that he was in, he wasn't dumb enough to call him out on it. "It's nice to meet you too, sir. So do you care to explain why a young man like yourself is wandering the streets at this late hour? It's rather dreadful out there." 3 was looking to get out of the rain. "I'm sorry, I didn't know that anyone lived here. As I said before, it's no trouble at all," All for One told him. It was painfully clear that the boy was the nervous type. You didn't even need to peek into his mind to come to that conclusion. However, this would only benefit him more. In situations like this, it's best to make a person as comfortable as possible. Not enough to where they would completely let their guard down, but enough to where they would be more willing to engage in conversation. "You see, I don't get many visitors these days. I guess you could say that I'm somewhat of a recluse. My current condition prevents me from interacting with people as much as I would like." Oh, the boy simply nodded. "Now that you are finally awake, Midoriya, I have some questions that I would like you to answer." "I don't. How do you know my name?" "Ah yes, I took the liberty of searching through your belongings when I brought you in here. You had your student card on you." Oh, there was an awkward silence between the two that lingered for a good 30 seconds. Midoriya really had no clue what to think of this situation. Here he was, in some opulently decorated room, sitting across from some weird man who was giving off a rather intimidating aura. As the boy tried to figure out exactly what he should do next, the man decided to strike up a new conversation. "You are free to leave anytime you'd like. However, the rain is still coming down rather forcefully and doesn't look like it's going to let up anytime soon. Would you care to entertain an old man in the meantime? Something tells me that the two of us have a lot to discuss." "What do you want to talk about?" Instead of verbal response, the man held up the charred remains of his hero analysis notebook in his hand. The same one that his bully torched the day that he ran away from home. "I stumbled upon this while you were asleep, and might I say it's a very impressive piece of work. I'm a quirk researcher myself, and your observations are top class." "Thank you. Your insight into potential uses and applications for quirks is rather remarkable. I'd even go so far to say that you'd put most university students to shame." "You think so?" "Why, of course," the man smiled. "I've been studying quirks for a long time, you see. When I read through your work, I was pleasantly surprised at the level of detail in your writings. It's obvious to me that you possess quite the brilliant mind." "Thank you," the boy simply said. It was clear to All for One that the praise he was giving the boy was making him more comfortable, which is exactly what he needed. And now that he had him right where he wanted, it was time to turn things up a bit. "I'd love to pick your brain about a few observations that you've made. It's not often that I get the chance to engage in conversation with someone who shares my passions, especially one as young as yourself." "That's fine, I guess." "Excellent," All for One smiled. Over the next hour or so, the two engaged in rather titillating conversation centered around quirk research and theory. Although he was reluctant at first, Midoriya found himself becoming more and more comfortable as time went on. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was something about this man that sparked his interest, enough so that his earlier concerns seemed to vanish as time went on. For All for One, something like this was child's play. Over his many years, he developed a skill for making himself more endearing to the object of his interests, and it was clear to him that this boy was so starved for attention that he didn't even realize it. However, that was only one part of the equation. Simply put, the boy was brilliant, a hidden gem that had fallen right into his lap. His knowledge on quirks was impressive by itself, but he could see the seeds of a budding intellect yet to reach its full potential. All for One truly was a lucky man. Even in his current state, the universe had blessed him with another tool to achieve his goals, one that would be most useful if guided properly. This boy should prove to be quite the valuable ally to Tamura in the future. Eventually, the conversation died down and All for One was ready to enact the next step of his plan. One where he would make the boy an offer that he'd be foolish to refuse. Given what he saw inside of Midoriya's memories, he knew that the boy was desperate. Desperate for a chance to change the course of his life. to find a purpose in a world that shunned him so ruthlessly. Tell me, Midoriya, what are your plans for the future? A bright young man such as yourself must have some lofty aspirations that would put your talents to good use. Midoriya paused for a moment. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, but there was something deep inside that prevented him from letting the words come out. I don't know. Really, with the passion in which you talk about heroes and quirks, I assumed that you wanted to become one yourself. I can become a hero. His demeanor immediately fell into one of sadness. Why not? Because two don't have a quirk. People like me can't become heroes. It's impossible. And what fool told you something like that? All for one asked, already knowing the answer. Someone that I used to look up to. Those words were accompanied by a slight tense of his muscles and a clench of his fists, something that All for One was quite pleased to see. I see. Well, whoever this person was, they were a fool to tell you something so ridiculous. Even now, I can tell that you'd become a marvelous hero. All Midoriya did was stay silent. As happy as it made him to finally hear those words, he had to take them with a grain of salt. To him, no matter what, he couldn't achieve his dream. If you don't mind me asking, why do you want to become a hero? Is it fame, or even fortune? No, nothing like that. He shook his head. I just want to help people. I know it sounds silly, but I just want to be able to do what I can to make sure that people are safe and don't have to be afraid. He reminds me of my brother. All for One mused. He could practically feel the sincerity in the boy's words, although he himself could never truly understand the sentiment. The sheer thought of living one's life in the service of others was childish to him. But nonetheless, it was something that he could use to his advantage. My boy, what if I told you that there was a way for you to achieve your dreams, a way for you to gain a quirk, one that would allow you to save countless lives? That's impossible, Midoriya immediately countered. Impossible is a word used by those with small minds and weak wills. After all, we live in a world where the impossible happens on a daily basis. What do you mean? All for One gave the boy a smile that sent a chill down his spine before responding. Young Midoriya, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Would you like to know what my quirk is? What is it? I have quite the miraculous ability. My quirk allows me to bestow quirks onto others. I won't go into details because the explanation is rather complicated. However, if you so desire, I can endow you with a quirk that would give you more than a fighting chance. He explained, leaving out the parts that the boy didn't need to know. What? It's the truth, my boy. I've done so many times before, it would be as easy as drawing a breath. To say that Midoriya's mind was now reeling would be an understatement. Did a quirk like that really exist, one that could give power to others? That couldn't be true. Quirks themselves were genetic, the only way they could be passed down was through. There was no way that something like that could exist. If it did, you're lying. I assure you, I am not. I've had many friends over the years who I've blessed with this power, and something tells me that you would benefit greatly from my generosity. Against his better judgment, Midoriya decided to humor the man and his ramblings. A part of him knew that he was lying, but another was also curious enough to see if what he was telling him actually had some merit. If that was true, what kind of quirk would you give me? All for One stayed silent as he contemplated his response. He took a good look at the green-haired teen and considered the possibilities. In his collection were a myriad of quirks that he had accumulated over the years, ones powerful and useful depending on the situation. However, there was one that seemed to be the best fit. Tornadoes would be quite interesting to see, he thought. It had been almost 2 years since he acquired that woman's quirk, and as much as it annoyed him to admit it, he himself didn't have much use for it. Due to the damage that his body sustained during his fight with All Might, operating that particular power was troublesome. The strain on the parts of his brain that it activated used up too much stamina and caused migraines after only a few seconds. He briefly considered transferring it into one of his nomas, but those creatures lacked the higher-level brain function to actually use it. At least the ones that were currently available. But now that he thought about it, Midoriya might be a good candidate for it. Quirkless people were like stem cells. Their bodies were equivalent to blank slates that could easily be molded into something spectacular. His mother possessed a low-level telekinetic quirk, and if his hunch was correct, Midoriya should be able to adapt to it relatively easily. If not, then he could easily reclaim it. Or he might even be able to offer up the boy as a subject for the doctor's new high-end Namu project. With his mind made up, All for One stood up from his seat and began approaching the boy. Now listen well, my boy. What I plan to give you is quite the blessing. Many people out there would give anything for a power of this magnitude. As such, it comes with a price. A price. Midoriya unknowingly retreated further into the sofa. Don't worry, it's nothing major. All I ask is that you return the favor to me someday. Think of it as a transaction in which you will one day repay my kindness. You're serious? Why yes, what would I gain from lying to you? Don't know what to say. Well, do you accept this as the opportunity of the lifetime I am offering you? Paranoia and doubt were the only things that Midoriya was feeling at this moment. Could he be serious? Was this man really offering him a quirk, the one thing that he had been wishing for his entire life? No, there was no way. It just didn't seem possible. Something like this was way too good to be true. The favor he blurted out for reasons unknown to him. What's the favor? I simply ask that when I call upon you, you help me out in any future endeavors that would require your assistance. Someone like you would prove to be a valuable ally for my goals. Maybe it was the stress of the situation, or possibly even the fact that he was more desperate than what he realized. But all Midoriya could do was nod his head. If what this masked man was saying were true, then how could he not accept the offer? It was as if an angel had descended from the heavens to grant him a lifelong wish. Excellent. All for one smiled. And I know exactly what power would suit you the best. What Midoriya was cut off when the man placed his hand on the top of his head. He'll admit that even I have a difficult time controlling this one. But it should serve you quite well. What is? Don't worry, my boy, you will feel no pain. Go on and achieve your dream. And I'd do well to know that if you ever chose to return to me, I am here for you. At that exact same moment, Midoriya felt a surge of electricity rush through him. It was as if every cell in his body had been lit on fire and ignited with an energy that he couldn't really describe. Just as quickly as it came, the feeling passed, leaving him dazed and slightly dizzy. All the boy could do was look back up the man in confusion. He definitely felt different, in a way that he couldn't put into words. But for some reason, his mind felt lighter. Now All for One spoke. It will take some time for you to get used to that new power of yours. So be sure to train hard and work diligently. I have faith that you will become an excellent hero and an even more extraordinary ally. Ally, what do you? Once again, the world faded to darkness before the boy finished his sentence. And just like before, he was out cold in a matter of seconds. With his plan now in motion, All for One walked back over to his desk and pressed a button on the underside of the table. And in an instant, a well-dressed Kurogiri appeared before him. Master, the humanoid mist looked to the man before noticing the unconscious teenager on the sofa to his right. Take young Midoriya and drop him off somewhere dry. I've adjusted his memory to where he won't remember our little talk for now. What do you intend to do with him, sir? The boy needs time to develop his quirk. As he is now, he wouldn't be of much use. It will be some time before I'll need to reclaim him, so for now I'll allow him to roam free. He answered in a matter-of-fact tone. Yes, sir, I have some business on the other side of the prefecture. I'll drop him off along the way. Thank you, Kurogiri. The mist man simply bowed and used his quirk to create a portal around the boy. He himself knew not to ask too many questions when it came to his master's schemes. Whatever he was planning on doing to this boy, it must have been important if he was so gracious enough to keep him alive. With his servant now gone, All for One took a moment to admire his handiwork. He truly enjoyed when things worked out in his favor, especially when it happened in such an unexpected way. I have to thank you, All Might. You've provided me with quite the tool. What Midoriya didn't know, however, was that All for One took the liberty of making a few changes to his memory prior to Kurogiri taking him away. Nothing truly significant, but enough to further cement his plans in quite the interesting way. If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it. Become a police officer. They get crap because the heroes capture most of the villains. But it's a fine profession. A now deflated form of All Might said to Midoriya as he made his way to the door. It's not bad to have a dream, young man. Just make sure your dreams are attainable and realistic, understand? The next words that came out of the hero's mouth were truly the nail in the coffin for Midoriya's sanity. I know that you probably don't want to hear this, but there's just not a lot of things that quirkless people can do in today's society. Becoming a hero is just one example of that. I'm sorry, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbles, kid. Opportunities for people like you are limited and they are not that great. You're obsolete. In this world, power is everything. And those without power don't really have a lot of options. It'd be best for you to just accept that and stay out of people's way. And with that, All Might closed the door behind him, leaving behind a boy with a hollow mind and a now broken spirit. The sudden rush of information was a little too much for the boy's mind to handle. It was as if the missing piece of the puzzle had finally been put into its proper spot, patching up the incomplete fragment of his mind that plagued him for the last year. As the appendage uncoiled itself from his head, Midoriya quickly looked up at the man he now fully recognized. You, like I said before, I apologize for having to do that to you. A flurry of emotions washed over the boy's body, and the only thing he could do was drop his knees. MMY quirk.ug gave me my quirk. Yes, and as I said before, it was a power that would help you realize your goals. I don't know. Pick yourself up off the floor, my boy. A man of your brilliance doesn't look good on his knees. All for One said to him in a tone that would consider soft. Words failed Midoriya at that moment. He had no clue where to even begin. Standing before him was the man that gave him another chance at life. Someone who granted him a blessing that one could only dream of. Except this man, he was working for the League of Villains. Noid was the exact opposite. A group of criminals was working for him. It would be a shame if you got mixed up with Tamura's plans for the time being. So instead of having to deal with him, I've decided to let you spend some time with me. Why, he questioned. It's as I said before, the two of us have some catching up to do, and I'm particularly interested to hear about your progress. Takage House. It had barely been a full day since the attack on the camp, and Takage was arguably in worse condition than she was before. After being released from the hospital and giving her testimony to the police, the girl and her family returned to their home so that she could relax. Except relaxing was the absolute last thing on her mind. There had been no updates on the situation concerning Midoriya, and things didn't bode well. In her mind, the boy was being subjected to unspeakable tortures at the hands of those villains, and there was nothing that she could do about it. All she could do was sit and wait, hoping that any minute now she'd get some kind of alert that the green-haired boy had been saved. Takage looked at her still regenerating left arm, and the images of last night flashed before her mind. Those villains were more than willing to kill if given the chance. Her own injuries were enough proof of that. The man with the fire quirk was enough trouble as it was, but that psychotic blonde who stabbed her particularly rubbed her the wrong way, and the possibility that Midoriya couldn't use his quirk made the situation even more precarious. "Hot eyes is in killing me," the girl internally groaned as she threw herself back onto her bed. All of a sudden the door to her room opened, revealing her aunt. The woman paused for a second as she took in the sight of his youngest niece. Without a word, Kayama walked over and sat herself down on the edge of the girl's bed. "How are you holding up?" the R-rated heroine asked in a soft tone. "Him doing great," Takage said sarcastically. "Him stressed out, missing a third of my arm. Oh, and my boyfriend got kidnapped by some villains who are probably torturing him as we speak." Kayama fell silent as she tried to find the right words to say. It pained her to see her niece in such a state. She herself was used to situations such as this, being the experienced hero that she was. But this was Takage's first time ever dealing with these kinds of hardships. "Listen to me, Setsuna, everything is going to be just fine." She scooted a bit closer and patted the girl on the head. "Midoriya and Bakugo will be fine, I'm sure of it. And how can you know something like that? Those people are crazy. We don't even know what they wanted them for in the first place. I know how you feel, honestly. But in times like this it's best to keep a level head and trust that the heroes are doing everything that they can to bring them home safely. Think about it, would those villains really go through all that trouble just to hurt them? Probably not," the green-haired girl conceded. "But that doesn't make me feel any better." Once again, the heroine took a moment to consider her next words. She was accustomed to doing everything that she could to pacify someone in times of crisis. But it was a whole different story when a person you care about is the one who's been hurt. Against her better judgment, Kayama decided to relay some information that would put the girl's mind at ease. "I doubt it would. But listen, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but the heroes are planning an operation to get them back tonight. If everything goes well, we'll have Midoriya back in a few hours." What the girl shot up and stared directly into her aunt's blue eyes. Was she serious? They were going to get Midoriya back tonight? This was the best thing that she's heard all day. "Since I'm not part of the operation, I don't have all the details. But All Might is going with them, and they'll have more than a few heavy hitters to make sure that they bring him back safely." A sense of relief washed over Takage's body after hearing this information. She trusted her aunt's words more than anything. So if she was certain that they'd be getting her boyfriend back in one piece, that was more than good enough for her. For now at least. "Would it want you any good to just sit in here and mope around until then? Come now, Yuri is almost done with dinner and you need to eat so that your arm can finish regenerating. We're having an extra big helping of yakitori." Fine, the girl sighed as she willed herself out of her bed to join the rest of her family in the dining room. But even with the knowledge that she had now, she couldn't help but worry about how her green bean was doing. "God, I hope he'll be okay." A few hours later, with the confirmation from Ragdoll concerning the whereabouts of the two students, the operation to retrieve Midoriya and Bakugo was already underway. Time was of the essence with this, and everyone knew the stakes. Even with the limited information that they had to work with, the heroes and police had put together a surefire plan that was both quick and efficient. Team Alpha, consisting of All Might, Blizzard, Edgeshot, Kamui Woods, Gran Torino, Tsukachi and a few other officers, were going to assault what they believed to be the League of Villains' main base of operations, which was an unassuming building where Bakugo was currently being held. During their brief scouting mission, Ragdoll and Tiger were able to spot a man who fit the description of the one known as Dabai, along with another who they knew as Twice. While on the other end of the equation, Team Bravo, whose ranks included Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Tiger, Gang Orca, Mount Lady and their own unit of officers, were going to make a move on another building in the factory district of the ward. This was where Midoriya was being held, and thanks to earlier reports they were able to identify a few of the Namu creatures in some sort of stasis tanks. The original plan was to have All Might and Endeavor on the same team, but due to the number 2 heroes' protest he was switched out with Blizzard. As the group of heroes were mere seconds away from making their move, Best Jeanist waited for the signal to begin. And luckily, he didn't have to wait long before giving the green light to Mount Lady to destroy the outer wall. Inside the building, All for One was more than ready for their hasty attack to begin. The security cameras he placed all around the block had alerted him to what was going on outside, and he was admittedly impressed with how quickly his foes had sniffed him out. He would have preferred to have a bit more time with his pawn, but the rest of their conversation would have to wait for later. "It seems that we have some visitors." The man spoke as he put the finishing touches on securing his respiratory mask to his head. "What's going on?" A now recovered Midoriya looked at the man in confusion. Even with his injuries now healed thanks to one of the man's quirks, the boy was still wary of trying to break out of his prison, especially since he had no clue as to where he was. "Well, continue that little discussion of ours later, my boy. But for now I require your assistance." "What do you mean?" Without any warning, All for One placed his hand on the boy's head and Midoriya's mind suddenly became clouded. It was almost as if someone plunged his brain into a bucket of ice-cold water. Obedience. In the blink of an eye, the outer wall of the building came crashing down thanks to Mount Lady. The pro heroes on the scene were quick to round up the Namu in the area and immediately began searching for their objective. "Keep those things under control and get the transport ready," Endeavor ordered. "That boy has to be here somewhere. These things are disgusting." Mount Lady scrunched her face at the sight of the ugly creatures she was holding within her grasp. Suddenly, the air around them grew stale and the sound of footsteps steadily approaching them caused everyone to tighten up and get into their fighting stances. My, you heroes sure have created quite the mess here. It's going to take quite a bit of time for me to clean this up. An ominous voice spoke to them. Are you with the League gang? Orca questioned the shadowy figure. All for one didn't respond. Instead, he kept on walking towards them, and with each step the air grew colder. Stop there, don't move. Deciding not to wait for an invitation, Best Jeanist quickly sprang into action and activated his quirk. In a fraction of a second, the tall figure was trapped within a binding made from his own clothing. Who are you? Endeavor shouted. How troublesome. All for one said in a calm tone that almost sounded amused. As easy as it would be for me to break these constraints myself, I think that I should let my young friend here stretch his legs a bit. He's got quite a bit of pent-up aggression and it would be good for him to blow off some steam. What are you talking about? After the words came out of Tiger's mouth, another figure appeared right next to the first. Unfortunately for the heroes, their brief hesitation at the sight of this newcomer would prove to be a costly mistake. Hellstorm.